Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. When this guy came face to face with the deadliest mercenary of her generation, who had just finished brutally cutting several enemies into pieces, he challenged her to a duel without a second thought. The other mercenaries froze in complete disbelief, because they all knew the young master was nowhere near her level. But the young lord was nothing like the person everyone believed him to be. The mercenary drew her blade first, and a heartbeat later, he unsheathed his own. She made the first move, putting everything she had into a single strike. But much to her surprise, the young lord casually parried the attack. Without giving her a single second to recover, he instantly went on the offensive, and with one flawless swing, shattered her sword in half. She froze where she stood, as his blade rested against her throat. But skills like those didn't come out of nowhere. Just a short while ago, he was the kingdom's most famous mercenary. He took on countless missions that no one else would ever dare accept. But after his final assignment, his commander betrayed him, and beheaded him right there on the battlefield. But instead of dying, he suddenly opened his eyes again, only to find a complete stranger standing beside him. The person stirs, sees the boy, and weakly asks who he is. Still disoriented, they raise a hand as if testing whether they are truly awake. The attendant panics and tries even harder to rouse them, desperate for a proper response. Instead, the newly awakened person reflexively slaps him across the face, shocking them both. The victim can only process the absurdity of being hit while trying to help. Flustered and teary-eyed, the boy composes himself and pleads for the confused patient to get hold of themselves. Lucian is abruptly roused in an opulent bedroom as someone addresses him as the young master. Still disoriented, he can barely process being called that at all. As he sits up in bed, an immediate sense of wrongness settles over him. The unease sharpens when he looks at himself, and realizes this body does not feel like his own. He remembers having a ruined, broken body, so the healthy one before him makes no sense. Even his hand is smooth and pristine instead of scarred, confirming the mismatch. At the same time, a servant is sobbing against the bed as if Lucian has just survived a crisis. Lucian is baffled that this stranger is weeping over him with such desperate relief. The servant's grief is so intense that he can hardly compose himself. Once he does, he gushes that Lucian's survival spared him from thinking his master had died. He adds that Lucian's death would not only have ruined him personally but also brought disgrace on the household. Lucian can only stare, unable to make sense of the servant's rambling loyalty. What troubles him more is that none of this fits his memory, because he knows he truly died. He recalls a death so final and violent that survival should have been impossible. That certainty leaves him wondering how his mind could still be intact at all. He falls silent and starts piecing together the impossible situation. From what he can see, he reaches one unavoidable conclusion. He has entered someone else's complete body and risen in another person's place. Checking the mirror, he finds a strikingly handsome noble face staring back at him. The reflection confirms he now inhabits a body that carries beauty and status he never had. He studies the room and his appearance further while the servant waits behind him. Everything about the body and surroundings radiates aristocratic privilege. He concludes he has landed in the life of a wealthy noble heir. Needing facts, he decides to question the servant directly. He addresses the servant by name, Hans, and begins testing what he knows. His first question is the year, catching Hans off guard. When Hans answers Imperial Year 846, Lucian is shaken. That date means he has returned to 15 years before the day he died. Though he cannot explain the phenomenon, he accepts that there must be a reason and forces himself to stay practical. He immediately turns to the more urgent problem of identifying whose life he now occupies. His cold tone terrifies Hans before the real interrogation even begins. Lucian first rebukes Hans for touching his master's body so casually, reasserting the hierarchy of noble and servant. Then he presses him. If the rules have not changed, Hans must answer plainly. Lucian demands the name of the person he has become. The question stuns Hans, who realizes his master truly seems different. Panicking, Hans bows deeply and begs forgiveness for his earlier familiarity. He finally reveals that this body belongs to Lucian Valdec, third son of the great house Valdec. The name hits him like a shock. At once he connects it to the Valdec crest and understands exactly which family this is. He recognizes the Valdecs as one of the Empire's most powerful houses. Their lineage is a pillar of the Empire, old, prestigious, and politically indispensable. They stand among the Emperor's closest allied clans, with influence at the center of power. In practical terms, House Valdec rivals even the imperial family in authority. Lucian knows this family well, and not from a distance. 15 years earlier, he had lived at the Valdec estate itself. Back then he served there for years as a guard. So after waking in this era, he first thought he had merely returned to his old post, only to discover he was inside the body of the family's third son. The absurdity of that reversal leaves him grimly amused. But beneath that reaction lies a lifetime of bitterness, because his low birth once made him endure endless humiliation. He remembers a life so degraded that even in death he walked alone like a discarded outcast. A bloodied hooded man reflects that his enemies have handed him the chance to prove how far he could have risen if he had been given the same opportunities as the nobles around him. As dark power surges around him, he vows that instead of disappearing quietly, he will force them to witness what he becomes. A blond young man accepts that challenge and resolves to open his eyes to the truth of his own future. He throws open the window to a bright new day, embracing the life before him rather than the confinement behind him. With calm determination, Lucian decides he will find out how high he can climb and how he intends to live from now on. That resolve brings him into the Grand Valdec estate, the center of the noble world he now has to navigate. As he walks the halls with his attendant Hans, Lucian notes that even among all the places he saw as a mercenary, this duchy stands apart. The mansion's overwhelming luxury confirms just how powerful the Valdec family truly is. Lucian quickly concludes that this is not a place he can treat casually, and that he must adapt to it as fast as possible. But while he studies the household, he also notices the servants studying him in return. Their whispers make it clear that the staff can hardly believe the secluded young master is really standing before them. The gossip spreads that he has been shut away for so long that many barely remember him. Lucian realizes the attention on him is not ordinary curiosity, but the result of his long absence, making him almost a stranger in his own home. When he questions Hans, the boy reminds him that after more than a year of isolation, such reactions are inevitable. Lucian recalls that he had been locked away alone for a year and 2 months, cut off from everyone. He inwardly rejects the idea that any sane noble would choose such a life, suspecting something deeper was wrong. The rigid atmosphere of the estate convinces him that someone raised under this household's discipline could never have acted so freely without cause. He remembers that this is the home of Grand Duke Sigmund, the Iron Pillar who has long protected the empire. That reputation makes the family's internal contradictions feel even more suspicious. Lucian reasons that a father like Sigmund would not simply watch his son waste away in a room unless there were a serious reason. He narrows the possibilities to two: either the original Lucian had effectively been abandoned, or some special circumstance had made him a burden to the Grand Duke. Deciding he needs more information before facing Sigmund, Lucian plans to avoid the Grand Duke for as long as possible. That plan collapses the moment a formal voice confirms that the report of his recovery was true. The speaker reveals himself as Edwin, the head butler, who is openly delighted to see Lucian standing again after a year. Lucian recognizes him at once and realizes he has run into one of the most important men in the household. Edwin's status is immense. Once a hostage from a hostile family, he earned such trust that he now oversees the Valdec household's affairs. In effect, Edwin is Grand Duke Sigmund's right hand. Lucian immediately understands the danger, because this is exactly the kind of person most likely to notice that he does not truly belong here. Still, he clings to one useful fact: Edwin has not seen Lucian in person for a full year either. So Lucian decides to survive the encounter by imitating the most impeccably noble man he knows. He models himself after the ideal of aristocratic composure he has observed before. With that mask in place, he politely thanks head butler Edwin for his concern. He follows with a warm, elegant smile and claims his condition has improved greatly. Lucian smoothly explains that he came out to inspect neglected family matters and considers himself fortunate to have met the head butler so soon. He then probes for information by casually asking whether anything troublesome has happened within the family. Edwin answers that the Valdec family remains as stable as ever and seems relieved that Lucian himself appears unchanged. That response reassures Lucian that his act is working, and he concludes there is no immediate crisis to fear. Maintaining the performance, he says he can return to his room with peace of mind now that he has confirmed all is well. Just as Lucian tries to withdraw, Edwin stops him with sudden formality. The head butler asks him to come back at once instead of leaving. Then Edwin delivers the blow Lucian most wanted to avoid. The Grand Duke wishes to see him immediately. Lucian's composure cracks as he realizes his attempt to delay this meeting has failed. Soon he is brought before Grand Duke Sigmund in the Duke's office, standing alone before the man who rules this house. Sigmund acknowledges him without warmth, making clear that this is an interrogation, not a reunion. Lucian braces himself in silence, aware that one mistake here could expose everything. The Grand Duke addresses him by full name, sharpening the pressure before the real question arrives. Instead of asking after his health, Sigmund coldly demands to know why Lucian is still alive. The sheer hostility of the question reveals that father and son are bound by something far darker than estrangement. Shaken but trying to hold his ground, Lucian asks what Sigmund means by that. Sigmund answers that he had intended to let the matter pass, implying Lucian's continued survival is itself an offense he was prepared to ignore. A hidden voice condemns the young man for using his mother's death to abandon his responsibilities and behave like a spoiled child. The accusation hardens as his father declares that the boy has gone too far, not only hiding himself away for over a year but doing so as a form of protest. He is further denounced for treating even his own life carelessly and attempting to destroy himself. The son is shaken by the severity of the judgment, and struggles to understand how anyone could see his actions that way. A memory surfaces of his bedridden state, with a caretaker nearby as he clung to the bed in distress. He realizes his desperate crying had been misunderstood as childish tantrum rather than the aftermath of something far worse. Trying to correct the situation, he hesitantly addresses the Grand Duke as father, and insists there has been a serious misunderstanding. His father cuts him off and orders him to finally reveal the thoughts he has been hiding instead of continuing this silence. The Grand Duke bluntly states what he believes happened. the son used his frail body and his own hands to force down sleeping pills. Hearing the exact method spoken aloud jolts the young man into stunned recognition. He suddenly remembers the identity tied to this body, Lucian, the third son of the Grand Duke family. The missing name returns fully to him, anchoring the life he has inherited. He recalls that 15 years earlier, while serving as a guard in this house, he had only known the family from a distance. Back then, Lucian was already dead. The family was ruled by Grand Duke Sigmund Waldeck. Sigmund had 4 sons by different mothers, making the household divided from the start. During his years of service, he encountered the other sons and their mothers repeatedly, but Lucian and Lucian's mother remained absent from his experience. In fact, he realizes he never once met Lucian or his mother face to face. He pieces together the old explanation. Lucian's mother died young from illness, and Lucian himself died not long after for reasons no one clearly knew. Lucian's death had been treated as a quiet, sealed-off tragedy. At the time, he had assumed the mother and son were simply sickly and left it at that, never suspecting a deeper cause. Now he reconstructs the truth. Losing his mother and standing on unstable ground within the family must have crushed Lucian while he was still a child. Lucian eventually turned to sleeping pills, not quite enough to guarantee death, but enough to cry out for someone to notice him. Instead of a deliberate suicide, it had been a year of seclusion by a body too weakened to recover and too fragile to endure the drugs. In the end, Lucian simply died there, his plea for help mistaken for self-destruction. Understanding this, the young man realizes the Grand Duke's harsh rebuke came from a father who had not seen his son in a year, and was now facing the aftermath. He recognizes that beneath the title and authority, Sigmund's anger comes from a parent's turmoil. Even so, the Grand Duke remains stern, and the son senses that compassion will not guide what happens next. He concludes that this is no moment to expect consideration for his feelings. Instead, he reads the situation as the edge of a cliff. One wrong answer could destroy everything. The pressure feels absolute, like a final ultimatum closing around him. He imagines his future cracking apart beneath his feet if he missteps now. He understands that even a single unsatisfactory word could cost him the life he has only just gained. He pictures one possible punishment: being forced into priesthood and exiled from worldly life forever. He remembers too clearly how miserable his previous life had been, full of danger and near death, and refuses to lose this second chance. That hard-won future becomes something he is determined to protect at any cost. So he decides he will not let another family's private tragedy ruin the precious life he has managed to obtain. Accepting the invitation to speak, he chooses his words carefully and begins with obedience. He first admits that his conduct has stained the Waldeck name and caused his father deep concern. Then he offers a formal, sincere apology. He goes further, taking full responsibility and declaring that he will accept whatever punishment is imposed. The Grand Duke remains unmoved, warning that apologies cannot undo what has already happened. He coldly suggests that if the son truly understands that, perhaps he should simply accept his punishment without protest. But the young man quietly challenges that logic, asking whether the past being irreversible means it must rule everything that follows. He rejects the idea of tying the life he barely salvaged from death to that past forever. With that resolve, he plants himself firmly and commits to his next move. He declares that from now on he intends to live diligently for the future ahead. Then he shifts the appeal from ruler to parent, asking not as the Grand Duke but as his father for a single word of encouragement. That request forces Sigmund to confront the issue not as a judge but as a parent faced with a repentant child. The moment settles on a simple truth. Between father and son, the proper duty is not only punishment under law, but the willingness to receive a child who sincerely returns. The butler is stunned, unable to reconcile what he is seeing with the timid Lucian he remembers. As he studies the room's changed atmosphere, he realizes the balance of power around young Master Lucian has shifted. He recalls Lucian as someone who always shrank back, and the contrast unsettles him. Now Lucian stands composed and self-possessed, forcing everyone to question whether this is truly the same person. The Grand Duke reacts with a low, displeased sound, signaling that Lucian's new bearing has caught his attention as well. Lucian meets that scrutiny without flinching, calm enough to make his father's authority feel less absolute. The Duke rebukes him for speaking too boldly and presuming to lecture a parent. His irritation shows that Lucian has already pushed past the role expected of him. Claiming age and experience, the Duke frames himself as someone too seasoned to be fooled easily. Lucian answers with practiced humility, masking his intent behind courtesy. Behind the polite expression, he is pleased that his approach is working. He realizes that acting weaker and more agreeable than he truly is lets him steer the exchange. The Duke unexpectedly approves, preferring a dangerous, spirited son over one who lives in fear. He admits this revived Lucian resembles the heir he once respected more than the broken boy who returned. Since Lucian brought up diligence, the Duke decides to test him directly by asking what he plans to do next. Lucian's first priority is simple and practical: restore his ruined body. After that, he intends to reclaim the strength he once lacked. His resolve centers on mastering the sword rather than remaining helpless. In his mind, that means becoming someone capable of fighting back with real force. He states plainly that he will properly learn swordsmanship. The Duke questions the claim, and Lucian lightly admits that his frail body must be dealt with before any training can begin. When Lucian jokes that eating and sleeping well might somehow solve it, the Duke sees both evasiveness and nerve. He acknowledges Lucian's talent for saying just enough without revealing too much. Rather than decide whether Lucian is sincere, the Duke chooses to watch and judge by results. He orders the butler to give Lucian that support again, making the command immediate and official. The butler is told to provide practical help instead of empty words, because usefulness matters more than sentiment now. Lucian is briefly thrown off, not understanding what specific support his father means. The butler accepts the order and promises to arrange it at once. Lucian's confusion deepens as he tries to figure out what is coming. The answer arrives outside the estate, where something substantial is being brought in for him. Servants carry a heavy chest, suggesting the Duke's response is far more concrete than Lucian expected. When the chest is opened, it reveals a hoard of coins and valuables. Lucian is handed a ridiculous amount of money, enough to leave even onlookers stunned. He quickly understands this is how the family operates. Support is measured in resources, not affection. Learning that this fortune is only 1 month's allowance, he immediately starts calculating what it can buy him. The sheer amount excites him because it gives him a real chance to act on his plans. With that funding, he decides he can create an elixir to rebuild his body. That decision leads the story toward the greenhouse, where the ingredients and memories tied to the family gather. Later, the Duke walks there with the butler, still turning Lucian's transformation over in his mind. The butler notes that this was the late Grand Duchess's cherished place, hinting that Lucian's change may be connected to her. The Duke realizes Lucian's sudden interest in coming here after so long must mean something significant has shifted. The butler concludes that young Master Lucian changed because he finally stepped out of the shadow of fear. He ties that change to Lucian's mother, believing the greenhouse and her memory gave him a reason to stop yielding. The Duke continues deeper inside, listening as the butler reinterprets the boy he thought he knew. The butler bluntly admits that the old Lucian had always seemed pitiably weak. He describes a child who constantly watched others in fear and never carried himself with confidence. Even the slightest harshness used to make Lucian cower and complain like a frightened animal. Because that behavior was nothing like his mother's, the Duke had long assumed Lucian only resembled her in appearance. But the butler suddenly senses that the Duke's judgment is changing for the first time. The Duke admits to himself that he may have been wrong about Lucian all along. An elder reports that the child they observed showed no trace of wariness, and carried himself with unusual resolve and confidence. He explains that Lucian has become deeply absorbed in thought after inheriting his bloodline and the burden tied to his master's legacy. The master withholds judgment, deciding that the boy's true worth still has to be proven. He adds that the trials ahead cannot be solved through advice alone and must be faced directly. The servant then reveals a complication that could disrupt those expectations. Funds meant to support Lucian's studies have been leaked outside the household, confirming financial sabotage. The investigation points to the second young master, Isolde Velk, as the one behind it. The culprit removed the steward who had been helping the boy and replaced him with his own man, exposing a calculated effort to keep Lucian under watch. Though he understands the resentment driving this attack, the master decides the matter should not be turned into open intervention. He refuses to take direct action, reasoning that a child with too much support can lose the chance to build his own strength. He dismisses the scheme as petty and notes that even this setback is only partial repayment for Lucian's failure to come to his senses over the past year. Instead, he chooses to watch whether the boy can overcome the problem himself, seeing that as the first real reason to expect anything from him. Even if bloodline and destiny may decide much, he believes some doors still open only to those who act with their own hands. A few days later, attention shifts to what Lucian does once the support is cut off. The servants whisper that he has shut himself in his room again, leaving everyone uneasy about what he is planning. Lucian emerges with fierce determination, clearly having settled on a course of action. He realizes it has already been 3 days since the money stopped coming, and the pressure of the situation fully hits him. Still, he acts on his claim that the meeting with the Grand Duke restored his support, and begins moving valuables. A chest of coins and jewels reveals that he has gathered a substantial amount of wealth to work with. Given the strained relationship involved, obtaining that backing could not have been easy, and the weight of what he did lingers on him. Even so, he steels himself with the belief that he needs real courage if he is going to move forward instead of remaining trapped in grief. He forces himself past his sadness and commits to acting, however awkwardly. As the money spills through his hands, his focus shifts from embarrassment to calculation. A sudden realization strikes him that this amount is enough to attempt something far bigger. Greed and excitement take over as he sees a genuine opportunity in front of him. Back in his room, he immediately turns that excitement into preparation. He pauses to steady himself, aware that what he is about to do will look reckless. Trusting the servant guarding his door to keep others out, he begins working in secret. He starts with alchemical tools and materials that someone of his rank would normally never have touched. His target is a rare ingredient known as moonlight herb, a plant that grows only under moonlight and is not yet widely valued. Though buying it consumed nearly all of his allowance, he treats that expense as the foundation of a future fortune. He tells Hans there is still time, and orders him to buy up as much moonlight herb as possible. Lucian knows the order sounds insane, but he is acting on knowledge no one else has. He predicts that within a single year the herb's value will explode. In his mind, the price will rise not just tenfold but more than 20 times over. The scale of that imagined profit leaves him nearly overwhelmed with exhilaration. He becomes convinced the market is about to skyrocket beyond reason. From there, his thoughts move to the Alchemist Guild, which he now sees as bold enough to trigger the change. At the time, success would have been uncertain, but he knows they still gathered every moonlight herb they could find across the empire. That reckless sweep of supply was tied to experiments that consumed the herb in large quantities. For the guild, it was a gamble that put its entire future at stake. Yet Lucian recognizes that their audacity is exactly what made the coming breakthrough possible. That breakthrough was the creation of an unprecedented elixir later known across the empire as the God's Nectar. The name was so arrogant it nearly brought blasphemy charges down on them, but they pushed forward anyway. Once its effects became undeniable, outrage vanished and was replaced by universal praise. Remembering that outcome, Lucian smiles with confidence in the path he has chosen. What makes this discovery so explosive is that it challenges a belief accepted for over 1,000 years, that a martial artist's limits are fixed at birth. The old doctrine held that innate nature, destiny, and constitution could never be changed. Lucian knows a single development shattered that certainty completely. That development was nectar, the substance that overturned the Empire's understanding of human potential. He explains that a rare nectar can forcibly awaken even someone with no talent into a useful swordsman. But he stresses that this bottle is far beyond the crude mass-produced version and retains the original formula's true potency. In his view, nothing surpasses this nectar when the goal is to raise a body's strength to an extreme level. He tells Lucian to consider himself fortunate to be receiving it. He recalls that the Empire once banned the nectar after the Alchemist Guild judged its power to disrupt balance too dangerously. As a result, the recipe disappeared from the world, though he clearly means to reveal an exception. He admits he reconstructed something close to the original, not perfect but still effective enough for his purposes. Without hesitation, he drinks the nectar himself. What matters now, he reflects, is how human power is transformed into mana. He focuses on mana itself as the key to what comes next. He understands mana as a force circulated through the body and refined by training, with each person's output depending on how well that circulation works. Using the nectar's power, he forces open the blocked internal pathways that had prevented proper flow. He immediately notices something impossible. Despite newly opened paths, he feels none of the pain or resistance a normal body should suffer. He realizes mana is spreading through him as if his body has always known exactly where it belongs. The flow surges forward with unnatural ease and speed. Since even infants usually have imperfect circulation, this smoothness shocks him. He begins to suspect his body belongs to a rare class unlike ordinary people. That suspicion sharpens into the thought that he may be one of the so-called geniuses. The scene shifts back to the estate after this inner breakthrough. Inside the mansion, Hans waits anxiously outside Lucian's room. When the door finally opens, Hans rushes to meet him in obvious relief. Even before speaking, Hans's panic shows how long and tense the wait has been. Lucian casually asks whether anything happened while he was shut away. Hans bursts out, calling him young master and demanding to know if he realizes how long he had been inside. He breaks down further, hurt that Lucian ignored his calls and refused to let anyone enter. Hans admits he was genuinely afraid that something terrible had happened. He sums it up simply. He was worried sick over Lucian. Lucian answers that concern with a calm, faintly amused smile. Behind that smile, he studies Hans carefully and notices the servant's instinctive unease. Hans hesitates, unsure whether the person before him is still the same Lucian. Though he knows it should be his master, he cannot shake the feeling that something fundamental has changed. Lucian recognizes that Hans has sensed the difference because no one has observed him more closely. He concludes that Hans's familiarity with him makes the change impossible to hide completely. Still, Lucian judges that outward changes will remain limited for now because the body itself still needs time and nourishment. So although the transformation is not yet obvious on the surface, he knows it has already begun. What is truly changing is inside him, where his core is evolving rapidly. He is certain that the pace of that internal growth is extraordinary. Lucian attributes this impossible progress to his own innate constitution. That certainty hardens into confidence about what he can become. He sees his potential as something vast enough to stand on the same level as the figures who shape the world. With the right moves, he believes he can escape his miserable life as a mercenary within a year. Turning back to Hans, he decides the loyal servant deserves repayment for that devotion. He grabs Hans and declares that rewards and punishments must be clear, signaling that he is about to make a serious offer. He warns Hans to listen carefully because he will only say this once. Then he urges him to stake everything he owns and can borrow on Lucian without holding back. Lucian guarantees that doing so will make Hans rich enough to rise to the top. He frames it as an invitation to ascend together, while Hans can only stare in bewilderment. Lucian jokes that Hans should not be jealous, because one day he will have muscles like his too. A week later, the story moves to a quiet forest. There, Lucian and Hans travel together along a woodland path, suggesting Lucian has already begun acting on his new ambitions. Lucian walks through the woods with Hans, outwardly relaxed in a way he clearly isn't used to. He marvels that life has suddenly become so easy and comfortable. He recalls being served lavish meals on a fixed schedule without effort on his part. Even his sleeping arrangements are handled for him, reinforcing how thoroughly he is being cared for. The sheer softness of that new routine still feels unreal to him. Freed from the daily struggle to survive, Lucian has finally had room to think. With his recovery no longer consuming everything, he turns to the one unresolved issue still bothering him. That lingering concern is the identity of Jake, the guard tied to the Valdek family. He remembers that, at this point in time, Jake should have been serving that household. But after checking with the captain of the guards, Lucian confirmed that no one matching Jake's description was there. Worse, the post Lucian once worked beside had already been filled by a complete stranger. He tries to convince himself that this is actually better. Meeting Jake now would only distract him and serve no real purpose. More honestly, Lucian admits he cannot bear facing the person he used to be and the shame tied to that past. Hans watches in confusion as Lucian physically works through his embarrassment and indecision. When Hans addresses him, Lucian snaps back to the present. Hans nervously asks if Lucian truly intends to enter the training grounds he once swore never to visit again. Hans reminds him that Lucian had hated that place enough to vow he would never return. Lucian is baffled until Hans insists he absolutely said it. Hans explains that after the second young master gave Lucian a brutal time during training, Lucian declared he would never come back. From Hans's reaction, Lucian pieces together what must have happened. Swordsmanship was mandatory for a Grand Duke's children, and the second young master had likely used that obligation as cover for abuse. Lucian realizes the training hall became a place where fear and violence were deliberately beaten into his younger self. That cruelty was meant to make sure he would never willingly set foot there again. Understanding that, Lucian reassures Hans there is nothing to fear now. He dismisses the old terror as something that belongs to the past, though Hans is still unsettled. Lucian steps forward with firm resolve instead of retreating. He reminds Hans that Hans himself had urged him to follow his own lead, and now Lucian intends to do exactly that. Inside the training hall, two attendants are already discussing the shocking news of Lucian's arrival. One can hardly believe Lucian really came there of his own will. The other confirms it, and adds that Lucian is even inspecting the hall with his personal servant beside him. A red-haired man reacts with contempt, unable to understand why that frightened boy would dare return. Then he realizes Lucian's visit may actually work in his favor, because the boy cannot have forgotten what happened there. He immediately orders that this be reported to his superior. With cruel satisfaction, he expects Lucian to be thoroughly broken by the time that superior arrives. Meanwhile, Lucian enters the hall and is struck by how different the place is from what he had hoped. Instead of dread, he notices practical advantages, plentiful spare weapons and equipment that can be used freely. He also sees a vast open space suited for unrestricted, serious training. The scale of the facility amazes him, especially knowing it belongs to a single noble household. That realization turns bitter as he thinks that, with a place like this, more of his former comrades might have survived. Before he can dwell on it, the red-haired man appears and confirms he was not mistaken about Lucian's presence. He approaches with false politeness, acting surprised that the third young master has really come back. He pointedly recalls how Lucian once fled this hall after a lesson with Jordy and Can, never looking back. He likens that memory to a helpless lamb being chased by a wolf, making clear he enjoyed Lucian's fear. Then he turns that cruelty toward Hans, suggesting Lucian must still be terrified of this place if he needed to drag a servant in with him. Hans shrinks under the insult, made painfully aware that he is being dismissed as weak in a hall meant for warriors. The man finally introduces himself as Hendrik, greeting Lucian with the smug familiarity of someone who expects old wounds to reopen. He presses further, reminding Lucian of the day a year ago when he stood beside the second young master and demanding that he remember it. The memory surfaces, Lucian standing in the arena with a wooden weapon, trapped in a moment Hendrik calls enjoyable. Hendrik lingers in that recollection with obvious pleasure, revealing just how much he savors Lucian's past suffering. A blonde young noble watches the situation with a cold, amused confidence, already treating the confrontation as entertainment. He singles out the knight before him as a target and decides this encounter will be enjoyable. The narration frames knights as the embodiment of honor and loyalty within noble society. They are raised from childhood to master combat and proper conduct, shaped for service from an early age. Only after proving themselves in battle or missions are they formally acknowledged. That recognition comes when their liege grants them the title, completing their purpose as retainers. The blonde youth dismisses that ideal entirely, seeing knights as little more than expensive ornaments for nobles. From that contempt, he reaches the reason for his hostility. To him, knights are expected to repay the wealth and status their lord gives them with obedience and deference. So when one carries himself proudly instead of submissively, the youth sees it as intolerable arrogance. He assumes the knight's low standing in the family is why the retainers dare treat him so lightly. The real pressure behind the insult becomes clear. A stronger backer stands behind the mustached retainer, emboldening him. That support lets the retainer act boldly, confident he will not face consequences alone. The blonde youth decides that, left to his own will, he would answer this insolence harshly. He imagines breaking the man through brutal training and intimidation rather than letting the insult pass. The fantasy turns vicious, showing how badly he wants to humiliate the retainer in return. But he reins himself in because the Grand Duke would never permit such reckless punishment. He recognizes that a knight remains a military asset to the family, and punishing one without procedure would only create conflict. So he concludes that now is not yet the right moment to strike. Instead, he hides his intent behind a casual excuse, claiming he only visits the training hall to make up for lost time and learn sword forms. He presents himself as a late starter trying to catch up after a wasted year, even asking if that should not be acceptable for a third young master. The mustached retainer answers with open mockery, treating the request as absurdly overdue. He explains that once someone passes 15, sword training is effectively over for them. According to him, sword forms are a secret legacy tied to ancient wisdom and the cultivation of mana. Without access to that inner path, merely copying the motions has no real value. Since he claims the path of mana closes at 16, he insists the youth would gain nothing but empty physical exercise. He reduces sword forms to a meaningless dance for anyone who missed the proper age. Then he twists the knife further by suggesting the young master should abandon ambition and become a dancer instead. He says that would at least save time and help the boy find the role that supposedly suits him. He keeps piling on alternatives, implying the youth would be better off gardening than pursuing knighthood. As the insult lands, the blonde youth falls silent outwardly, though the pause hides calculation rather than defeat. Mistaking that silence for surrender, the retainer smugly congratulates himself for leaving the boy speechless. Privately, the youth immediately recognizes the man's argument as a lie, since the path of mana does not close at 16 at all. He realizes the retainer is simply exploiting his presumed ignorance, and that the public humiliation has already served its purpose. In the retainer's mind, the scene is now complete, a helpless fool crushed by his own ignorance. He savors the image of a weak heir too frightened to answer back. To him, this only proves the boy is still the same pathetic figure he was a year ago. But while listening, the blonde youth quietly tests his own hand and notes that something about his condition differs from what he previously understood. When another attendant questions the retainer's claim, the man doubles down and insists the mana path closes around 15 or 16, so there is no issue with saying it now. The youth lowers his head and lets them believe he accepts it, while one of the onlookers reaches toward him and assumes the matter is obvious common sense. Certain he has won, the retainer decides to end the exchange before any challenge can arise. The blonde youth finally speaks in agreement, invoking even his brother's authority to make his next move sound sincere. Then he seizes a younger attendant by the head and abruptly declares that the Valdec family must be doomed. He forces the startled boy to face the accusation, pressing him to admit the same conclusion. The outburst turns theatrical as he laments that even a servant knows more than he does, making the family state sound disgraceful. He escalates the performance, crying that his own ignorance has robbed him of opportunities and pretending to be overwhelmed by grief. As the attendants try to steady him, he keeps ranting that his brother possesses an empty skull, turning the insult into a public family scandal. He refuses to be calmed, arguing that if the knight's words are true, then the family is clearly in crisis and cannot ignore it. With a sharp smile, he corners the younger attendant and demands to know whether the boy truly means to deceive him as the son of their liege. The confrontation ends with the three of them locked in place, the blonde youth having flipped the mockery into a dangerous accusation that now threatens the household itself. Sir Hendrik is caught off guard when the young master accuses him of trying to deceive him. He immediately retreats, begging that his words be ignored and blaming the situation for making him speak rashly. But the blonde young master sees through him at once and treats the excuse as an obvious lie from the Valdec family. Pressed directly, Hendrik can only admit that the accusation is essentially true. The young master decides that such dishonesty from a knight cannot be dismissed lightly. He coldly resolves to make Hendrik pay for it. What began as a slight is now turned into a lesson about the cost of speaking carelessly to him. He addresses Hendrik formally and makes clear that the matter is far more serious than Hendrik understands. He explains that if Hendrik had merely insulted him, he might have let it pass. He even frames the contempt shown toward him as something he could blame on his own failures and wasted effort. So personal humiliation alone gives him no reason to retaliate. What he cannot ignore is Hendrik, a knight and supposed pillar of the Grand Duchy, spreading false understanding and suppressing talent. He argues that this kind of ignorance would weaken the military strength of the Valdec knights. Worse, he says, that weakness would endanger the people under their protection. By tying Hendrik's conduct to the honor of the Valdec name, he presents himself as righteously outraged rather than personally offended. Hendrik starts to realize the accusation has been elevated into a grave political issue. The young master warns him to brace himself for the consequences. He declares that he will report everything to his father and demand an internal crackdown. Hendrik panics, unable to understand why the once timid boy is suddenly pushing the matter this far. He remembers the young master as a harmless weakling and struggles to reconcile that memory with the pressure now bearing down on him. The change feels so extreme to him that it is like facing an entirely different, predatory presence. A red gem at another man's chest glints, hinting that someone important is already nearby and aware. That man steps in, asking what commotion has caused such a scene. Hendrik instantly recognizes him as Lord Geordie and is terrified by the timing. The young master, Lucien Valdec, realizes this arrival could not be more convenient for his purposes. Geordie identifies Lucien at once, marking him as the second son of the Valdec family. His presence immediately shifts the balance, leaving Lucian and Hendrik facing a far more dangerous witness. Desperate to save himself, Hendrik rushes to Jordi and begs Lucian to let him explain first. He starts fumbling for a version of events that might reduce his guilt. Jordi cuts him off before he can shape the story. With calm authority, Jordi tells him no explanation is needed. He states that he personally witnessed Hendrik's disgraceful conduct. Jordi condemns him for being cowed by someone barely half his age, calling it deeply disappointing. He warns Hendrik to control his expression before he worsens his position. The rebuke makes clear that Jordi now holds Hendrik's fate in his hands. Meanwhile, Lucian stands back with a servant clinging nervously to him, letting Jordi's authority do the crushing. The servant trembles and asks what they should do, sensing just how angry Jordi is. Lucian, amused rather than frightened, enjoys the sight of Hendrik being broken down. Jordi's status as the second young master of House Valdec gives his judgment even greater weight. It is noted that after his influence weakened in the Firstborn's faction, he brought in many outsiders, most of whom met bad ends. Those men were later discarded as criminals once they had served their purpose, revealing Jordi's ruthlessness. Lucian greets Jordi politely as an elder brother. He treats the encounter as a long-delayed reunion with the second young master. Jordi answers without warmth, his expression showing no affection in return. He dismisses Lucian as a foolish creature and orders him to report exactly what happened from the beginning. Jordi confirms that he already saw the exchange between Lucian and Hendrik. He frames Hendrik's behavior as an insult not just to Lucian but to the dignity of the entire Valdec family. Lucian feigns confusion and lightly questions whether Jordi is really claiming his dignity was harmed. Jordi answers that Hendrik's outdated theorizing created a misunderstanding that spiraled into this mess. He concludes that Hendrik's use of the Valdec name to stir unnecessary confusion was a clear offense, and that he will be held responsible for it. Jordi refuses to condemn the knight involved, arguing that unlike Lucian, he understands the man's loyalty and the blood he has shed for House Valdec. He makes it clear that the family exists because such knights have carried its burdens. Pressing the point, Jordi challenges Lucian to ask whether someone who has never endured real sword training has any right to blame a knight so easily. Lucian absorbs the rebuke in silence, as Jordi pointedly reminds him to respect the knights first. Jordi continues, insisting that the Valdecs owe their standing to those who serve and fight for them. He then turns outward and publicly addresses the gathered knights, shifting the confrontation into a lesson for everyone present. Before the crowd, Jordi apologizes for the disturbance and frames the insult as the mistake of an immature child, asking the knights to be lenient. With a smiling edge, he promises to personally deal with his foolish younger brother, protecting the family's image while asserting authority over Lucian. Lucian immediately sees the move for what it is and recognizes how quickly Jordi has turned the situation to his advantage. He realizes Jordi has taken Lucian's direct insult and redirected it into an offense against the knights instead. By doing so, Jordi not only wins the crowd's favor but also preserves Lucian's dignity in front of them. Lucian grudgingly admits that much, even as he keeps measuring his brother. Jordi accepts the acknowledgement as if it were natural praise from a younger brother. Lucian steps forward and, with exaggerated humility, claims he should have been properly scolded for insulting Jordi. Instead, he says, Jordi has generously enlightened him, turning the humiliation into a performance of admiration. He even repeats his own crude insults in the language of repentance, making the flattery so excessive that it becomes mockery. Jordi senses the provocation beneath the act, but Lucian keeps smiling through his supposed shame. Lucian escalates the farce by loudly declaring that he has once again learned from his brother's benevolence. The nearby attendants instantly play along, praising Jordi's wisdom so enthusiastically that the scene becomes absurd. Behind the act, Lucian decides to use this incident to erase his weak reputation and carve a stronger presence into everyone's memory. Jordi catches the dangerous intent behind Lucian's smile. Lucian revels in the role, openly enjoying the chance to recast himself as the once-overlooked third young master. Then, as if the matter is settled, he politely asks Jordi for permission to leave. He justifies it by saying that dragging the issue out any longer would only harm them both. Jordi stops him, warning that Lucian is bolder than he should be if he thinks he can simply walk away. Lucian answers by reminding Jordi of a more important constraint. Their father has been watching him closely lately, and Lucian coldly notes that while he has nothing to lose, Jordi does. When Jordi does not press further, Lucian takes that silence as consent. He cheerfully announces his departure to brother Jordi and heads off with Hans in tow. Without waiting for approval, Lucian urges Hans to run with him, dragging the flustered servant along. Back inside, an older retainer hesitantly calls out to Jordi after Lucian's exit. He nervously asks whether it is truly wise to let Lucian leave like this. Jordi's silence turns ominous, making it clear that Lucian has not escaped his notice so easily. The scene shifts away from the training ground to a quieter path outside the estate. Lucian walks ahead while Hans follows, still unsettled by what just happened. Hans glances back, unable to shake the fear of Jordi's reaction. He finally asks Lucian whether they will really be safe after provoking Jordi so openly. Lucian knows Hans understands Jordi's temperament better than anyone and waits for the real concern. Hans blurts out that Jordi will never let this pass, his fears spilling over into panic. Lucian calms him, acknowledging that the threat is real but refusing to let Hans spiral further. He admits that he knows exactly what that kind of fear feels like from bitter personal experience. Remembering a past of being crushed by incompetent superiors and false accusations, he recalls how miserable helplessness can be. Because of that, he tells Hans not to collapse now and urges him to get up quickly. Hans steels himself and insists that a mere knight should never dare commit such abuse, and that he will not allow it either. Lucian then lowers himself to Hans's level and admits that Hans has suffered because of his own foolishness. He says that when a master behaves like an idiot, the subordinates beneath him are the ones who pay the highest price. Since Hans is his personal servant, Lucian acknowledges that the burden on him must have been even worse. With unusual sincerity, Lucian makes Hans a promise. From now on, he will not allow his people to be ignored or left trembling in fear because of him. He vows that they will do better together from this point on, asking Hans to stand with him. A bond is reaffirmed as one person reaches out and the other accepts the support. The story returns to the grand estate where the next move in the household struggle is about to unfold. Lucian strides through the manor with Hans close behind, already intent on confronting something amiss. Remembering the earlier disturbance, Lucian notes that the mansion's unusual quiet only confirms his suspicion. He concludes that the Lord would never endure a beating without retaliation, so someone else must have engineered the situation. That realization hardens into certainty, and Lucian recognizes the scheme he has been waiting to expose. His anger flares as he prepares to strike back at whoever thought they could get away with this. Hans immediately backs him, convinced they cannot let the offense pass. The two align themselves for action, with Hans ready to follow Lucian's lead. Lucian's outrage sharpens when he remembers that the attack was not just personal but also aimed at his expected allowance. Hans is just as furious because his own pay has been dragged into the same scheme. Lucian recalls expecting the budget documents that should have restored his finances that day. He had been waiting for the moment his account would finally be replenished. In his mind, everything should have proceeded smoothly with the arrival of that envelope. He had been ready to open it with complete confidence. But the contents stop him cold the moment he checks them. The summary reveals the real blow. Lucian's allowance has been cut by 75% and Hans's salary by 30%. Lucian immediately traces the sabotage to the two women he already distrusted, especially the former head maid and her ally. Even so, he reminds himself that outright embezzlement is a capital crime, so the culprit must have hidden the theft behind procedure. As he opens the way forward, Lucian identifies his own weakness. He left room in the system for this manipulation. He focuses, no longer reacting emotionally but preparing to dismantle the trap with precision. He recalls that after his mother died, estate management had been entrusted to Dana, the former head maid. Dana had long kept another maid, Jenny, close at her side, effectively grooming her within the household hierarchy. Lucian recognizes that Jenny, once just Dana's subordinate, is now central to what happened. When they finally meet face to face, Jenny frames the encounter as a polite first introduction. She presents herself as the newly appointed head maid replacing Dana, masking the power shift behind courtesy. Jenny notes that Lucian had stayed shut away before, implying that his absence allowed her influence to settle in unchallenged. With a smug edge, she suggests his period of drifting without authority is over, making clear she sees him as weak. Hans bristles at her disrespect toward Lucian and nearly erupts. Lucian restrains him at once, signaling that Jenny's provocation is expected and not the real target. He drops the pleasantries himself and takes control of the conversation. Producing the document, Lucian makes clear that they are here to address a specific and serious matter. He decides not to circle around the issue and confronts Jenny directly. Lucian demands to know whether she drafted the budget plan. Jenny's reaction shows she is amused rather than intimidated by the accusation. She openly admits that she wrote it, and even guesses that the budget is exactly why he came. Jenny justifies herself by saying the former head maid had authority from Lucian's father, and that she merely carried out duties passed down to her. Then she turns the blame back on Lucian, implying it is absurd for him to question work he should have been handling himself. She states outright that estate management was originally his responsibility, trying to recast her interference as necessary labor. Lucian had already anticipated that excuse and recognizes it as an attempt to hide negligence behind his own inaction. He concedes that his neglect created the opening, refusing to waste time denying his part, but he immediately pivots to the inconsistency that exposes her scheme. Lucian explains that he checked the late father's revised budget and found that most of the funds were meant to raise the servants' wages. He even acknowledges that such raises could be seen as fair compensation for the hardship caused by his own neglect. That is exactly why Hans's pay cut makes no sense, and Lucian presses Jenny on the contradiction. By pointing to Hans's name specifically, he exposes how blatant and personal the manipulation was. Jenny instantly tries to dismiss it as a simple clerical mistake caused by the burdens of running the household. She then appeals to the staff, claiming her heavy workload should excuse any error. The servants hesitate under her pressure, clearly aware that she is forcing them to support her version. In the end, they nervously back her up, saying Jenny has indeed been extremely busy lately. The blonde young master decides they will support Jenny more effectively from this point on. A faint smile shows he has already settled on a new course of action. Ignoring Hans's alarm, He abruptly ends the exchange and tells him they are leaving. He admits that while the body is his, its movements are still being directed by someone else, making his loss of control explicit. With that unsettling confession hanging in the air, he walks out. Before going, he asks the head maid one final question and warns her to answer carefully. He presses her on whether she even knows who the true master she serves really is. The head maid avoids answering directly and instead defers the matter to Lord Geordie, revealing both caution and divided loyalty. The scene shifts away from the manor to a dark part of town. He reflects that diseased flesh must be cut away if the body is to survive. Applying that metaphor to himself, he concludes that his own heart is already rotting. Disguised in cloaks, he and Hans arrive at a shabby establishment, leaving Hans confused about why they came here at all. Hans realizes this is no harmless outing, but the young master keeps moving deeper inside. From within, the sounds of brutal betting and violence make clear they have entered an illegal gambling den built around blood sport. Inside, men cheer for a savage fight, treating near-death violence as entertainment. The young master, energized rather than repelled, asks Hans if he can feel the atmosphere. He likens the den to the ideal place to catch a big fish, showing he came here to lure out someone important. He approaches the bar as if he belongs there, beginning his search. The bartender tries to dismiss the hooded intruder as an unwelcome child and tells him to leave, but the bartender's confidence falters when he gets a better look at the visitor. The young master mocks the den for being strangely selective about customers. He pushes further, challenging the bartender for turning away paying business. Elsewhere, the head maid reflects on why she chose not to have Jenny punished. Her expression makes clear that restraint came from calculation, not kindness. First, she recognizes that Jenny is not merely a servant but someone with deeper ties and protection. Because Jenny was raised by the wet nurse who cared for Geordie, mishandling her could ignite a much larger conflict. Second, she sees that Lucian's side is an even greater internal disorder than expected. To navigate such chaos, she decides ordinary judgment is useless and that a more deliberate remedy is needed. That remedy leaves her quietly confident, as if she has diagnosed the situation. Finally, she concludes that the Grand Duke cannot possibly be unaware of what is happening. So she treats the turmoil not as negligence, but as another test someone powerful is allowing to unfold. Meanwhile, seated at a gambling table, the young master decides that if this is a test, he will prove himself through it. He begins playing cards, with chips and hands quickly piling across the table. His movements stay calm and precise as he takes control of the game. He handles the deck with practiced ease, revealing skill far beyond what anyone expected from him. Enjoying himself, he treats the game as both profit and amusement. The results speak for themselves as more chips slide to his side. Onlookers gather, amazed that he keeps winning against experienced gamblers. Another opponent is forced to admit defeat, stunned by how thoroughly he was beaten. Rather than cashing out, the young master signals that the real entertainment is only beginning. He openly invites them to keep playing, making it clear he intends to stay until someone stronger appears. Hans panics at how quickly his master has become frighteningly competent, and wants to flee before things get worse. The young master lounges amid towers of winnings, boasting that no one here can handle him and revealing he came to strip the place clean if necessary. Behind the bravado, he judges that he has already taken enough money to force the true target to respond. He concludes that the man he came to draw out should make his move any moment now. Right then, the doors swing open. The young master smiles, satisfied that his bait has worked exactly as planned. A powerful newcomer calmly adjusts his shirt as he enters, signaling complete confidence. His predatory grin confirms he is the dangerous figure the young master was waiting for. He apologizes for failing to recognize such a notable guest sooner and formally offers his belated greeting, acknowledging the young master as someone worth taking seriously. A towering man introduces himself as Hugo, the manager of the establishment, immediately taking control of the room. He composes himself with practiced calm, signaling that whatever follows is deliberate rather than accidental. The staff formally announce that the business is closing for the day under special circumstances, making clear that ordinary guests are no longer welcome. The remaining patrons are ushered out with exaggerated courtesy, as the house clears space for someone important. Concern over inconveniencing others is brushed aside, revealing that one guest's comfort matters more than the rest. Hugo makes it plain that as long as young Master Lucian can enjoy himself in peace, everything else is irrelevant. Lucian recognizes Hugo despite the time that has passed and coolly notes that Hugo must need his gambling den to survive. Hugo apologizes for the rough welcome, while Lucian treats the whole encounter as a welcome diversion rather than an offense. Seeing Lucian sitting before a mountain of winnings, Hugo praises him while quietly measuring how dangerous this visit might be. He proposes stepping in as Lucian's opponent himself, turning a casual win streak into a direct contest. Lucian is amused that Hugo would personally take the table, recognizing the challenge for what it is. Hugo humbly lowers himself in words, but hints that years running the place have taught him enough to make the game interesting. Behind the polite tone, Hugo's predatory intent sharpens as he decides this match will be his way of testing Lucian. Lucian's servant Hans nervously urges him to leave, sensing that they have already won enough and that this man is bad news. Hans admits Hugo frightens him more than the dangerous people they have met in the palace, warning that his instincts are screaming. Hugo notices that fear immediately and is pleased, recognizing Hans as someone with the rare instinct to detect real killers. Lucian credits Hans's years of service for that sensitivity, accepting the warning without retreating from the game. Even so, Lucian decides Hans is probably right, which only confirms that he understands the risk and is choosing it anyway. Hugo answers with a satisfied smile, encouraged that Lucian can read danger yet still stays seated. Lucian recalls exactly who stands before him, Black Shark Hugo, a name feared even in the Empire's criminal underworld. Hugo's legend began in the city's filthy back alleys, where he had nothing but a tough body and a talent for violence. From that brutal start, he rose with startling speed, forcing his way into prominence. Through gambling, smuggling, and contract killing, he became the ruler of the capital's nightlife and underworld. When imperial authority faltered, Hugo seized the chance to crown himself a baron and turn criminal power into status. In time, he grew into one of the Empire's recognized warlords, far beyond a mere thug. Back in the present, Lucian judges that Hugo may still be a relative newcomer beside the true giants, but he is unquestionably dangerous. Rather than show fear, Lucian smiles as if he has found exactly the kind of opponent he wanted. He inwardly frames the meeting as a hunt, deciding that today he has come to catch the Black Shark himself. The cards are laid out, and the confrontation shifts from mutual probing into a formal game with real stakes beneath the surface. Lucian suggests a simple card game with no betting limit, and Hugo readily agrees, accepting a contest where restraint will not protect either side. Hugo plays the gracious host, saying he cannot let a young master who sought him out leave board. Lucian eagerly welcomes the match, delighted to have finally found someone worth engaging, while Hans can only panic from the sidelines. Hugo outwardly flatters Lucian, but inwardly dismisses him as another privileged heir acting bold on family backing. As the dealer begins, Hugo decides that Lucian's own careless words may become the trap that destroys him. He adjusts his approach on the spot, realizing it may be better to strip Lucian directly instead of merely beating the dealer assigned to him. Hugo reflects that bankrupting the house dealer was never the real objective, and Lucian has now become the true target. The dealer calmly handles the cards, while the room settles into a tense quiet around the table. Lucian, meanwhile, reads Hugo's greed clearly and concludes that immature predators always overreach once they think they smell weakness. Hugo's hostility hardens into a private vow to bleed Lucian dry and punish his confidence. Lucian abruptly interrupts the flow of the game, signaling that he has a more important purpose than gambling. He reassures Hugo that nothing is wrong, but asks for honest answers before they continue, forcing the encounter into negotiation. Lucian says that despite this being their first meeting, he has taken a liking to Hugo, making the coming questions sound almost friendly. He explains that a leader can be judged by the discipline and atmosphere of his subordinates, implying that Hugo's organization has already impressed him. Even if the operation is illegal, Lucian acknowledges that running it at this scale requires real competence. He adds that if Hugo had crossed the line with his superiors, this place would already have been wiped out, showing he understands the balance of power around him. Lucian further relaxes the pressure by saying his family is not the suffocating sort, inviting candor instead of obedience. Then he drops the real question: when does Hugo plan to begin mass production? Hugo feigns confusion, buying a moment as he gauges how much Lucian truly knows. Lucian answers by naming the secret outright, the illegal hallucinogen being prepared in Vestral. The game freezes at the table as Lucian's accusation exposes the true reason for his visit and leaves Hugo's operation suddenly vulnerable. At the entrance, the household staff stand guard as someone important is being received inside. A young attendant is startled by what he hears, realizing the meeting has taken a dangerous turn. At the table, Hugo tries to hold his composure while gambling chips and cards frame the interrogation closing in on him. He first plays dumb, pretending the accusation is so absurd it barely deserves an answer. The pressure does not ease, and the game continues as if each chip placed is another demand for the truth. The blonde noble calmly states that Hugo was commissioned by the Marquis Lagrin family. He narrows the charge further, saying Hugo was meant to flood Waldeck territory with illegal drugs. The accusation becomes specific. Hugo was to use cheap instructions from Marquis to spread the substance, crossing a line that should never have been crossed. The blonde heir asks Hugo directly whether he understands how reckless that was. He spells out the real offense. Only a madman would dare challenge the Waldeck family on its own ground, and getting caught would mean annihilation. The threat is made explicit in Hugo's mind. If the scheme failed, everyone tied to Waldeck would hunt him down and kill him. There would be no mercy and no exceptions for anyone involved. Hugo realizes his plan has collapsed completely, and that he is now facing the one enemy he most needed to avoid. To the Waldeck family, he understands, he is nothing less than the worst possible opponent at the table. The blonde noble recalls that the matter might have remained hidden longer, but the spread of the drug forced Waldeck to move. Their side raided Hugo's base, only to find he had already abandoned it. Hugo's escape confirms he had been acting with guilty knowledge, not innocence. The noble makes clear that experience has taught him not to let someone like Hugo slip away twice. Cornered, Hugo tries to retreat into humility, and claims the whole thing must be a misunderstanding. He paints himself as a harmless small-time shopkeeper who can never be involved in drug dealing. He pushes the lie further, insisting jealous rivals must have spread false rumors and begging for a chance to prove it. The blonde heir treats that excuse with amused disbelief rather than anger. He reveals details only the culprit would know had been exposed already, including the fake storefront and the underground passage connected to the operation. Then he asks one final, pointed question: how far along Hugo's operation has progressed. That precision shatters Hugo's confidence, and he realizes the noble knows far more than expected. For a moment Hugo stiffens, caught between panic and calculation. He concludes that denial is now useless because the evidence against him is already complete. His hand tenses as he considers a desperate response. Hugo briefly weighs murdering the noble on the spot to escape. One of the attendants is already armed, making the room far more dangerous than it first appeared. Hugo imagines that killing an unguarded aristocratic heir might be possible in a single strike, but the blonde noble warns him not to act rashly, showing he has read Hugo's intent. He reminds Hugo that this gamble is being played with Hugo's life, not money. The warning sharpens. Hugo should remember how precarious his rise has been before throwing it away. Hugo's bravado breaks as he realizes attacking a Waldeck heir would bring a fate worse than death. He recalls the kind of torture and ruin that would await him if he made that mistake. That fear crushes the last of his resistance. Instead of fighting, Hugo drops to his knees, deciding he must save himself at any cost. He begs for mercy outright. Trying to make himself useful, he argues that the noble must have sought him out personally because he still has value. The blonde heir silently lets him understand that this is the only reason Hugo is still alive. Hugo immediately offers total submission, promising to obey any command no matter how degrading. His panic spreads through the room as the servants also collapse and plead for mercy. The entire group submits to the young lord, acknowledging that their lives now depend on his judgment. The noble lightly lifts a stack of chips, as if deciding how much Hugo's life is worth. He toys with the pile a moment longer, turning the threat into a measured negotiation. At last he decides that keeping a dog at his side may be useful after all. Hugo seizes on that opening and eagerly offers himself as a disposable tool, ready to do anything if ordered. The noble rises, signaling that the real terms of this arrangement are only beginning. He crouches before Hugo and makes clear that simple obedience will not satisfy him. If Hugo wants to live, he will have to prove his worth in a more interesting way. A blonde noble named Lucian approaches Hugo and abruptly addresses him with unsettling familiarity. Lucian tempts him with an impossible offer by asking whether he wants to become a knight. The question hits Hugo hard, because it revives a dream he had long forced himself to bury. He remembers how desperately he once chased that path before giving it up as unattainable. Time had taught him the cruel truth behind that surrender. No matter how much he trained and sharpened his skill, effort alone never changed his place. Even risking his life in service brought him no honor, only exploitation. In the end, he had been treated as nothing more than a disposable tool for nobles. What broke him most was the certainty that low birth would always outweigh merit. So Lucian's question reopens the wound of everything he was denied. Overwhelmed, Hugo collapses to the floor under the weight of that forbidden hope. From the ground, he dares to ask if becoming a knight could truly be possible for someone like him. Lucian answers with the authority of the Waldeck family, and gives his word. He tells Hugo that if he can live with integrity, and without shame, his status will not hold him back. Lucian goes further and declares that mere rank will no longer obstruct him. Calling him by name, Lucian offers not just advancement but recognition. He asks Hugo to stop living as a tool and start living as a person. A few days later, that promise begins to take shape at Lucian's estate. The household staff are gathered as Lucian prepares to present Hugo to them. The servants and attendants tense up, already uneasy about what this introduction might mean. Lucian formally announces that he has hired a capable outsider to serve in the house. Relaxing on his seat, he orders the newcomer to introduce himself. Hugo steps forward and states that he will be assisting the young lord from this day on. He finishes with deliberate confidence, making clear he expects the senior staff to accept him. The room takes in the new arrangement, while Lucian watches from above the household hierarchy. From his throne-like seat, Lucian lets the tension spread through the assembled servants. Once the introduction ends, the staff brace themselves for what comes next. Lucian immediately orders the head maid to be brought before him. A senior servant questions the sudden demand, sensing trouble. Lucian explains that since he has brought in a new servant, he intends to introduce him properly. The head maid's earlier attitude is recalled, revealing she had already resisted change to protect the old order. She had justified delay and obstruction by claiming procedure and prior mistakes required her approval first. Lucian is unsurprised, having expected exactly this kind of reaction. He understands that the household's internal corruption is too deep to fix through ordinary discipline. To these people, Lucian is someone they can dismiss and manipulate because he is not the favored heir. He decides that if they refuse to respect him naturally, he will make his authority unmistakable. A senior servant named Hans steps forward and asks Lucian to consider the staff's position. Hans argues that the head maid only acts this way because she is devoted to Lord Geordie, the second son. Others echo the plea, insisting they are being unfairly blamed and only want understanding. Their real demand is to preserve the old arrangement and continue living as they always have. That complacency is shattered when a young servant angrily reminds everyone who actually rules this estate. He declares that the true master here is young Master Lucian, not Geordie. Hugo reinforces the point by drawing the line clearly between the estate's lord and the second son. He then asks Hans to leave the matter to him, stepping in as Lucian's enforcer. Hugo bluntly warns that the staff's polished excuses are wasted on people who have already shown disloyalty. Turning to Lucian, he says he already knows what must be done. Hugo reasons that for servants who cannot distinguish rank or loyalty, the answer is simple and direct. He admits his method will be harsh, but asks Lucian for permission to carry it out. Lucian is pleased by how quickly Hugo understands the situation, confirming why he chose him. He reflects that fortune favored him, because Hugo's past in the drug trade gave him exactly the kind of ruthless experience this household crisis requires. A powerful man allows the confrontation to proceed because it is leading exactly where he wants. Two dangerous subordinates step forward with predatory confidence, promising to handle the matter however they are told. Their target, a formally dressed servant, immediately loses his nerve. In the middle of the grand hall, the servant finds himself facing a much larger, rough-looking enforcer under everyone's eyes. He tries to understand the enforcer's intentions, but fear is already taking over. He reassures himself that the man only looks threatening and must merely be a common thug. Clinging to that excuse, he forces himself not to panic. He then tries to reclaim authority, warning the enforcer to watch his words because he supposedly understands the household better. He invokes Lord Geordie's cruelty as a threat, hoping fear of the master will make the enforcer back down. He presses further, implying the enforcer should not throw his life away for so little. Instead of being intimidated, the enforcer dismisses the speech as a tedious final statement. The servant is caught off guard by that response and realizes he has lost control of the exchange. Before he can recover, the enforcer cuts him off with a brutal punch. The blow lands cleanly and sends him flying. The surrounding staff erupt in alarm as the violence becomes undeniable. The servant crashes hard across the hall. Some witnesses are horrified, while at least one onlooker seems entertained by the spectacle. The enforcer stands over the aftermath, as if the result was inevitable. The servant lies on the floor, dazed and badly hurt. His swollen face and bloodied mouth make it clear he has been completely overpowered. The hall breaks into panic, with people condemning the attack and insisting he had no right to go that far. The enforcer calmly acts as though he is fully entitled to what he just did. He reveals that dealing with violent fools is exactly the kind of work he excels at. Nearby, a teacup sits undisturbed, underscoring how casually this punishment is being carried out. The beaten servant struggles back up, shaken and humiliated. At the same time, movement at the doors signals that someone else is being brought in. A red-haired maid is dragged into the room by two men, fighting them and demanding to be released. She refuses to submit and openly challenges the people abusing their power. One of the men snaps at her to be quiet and obey, insisting she still does not grasp how bad her situation is. Even while being forced through the doorway, she answers with outrage rather than fear. She vows that those responsible will pay for what they have done today. When she is hauled before the assembled household, the room parts around her and the scale of the judgment against her becomes clear. A servant formally reports to young Master Lucian that head maid Jenny has been brought in as ordered. The men enforcing this order present themselves as silent instruments of his will. Lucian has been waiting apart from the chaos, composed and fully in control. He turns with quiet certainty, showing that this moment has been prepared in advance. He greets her arrival almost pleasantly, as if receiving exactly what he expected. He confirms that he was the one who ordered her brought before him. Jenny glares back, furious but still defiant despite being restrained. She demands an explanation and warns that he will not be safe after provoking this. She leans on Lord Geordie's authority, insisting the Lord will never forgive such treatment. Lucian coolly offers to settle everything quietly if she stops resisting, making clear that he now claims the right to decide her fate. As she protests that he has no such authority, he reaches for a whip. With chilling calm, he declares that the real punishment is only beginning. He invites head maid Jenny to speak whatever she still wishes to say, treating her defiance as meaningless. Then he reveals the truth of his intent. She is going to die here today. He frames what follows as execution, an old method meant to warn others and vent hatred. In his view, such a killing is useful because it offers a visible target and a public lesson. He believes the terror and memory it creates are enough to justify it. Armed with the whip, Lucian advances on Jenny as the hall watches the start of her execution. A red-haired maid confronts the young master directly, refusing to cower even as he stands before her with a whip. She steels herself, anger overriding fear as she prepares to challenge him. The young master remains cold and unmoved, making it clear he does not need to overturn everything to destroy her. He calmly threatens to report to the Grand Duke that the weak and wretched third prince no longer exists, using that claim as leverage over her. A servant nearby is startled as the maid abruptly raises a finger, trying to halt the situation before it turns fatal. Before she can regain control, someone seizes her roughly. She is forced down to the floor. The young master watches as two men pin her in place, tightening his control over the room. Even restrained, she warns him to think carefully, reminding him that he already threatened her life. She presses the real danger. If he leaves even a small wound on her, Lord Geordie will not ignore it. She strengthens the claim by revealing that her mother served as Lord Geordie's wet nurse, making her almost like family to him. The young master dismisses that defense as her final argument and mocks her for trying to survive on that connection alone. He belittles her for making noise only because she happened to have a powerful patron, treating her resistance as pathetic. Pinned on her knees, she is forced to keep talking while he demands any other excuse she can offer. She hesitates, scrambling for another way to save herself. He cuts her off and says he already has enough reason to kill her for falsely accusing a noble of attempted murder and causing a scandal. Leaning close, he reminds her that even if she keeps shouting, she and the prince share the same powerless wet nurse background and cannot change anything. He adds that at most she might buy a little time, and even their father would not truly intervene. Instead, he believes their father might praise him for dealing properly with a runaway colt. The maid realizes with dread that he is speaking about Lord Geordie himself as someone to be disciplined. He reduces Geordie to merely another heir, stripping away the protection she thought that name guaranteed. Then he drives the point home by comparing Geordie to the person kneeling right in front of him, implying heirs can be discarded. Under that pressure, the maid understands her gamble has failed and that she has brought this disaster on herself. The men restraining her tighten their grip as her resistance breaks. She finally begs for mercy, admitting she was wrong and pleading for her life. The young master answers with a faint, satisfied smile. He tells her her only fortune is that he is choosing not to kill her outright. Outside, the palace remains serene, untouched by the violence unfolding within. Elsewhere in the estate, Lucian rushes toward the disturbance with attendants close behind. He cannot believe events have spiraled this far. Lucian realizes this is no longer a petty outburst after being humiliated by Jenny, but a murderous rampage. He recalls planting a false memory in the young master's mind so he would think Lucian had gone to the greenhouse, buying time and sending him in the wrong direction. Back in the room, the maid concludes that the servants must have tried to stop Lucian, which means the young master has already bent them to his will. She understands the situation has worsened beyond a private punishment. Lucian arrives and sees enough to confirm that the servants are acting under the young master's control. The controlled servants immediately try to calm Lucian and frame the report as a misunderstanding. They even invoke Lord Geordie, insisting the young master fears him most, hoping that familiar logic will make Lucian lower his guard. Lucian senses the inconsistency at once and recognizes something is deeply wrong. The doors burst open as the confrontation finally collides. Blood drips from the whip, revealing that the punishment has already turned brutal. Lucian finds the maid collapsed in a pool of blood while the young master stands over her with the weapon in hand. The scene leaves no room for excuses. The young master is openly torturing her. Lucian erupts in outrage, demanding to know what his brother thinks he is doing. The young master turns and greets his esteemed brother with chilling composure. He politely tells Lucian to come back later because today he intends to tear out the root of this disobedience. Without hesitation, he orders his servants to lift the maid upright again. Lucian immediately counters by commanding Oliver and Gert to bring Jenny to him at once. The servants rush to obey, and the room splits between the two brothers' authority. The young master quietly gives Hugo a final instruction in case anyone approaches too closely. He orders Hugo that if anyone comes within 3 steps, he is to slit the maid's throat, turning her into a hostage before Lucian's eyes. A blonde noble coldly declares that he will bear full responsibility for what is about to happen. In the palace hall, his men move to enforce his order while another noble watches the confrontation unfold. The hostage-taker makes his intent clear. Jenny will not be allowed to survive, because he is acting under his master's command. His threat becomes immediate as a blade presses against Jenny's throat. Terrified and in tears, Jenny cries out to Lord Geordie for help. Geordie tries to stop the killing at once, warning his subordinate not to touch Jenny. He escalates the order with a brutal threat, promising to destroy the man and his family if Jenny is harmed. The blonde noble cuts in and rejects Geordie's attempt to interfere. To prove his loyalty, the attacker stabs Jenny from behind and declares that his true master is Lord Lucian, not Geordie. He insists that whatever follows, obeying Lucian's command matters more to him than his own life. Geordie's anger tightens into helpless fury as he realizes his authority has been stripped away. Lucian openly challenges him, asking what Jenny could possibly have done to deserve such desperate protection. He frames Jenny as a servant who defied orders and mishandled money, presenting her punishment as reasonable discipline. Lucian then twists the issue further, implying Geordie is improperly mixing family politics with personal attachment. Geordie can only grit his teeth as Lucian turns the room against him. The succession struggle within the Valdic family comes into focus as the real stakes behind the incident are laid bare. The first heir, Tristan Valdic, stands at the top of that hierarchy. Geordie, as second heir, has been pushed into a dangerous position where every misstep weakens him politically. With a final showdown for power approaching, he needs to consolidate his own faction more than ever. Instead, Lucian has recently humiliated him in public and cost him both face and a loyal knight. Geordie understands that failing to protect Jenny, someone treated like part of himself, would deepen that damage. If he lets this stand, it will become a turning point that spreads doubt and fractures among his supporters. So for Lucian, this is not punishment but a calculated political strike. Geordie finally orders Lucian to release Jenny immediately. The guards hesitate, sensing the conflict between the brothers has become far more dangerous than a servant's case. A young onlooker panics as the standoff sharpens. Jenny trembles in pain and fear while her captor keeps the knife on her, unmoved by her suffering. Lucian turns away only long enough to gather himself, still fully in control of the room. He dismisses Geordie's protest as laughable and refuses to let a few words erase the damage already done. Reducing the matter to property and loss, he argues that someone who ruins something valuable cannot simply be excused. His contempt broadens into a sneer and noble arrogance, as if status alone should make every offense disappear. Feigning innocence, Lucian asks whether his brother truly expects Jenny to be released. Geordie answers that as third son Lucian has already fulfilled his role, and that even a noble could not escape punishment for theft from the imperial treasury. He warns that covering this up would damage everyone's reputation and invite public judgment. Lucian pretends to agree that the matter should end quickly, but makes clear he will not yield just because Geordie asked. A faint smile reveals he has been steering the exchange toward a harsher conclusion all along. He declares that he lacks any justification to show mercy. Geordie's frustration hardens as Lucian refuses to bend. Pressed to stop circling the issue, Lucian demands that Geordie plainly state what he wants. Instead of relenting, Lucian invokes precedent and begins listing punishments traditionally imposed for stealing from others. Jenny realizes in horror that he is treating her fate as a formal sentence, not a threat. Geordie is shaken as he hears the punishment being spelled out. Lucian mockingly asks how his brother could have become so soft, showering the moment with theatrical scorn. The conflict's consequences reach beyond the hall, touching the wider power structure of the estate. Elsewhere, the matter is brought before a senior authority in a formal office. An older, high-ranking man listens with stern reserve. He is informed that the incident was investigated and officially concluded in a certain way. Reviewing the written report, he weighs the account in silence. Unsatisfied, he directly asks the head butler whether the report is true. The head butler confirms that he personally verified the facts, giving the report full credibility. A servant reports that Lord Geordie compensated the damages with a payment 10 times greater than his actual involvement. He adds that Geordie also brought in an outsider named Hugo, and quickly uncovered and removed the watchers planted around the detached residence. The Marquis concludes from this that Lucille's detached residence is now under unusually tight protection. He reflects that the place has become more heavily guarded than anywhere else under his domain. That realization leaves him quietly weighing what this shift means. Before he can dwell on it further, someone enters and calls for his attention. His younger son Bernhard arrives, having come because his father summoned him. The Marquis turns to face him with measured scrutiny. Father and son stand across the office in a formal, tense audience. Bernhard immediately senses that his father's attitude is different from usual. The Marquis points out that Bernhard has recently been making moves in the family's internal struggle. Bernhard downplays it, insisting he only gave some guidance to servants who failed to recognize their proper master. His father cuts through the excuse and states plainly that Bernhard's meddling has damaged his brother's standing. Still, the Marquis asks whether Bernhard can bear the consequences if this conflict grows. He answers his own question by saying he has no choice but to deal with the fallout. Bernhard reframes his actions as nothing more than restoring the proper order of rank and law. He argues that if he feared even that much, he would never be worthy of carrying the Waldeck name. The Marquis accepts the logic on the surface, saying Bernhard has at least acted in a way that does not disgrace the family. For a moment, he seems almost satisfied with that answer. Then he adds a condition: if Geordie keeps provoking Bernhard, retaliation is within Bernhard's rights. From above his desk, he formally grants that permission. But he immediately warns that if the feud escalates too far and harms the family itself, the matter changes. To Bernhard's shock, the Marquis declares that in such a case he will support Geordie regardless of who is right. Bernhard is thrown off balance, and demands to know what his father means by that. The Marquis treats his surprise as naive and refuses to soften the point. He reminds Bernhard that Geordie may be rash, but his contributions to the family have been substantial. By contrast, Bernhard is forced to remember the year he squandered accomplishing nothing. The Marquis makes his principle clear: the family's future should naturally be led by the child who proves greater value. Bernhard quickly understands the implication behind those words. He realizes his father is effectively telling him to surpass his brother if he wants to rise higher. The Marquis confirms it directly, urging him to build his own strength and become an asset to the house. Only then, he says, will Bernhard have the answer to the question of succession. Bernhard sees the strategy for what it is. His father is deliberately creating urgency to force him into action. The Marquis states outright that the family's succession order will soon be fixed. Bernhard accepts that this is a warning to seize his chance before it disappears. Even as he grasps the pressure being placed on him, he dryly notes to himself how calculating fathers can be. He concludes that such pressure must be his father's way of showing concern for his child. With that understanding, Bernhard reaches into his clothes for a prepared document. He addresses his father again, shifting from defense to initiative. Bernhard reveals that he has already prepared a major move and places the report on the desk. He makes clear that this is not a minor step but a decisive play. The atmosphere in the office tightens as the Marquis gives the document his full attention. He takes the report from Bernhard's hand. As he grips it, the tension in him sharpens. Reading it, the Marquis asks whether the contents are truly accurate. Bernhard answers without hesitation that every part of it is true. The report claims that, acting under House Logan's orders, they have identified the insider who was distributing the drug. Bernhard presses his father to verify the claim immediately. Blue power surges around him as he prepares to force the truth into the open at once. The Marquis, Bernhard of a Marquis's house, stands amid that power as the confrontation moves from words to proof. The head of House Valdec is incensed that anyone would dare violate Valdec territory. Lucian feels the weight of imperial and family responsibility pressing down on him as he considers what it truly means to protect both the Empire and House Valdec. He realizes that if this crisis continues unchecked, he will be the first to bear the consequences. Even so, he steadies himself and asks his father for permission to propose one more course of action. Lucian argues that even if they report the matter to the Emperor, House Logran will likely try to sacrifice a pawn and escape blame. He explains that because the dealings were routed through the Baldwin Merchant Guild, there is no direct evidence on the surface, and digging deeper would only widen the damage. He further reasons that since the Emperor wants to avoid open conflict between factions, the matter would inevitably be pushed toward mediation, making him wonder when his father became so sharp at reading the political landscape. Lucian concludes that despite the outrage against House Valdec, the affair would probably end with a fine rather than a true break in relations. To frame the situation, he likens the noble houses to pieces on a chessboard surrounding the central power. From that metaphor, he suggests that merely taking a minor concession would be far too little. The discussion settles into a direct confrontation between father and son over how far they should go. The father shifts from silent pressure to active engagement, ready to hear the proposal out. He demands that Lucian explain his thinking in full detail. Lucian answers that he already has a way to make sure their enemies cannot slip away. He reveals that while searching for clues, he found a man with no title and no ties to any faction hidden among the evidence. That outsider was a recruit named Hugo, brought in by Lucian's elder brother. The implication becomes clear. The butler's report identified Hugo as the insider, and Lucian intends to use that fact to turn the trap back on the traitors. His father immediately grasps the idea and states it plainly as a reverse trap built around the betrayer. Lucian confirms it, arguing that from the enemy's perspective, no one would expect the man handling the drug to betray them. He adds that he has already arranged matters so the enemy believes their plan is proceeding smoothly, forcing someone from House Logran to step forward in person. His father acknowledges that this is not a proposal to dismiss lightly, but Lucian warns that the plan still has one major flaw. The flaw, his father notes, is that everything depends on a single unknown from the back alleys. He reminds Lucian that human nature cannot be denied and that he cannot trust a man whose loyalty is uncertain. Lucian pauses, taking in the weight of that objection. Then he clarifies that he is not trusting Hugo himself, but the desire driving him. Lucian explains that Hugo wants to become a knight and spread his name across the empire. He sees in Hugo a man desperate to carve his existence into history. That ambition defines Hugo more than any allegiance does. Lucian argues that such a dream may look absurd coming from someone of low birth, but it can also become an obsession strong enough to override fear. So he decides to stake the plan on that ambition, because he recognizes the same kind of dream from his own former life. That private memory becomes the real reason he is willing to believe Hugo will move as expected. His father recognizes that Lucian's reasoning is deeply personal rather than purely strategic. Lucian accepts the risk without retreating, saying that if everything collapses, he will not evade responsibility. He goes further and vows to pay the price himself even if it costs him his life. That resolve leaves his father silent and contemplative. At last, the tension breaks as the father leans back, having made his decision. He abruptly shifts the conversation and tells Lucian to come to the training grounds once he has recovered, catching him off guard. Then he reveals his true answer. He intends to pass the Lionheart sword to Lucian and now sees him as one of the candidates to become the next head of the family. With that turning point reached, the scene moves away from the office and the family's internal power struggle. Later, in the quiet of the Valdec estate at night, the aftermath of the incident is reviewed more privately. Candlelight and silence set the tone for a sober reckoning inside the house. A servant approaches the master while he studies the matter in the library. The servant, Kelheim, apologizes for failing to prevent the incident at the heart of House Valdec. But the master cuts off the self-reproach immediately. He insists the fault was his, admitting that he pushed his own body too far by handling the issue alone. He also judges that the third child's survival was largely luck and that Bernhard's real plan was to drag everyone down with him if he could not escape. From there, he concludes that Bernhard was driven less by greed than by a desire to stain his master's honor and create an excuse for future schemes. That realization hardens into contempt for a Marquis who, despite the Empire's condition, cared only for his own safety. The discussion ends by turning to the next uncertainty: what kind of man Hugo truly is, now that he has attached himself to the third child. A silver-haired man explains that Lucian's father was publicly known as a mere underworld thug, but in truth he commanded an organization feared even by criminals. He adds that such a ruthless figure was never the type to serve another, so the fact that Lucian not only survived under him but was treated as a subordinate proves how remarkable Lucian's growth has been. Lucian's father latches onto that word and quietly asks what this supposed growth really means. His silence shows he is weighing the claim with the caution of someone who knows exactly how merciless that world is. The answer is that only a man of real cunning and cruelty could rise in the underworld at all. If Lucian had been driven by empty ideals alone, he would have been crushed long ago. Instead, that dangerous man recognized Lucian's potential. He judged Lucian to be someone worth staking his life on as a future lord. The room falls quiet as that implication settles in. Lucian's father then reveals he has decided earlier than expected to name his third child as the family's heir. He follows that by declaring that from tomorrow he will begin passing down the family's secret techniques, making the succession official in practice. When asked who should guide Lucian through that training, he answers without hesitation that Sir Eisen will do it. The choice catches the silver-haired man off guard, showing the decision carries unusual weight. Elsewhere, a surge of power rises into the night, as if marking the start of a turning point. That force gathers and descends like a concentrated pillar of energy. At its center, a man sits in meditation, and the moment is framed as one that will matter deeply to him as well. Under the moon, the story shifts to the noble household where the news is about to spread. Inside the mansion, the announcement lands with enough force to leave someone stunned into disbelief. Hans, overwhelmed and teary-eyed, struggles to accept that what he just heard could be real. The blonde young master confirms it directly, leaving Hans even more shaken as he blurts out whether Lucian is truly a successor candidate. The young master impatiently reminds Hans that he has already confirmed it, while Hugo notices Hans's reaction and calls attention to it. Hugo physically steadies Hans before his excitement can carry him away. He urges Hans to calm down, treating his outburst as understandable but excessive. Hugo points out that Hans's joy makes sense because of the path Lucian may now walk. He then sharply notes that someone serving as Lucian's right hand should not be losing composure like this. Hans freezes as the title sinks in and realizes Hugo is calling him Lucian's right hand. For a moment, the meaning hits him all at once. His shock turns into delighted disbelief. Trying to play it down, Hans jokes that he has merely served Lucian the longest and that with someone as capable as Hugo around, he never expected such a role. The young master dryly praises Hans's false modesty while Hugo brushes off the flattery and jokingly labels himself the left hand instead. Watching them, the young master reflects that seasoned retainers really are different. He tells them neither of them is wrong and admits he informed them privately before the family makes the news public. His calm look shows this was a deliberate act of trust, not a casual remark. He begins assessing Hans aloud, acknowledging that Hans can be naive at times. Even so, he recognizes Hans's sincere devotion to Lucian and his ability to stay loyal even under terrible pressure. He concludes that with more experience and proper guidance, Hans can grow into a dependable aide capable of handling Lucian's affairs. He then turns to Hugo and judges Hugo's competence to be beyond question. What Hugo needs, he decides, is a path that will let him become a knight and fully draw out his talent. In his mind, Hugo stands as the future sword that will serve him and strengthen everything he plans to build. He resolves that the time has come to gather capable people around him one by one before the coming struggles intensify. Thinking ahead, he admits that from now on his burdens will only grow heavier. Hugo answers that Lucian will not have to face that road alone. The young master agrees, saying his ambitions can only be completed with both Hans and Hugo beside him. Hugo responds with a solemn vow that he will not fail his young master. Hans immediately joins in, promising with renewed confidence that Lucian can rely on them both. The scene then moves to a grand fortress-like complex, signaling a new stage in the story. Inside its vast halls, the setting feels formal and institutional, as though preparing for an important mission or revelation. At the center of the chamber, the blonde young master now stands alone, separated from the earlier warmth of his companions. Composed and inward-looking, he gathers his thoughts before revealing what truly drives him. He finally discloses that in his previous life, he searched every corner of the continent for a single objective. The story opens by explaining that ancestral martial arts contain sword forms meant to raise a swordsman to a higher realm. Among those techniques, one branch called sword forms is set apart as especially significant. Within that hierarchy, the narrator fixates on an even greater stage known as the advanced sword form. But after all his desperate effort, what he actually obtained fell far short of that ideal. Instead of the advanced form he longed for, he ended up with something much lesser. It was not even the intermediate form reserved for knight captains, but a degraded version meant for novice knights. He realizes that without noble blood, mastering any sword form at all was normally impossible. For a common mercenary like him, even gaining access to that inferior form had been an extraordinary stroke of luck. Yet every failure to protect his comrades made that limitation feel unbearable. Those losses hardened into an obsession with obtaining a true sword form. Now fate offers him an unexpected chance tied to the Valdec family's secret inheritance. That inheritance is an ancient sword form passed only to heirs and their closest attendants, far beyond the advanced form. He realizes he has been given a chance to learn the Lionheart sword and is thrilled by what it could mean. He imagines the greatness of the swordsmanship awaiting him and can barely contain his anticipation. The excitement suddenly overwhelms him enough to break his composure. He admits to himself that he is already nervous before the lesson has even begun. With time still left, he recognizes that his restless excitement is keeping him from settling down, so he decides to use the wait to calm his mind by practicing mana circulation. As he sits to meditate, he reflects that he learned swordsmanship only through scraps of knowledge and never had a true master. That thought leaves him quietly pleased at how unusual this moment is for him. He appreciates that, for once, he is about to live a life shaped by proper guidance. While he meditates alone in the training hall, someone begins observing him from above. The stillness stretches on, emphasizing how long and calmly he remains focused. The observer's presence draws closer, casting a new pressure over the quiet scene. An older man watches the boy's meditation from the balcony, studying him in silence. The old man notes that despite the long wait, the boy has not wavered at all. He wonders what changed the once fragile Lucian so completely. Seeing the composed youth below, he concludes that the old Lucian is nowhere to be found. Elsewhere, a request is made for Sir Eisen to become Lucian's swordsmanship instructor. At first, the proposal seemed hopeless to the man hearing it. But on reflection, he begins to see value in the idea. He suggests that teaching Lucian could also serve as a useful change of pace for Eisen. That argument leads to the conclusion that Lucian must possess exceptional talent. Even so, Eisen remains unconvinced by talk of talent alone. What truly catches his interest is not the boy's skill, but the change in his character. He insists that the transformation is so striking it can only be understood in person. Having accepted that judgment, Eisen comes to meet the boy himself. The observer is revealed to be Sword Saint Eisen Brainter, a legendary master. He is introduced as a superhuman who has surpassed the limits of ordinary talent and reached complete awakening. Such figures are said to be exceedingly rare even across the Empire's long history. To swordsmen, a sword saint stands almost like a god. Lucian senses who has arrived and is stunned that such a legend is standing before him. The realization hits him fully, leaving him openly shaken. Eisen Brainter presents himself plainly despite the weight of his title. He greets Lucian as someone he met years ago at the prince's birthday, reminding him of their prior connection. Then he formally introduces himself and states that he will be Lucian's instructor from this day forward. Lucian is caught off guard, having only heard that morning that an instructor would come. He quickly understands that the family never told him the teacher would be the sword saint himself. Recovering his manners, he bows deeply and expresses sincere honor and eagerness to learn under Eisen's discipline. Eisen brushes aside the grandeur, calling himself merely an old man hidden behind an exaggerated title. An elder reminds the young heir that he is expected to become the next head of the house and challenges why he submits so readily. The boy answers that as long as he must uphold the family's dignity, showing disrespect to a senior retainer would be improper. He goes further, insisting that anyone who serves his master faithfully deserves the highest respect regardless of rank. That unexpectedly principled answer catches the old man off guard and makes him reassess the boy. Accepting the boy's stance, the elder allows him to act more comfortably, and the young lord gratefully relaxes. The elder immediately shifts to training, and the boy eagerly agrees to begin at once. As a first exercise, the elder proposes simple laps around the outdoor training ground. The young lord launches into motion without hesitation. He commits fully to the task from the very first step. Dropping into a runner's start, he is ready to begin immediately if ordered. The elder stops him first, surprised by how unquestioningly he obeys. He asks whether the boy has no curiosity about why he is running, how far he must go, or what the exercise is meant to teach. The boy admits he is curious, but says he assumed the order was necessary and that there was no need to ask yet. He explains his view plainly. A disciple should first follow instruction and trust the teacher's judgment. Hearing that, the elder notes the boy's unusual eyes and realizes this child may possess rare qualities he has long sought. Concluding that the boy understands the proper attitude, the elder accepts his answer and proceeds. He gives the signal to start, and the young lord bursts forward at full speed. The boy sprints out into the courtyard and begins the test in earnest. From above, the elder watches silently as the boy runs the circuit alone. The young lord settles into the run with serious focus. He keeps his pace steady, treating the task as more than a meaningless errand. While running, he reflects that he obeyed so readily because he had already guessed the true purpose of the exercise. He understands the run as a way to measure his aptitude as a disciple and determine whether he has the spark to grow. The elder's method comes from his old days as a mercenary captain, when he judged recruits through seemingly simple assignments. A trivial task, he believes, reveals far more than a formal test. By watching how a person responds to an unglamorous order, he can read their discipline and character. Their attitude under such pressure tells him what kind of student they will become. Meanwhile, the young lord continues running with unwavering determination. Even as he circles the yard, he remains aware that the elder is still evaluating him. The elder decides the boy has already shown a reasonably sound mindset. Now only one thing remains to be tested: his grit. The boy silently resolves to keep running until he collapses if that is what the trial demands. An hour passes, and instead of breaking down, he is startled by what his body is doing. He realizes he has been running for a very long time without feeling tired at all, which should not be possible. As his feet keep striking the ground, he notices the effort is becoming easier rather than harder. The longer he runs, the lighter his body feels, as though some hidden force is carrying him forward. He concludes that his body is somehow being nourished by mana and that the breathing exercise from earlier may have triggered it. He races past the elder again, now moving with unnatural ease. Watching this, the elder admits he only meant to gauge the boy's physical condition and current limits. Instead, what he is seeing violates all common sense. The boy shows no sweat, His breathing remains perfectly composed, and he is maintaining a level of bodily control difficult even for trained knights. That realization finally unsettles the elder. He begins to suspect the boy may already have crossed into something far beyond ordinary talent. The vast courtyard suddenly feels like the stage for a discovery either of them expected. The elder steps forward, surrounded by a faint aura, preparing to confront what he has noticed. He calls the run to an end and orders the young lord to stop. The boy slows and approaches, confused because nothing seemed wrong from his perspective. The elder states the truth directly. The boy is already using mana. To confirm his suspicion, he asks about the exercise the boy performed that morning to compose his mind and body. He presses further, asking whether that practice was not simple meditation at all, but true circulation. The blonde youth explains that after the earlier incident in the training hall, he practiced mana circulation on his own. He adds that there is no better way to learn than through direct experience, presenting his progress to the old master. The old man immediately realizes his suspicion about the boy was right. Wanting certainty, he asks permission to examine the youth's physical condition himself. He warns the boy not to move no matter what he feels and begins the inspection. As their hands meet, the master sends his senses into the boy's body to trace the flow of mana. The deeper he probes, the more he perceives an unusually vast and active circulation. What he finds unsettles him enough to break his composure. His shock turns into grave focus as he confirms the result. He concludes that the boy has already reached the end of mana circulation, though only halfway. To the master, this means the youth has stepped into a realm beyond even his own attainment. He realizes the child is opening an entirely new path of power. Back in the courtyard, the examination ends, but the old man remains deeply affected by what he learned. He releases the boy's hand, still weighing the implications. Then he asks the crucial question of how long the boy has been in this state. The youth pauses, sensing the seriousness behind the question. The master clarifies that he means the moment the boy reached the end of his mana circulation. Confused by the phrasing, the youth asks what that even means, and the master reminds him he just examined him. He explains that the boy's mana is extraordinarily pure. More than that, his mana core is shaped for perfect efficiency, like a flawless wheel. The master says this places him in a realm only a handful of warriors who devoted their lives to training ever reach. The youth admits he had suspected something unusual, and now understands he is close to a state of completion. Realizing the truth can no longer be hidden, he decides to speak openly about his condition. He reflects that he has long had questions about his own body and abilities. The master frames this as a matter only someone at the level of a sword saint could truly answer. The youth explains that he began mana circulation only about a month ago, and that all his mana pathways were open from the start. That answer leaves the old man stunned. The youth continues that he had heard circulation usually brings pain and blockages, but he experienced none of it. The master privately admits the boy surpasses even his highest expectations, since he himself only reached this level after decades of endurance. Thinking of legends made real, he decides to make a bold proposal despite the risk of overstepping. He carefully asks the youth to consider a different future. Specifically, he asks him to give up claiming succession to House Valdek. The request lands like a sudden shock. The youth recoils, unable to understand why he is being told to abandon his place as heir. He immediately fears this means something is wrong with his body, perhaps making swordsmanship or mana use dangerous for him. The master quickly corrects him and says the truth is the exact opposite. He declares that the boy's body is, in the most literal sense, an ideal vessel. Not only can it push mana efficiency to its absolute limit, it may also go beyond that limit entirely. The master explains that if the youth devoted himself solely to the sword, his potential would be extraordinary. In fact, becoming the next sword saint would be well within his reach. The youth is shaken by the realization that such a height may truly be possible for him. He compares this revelation to what he knew of Lucian's gifted body, and realizes his own potential exceeds anything he expected. He remembers believing that inheriting Lucian's sword talent had already given him the path he once desperately sought. Now he sees that the path before him may lead far beyond the level he had yearned for in his previous life. That possibility leaves him staring ahead in stunned thought. He imagines reaching the very end of the sword's path, a height beyond what he once thought possible. But he answers that the choice is not simple, because he cannot walk both the path of House Successor and the path of Sword Saint at once. The old man confirms that this is exactly the dilemma. He then reveals why he is forcing the issue now. He does not have much time left. Though his power still lets him move despite his age, he can no longer deny that his body is rapidly succumbing to old age. The blonde swordsman reflects that keeping everything intact while he remains alive would demand total devotion to the sword. He remembers that the Sword Saint will die in 8 years and realizes his own time is limited. Though he truly wants to refuse all distractions and focus only on swordsmanship, he cannot ignore what that choice would mean. He recalls that in this age of chaos, only martial strength allowed anyone to survive and matter. Those who endured the upheaval were the ones recognized as legitimate, and the sword became the measure of that right. Even so, he steels himself and prepares to answer the old knight's offer. He apologizes to Sir Eisen and says he intends to remain a Valdek until the very end. He respectfully declines, admitting the offer exceeds his station but insisting he cannot accept it. Sir Eisen blames himself instead, ashamed for forcing such a painful choice on him. The old man regrets that age has made him grasp at something he failed to secure in his youth. He confesses that he wanted to leave some trace of himself in the world through this young man. The refusal leaves the blonde swordsman quiet for a moment. Then he addresses Aizen again, not to reopen the refusal but to test a possibility. Facing the old master directly, he asks him to consider a different question. He frames it as a hypothetical about what Aizen would do if someone even more gifted appeared. With a calculating smile, he asks whether Aizen would choose another talent over him. Elsewhere, the story shifts to the Valdec Estate's training grounds under a bright summer sky. A rider tears across the field at speed, signaling urgent news. The young noble Joshua Valdec reins in his horse sharply as the messenger reaches him. A butler runs after him, struggling to catch up before the horse can move on again. Out of breath, the butler reports that news about the third son has been confirmed. Joshua halts to hear it, startled by the interruption. When he learns the rumors were true, his surprise turns immediately into alarm. He realizes that the supposedly foolish brother Lucian has been recognized as a new candidate to lead the house. Joshua dismounts at once, too agitated to stay in the saddle. The butler explains that the Grand Duke has officially included the third son in the line of succession and that the process is already underway. What enrages Joshua most is hearing that Lucian is even receiving sword training under Sir Aizen. He denounces Lucian as useless and fumes that his own narrow path to power is being squeezed further by his brothers. The realization that even neutral factions now have a fresh option pushes him into open panic. In his agitation, he throws aside the cloth he was holding. He lashes out at the butler, demanding to know why Lucian is being allowed near that man at all. When the butler urges caution, Joshua snaps that if Lucian truly has talent, all the support he has built could collapse. His resentment spills over into old grievances, including his hatred of being forced to call Lucian his elder brother despite their tiny age gap. Unable to calm himself, Joshua admits he cannot simply wait and watch. He decides there must be some way to stop this before Lucian gains momentum. So he asks the butler whether Lucian, having begun sword training, will soon need a sparring partner. Before the butler can object, Joshua orders 2 sharpened swords to be prepared. He makes clear that he wants real steel, not harmless practice weapons. Certain he can prove Lucian has not changed, Joshua resolves to expose him himself. Back in the courtyard, the blonde swordsman repeats his hypothetical to Sir Aizen about a greater talent appearing elsewhere. He argues that even if such a person took time to find, the reward would justify the wait. He suggests that someone with enough talent could preserve Sir Aizen's legacy far into the future. He pushes the idea further, saying that legacy could endure for centuries. Sir Aizen falls silent, unsure what to make of the strange argument. The blonde swordsman senses he may only have burdened the old man with an incomprehensible thought. Aizen gently dismisses the concern, touched that the young master thinks so kindly of him. He thanks him warmly, while the blonde swordsman hesitates, still wanting to say more. Privately, the young man concludes that his meaning must indeed have sounded like nonsense. He reasons that even famous swordsmen failed to impress Aizen, so of course the old master would not be moved by a novice recommending some unknown disciple. Even so, he remains unwilling to let the matter end there. A blond young man promises that what is coming next will be worth anticipating. The narration weighs Lucian's heaven-given talent with the sword against another prodigy who was likewise born for it. That comparison points to a swordsman who, despite a weaker body and an inferior style in his early years, still rose through sheer gift. In the snow, armored opponents rush him, only for the gap in ability to become immediately obvious. Their attack is swallowed by a single overwhelming burst of force. The swordsman cuts through them so cleanly that their throats open before they can even react. His blade keeps moving without pause, turning the battlefield into a place of instant death. The narration frames him as the pure embodiment of the sword, a man who simply swept across war by talent alone. Those around him are reduced to blood and silence while he stands untouched at the center of it. He is named Sword Demon Felix, a figure defined by terrifying mastery. Someone looking up at the stars declares that Felix will become his greatest disciple and the one who inherits everything from him. Back in the present, Lucian stands in a training hall before his elderly master, ready to be tested. The master decides to measure how far Lucian has progressed before beginning formal sword-style instruction. He orders Lucian to strike the dummy in sequence with vertical, horizontal, and diagonal cuts, then finish with a mana-infused blow. Lucian accepts the final condition, though the request makes him focus. As he grips the sword, he realizes this is his first time using Lucian's body to wield one directly. He resolves to hold back enough strength to match the body's limits, trusting that Lucian's prior training should still carry him through. He settles into stance with growing confidence. That confidence sharpens into intent as he commits to the sequence. He begins with a clean vertical strike. Without breaking rhythm, he follows with a horizontal cut. He completes the basic pattern with a diagonal slash. Then he prepares the final step of the test. He starts channeling mana into the blade. The moment the mana gathers, his focus spikes as he senses the timing and control involved. The empowered strike blasts the training dummy apart. The force erupts outward in a violent wave that tears through the hall. The aftermath leaves the floor and air churning with the path of the released power. Even pieces of Lucian's gear are blown loose by the recoil of his own attack. He lowers the sword, satisfied enough with the result. Privately, he judges the performance acceptable for a beginner, even if the body still feels awkward and limiting. He waits to see whether his master will demand more. The old man's silence immediately makes the mood uneasy. The master admits Lucian has surprised him, but not in the way Lucian expects. He bluntly calls the display pathetic, stunning Lucian. When Lucian asks why, the master says the problem is not lack of power but the way he fights. He says Lucian swings like a desperate mercenary concerned only with surviving, not like a swordsman grounded in fundamentals. The master explains that Lucian overcommits to power and speed, ruining the balance between body and mana and leaving obvious gaps in his movements. He presses further by asking how long Lucian needed to infuse mana into the sword for the final blow. Lucian answers that channeling mana into the blade took about 1 or 2 seconds. Only after saying it aloud does he realize that delay is the real issue his master is targeting. The implication hits him hard enough to make him freeze. To prove the point, the master suddenly places a wooden sword at Lucian's neck before he can respond. He states that 1 or 2 seconds is more than enough time for an enemy to take Lucian's head. The lesson, he says, begins with understanding that reality, because a fight can be decided in a single neglected instant. Lucian is shaken by how completely he failed to notice the attack until the blade was already touching him. That humiliation triggers a memory of his own past arrogance, and the moment he called himself a fool. He remembers that he once came close to dying with his heart torn out because he stayed complacent until the end. Taking the rebuke seriously, he vows to correct his bad habits and mindset before anything else. The master listens, seemingly satisfied that Lucian has finally understood the point of the lesson. The old sword master dismisses the boy's current skill as inadequate and explains that true swordsmanship begins with controlling mana so it strengthens the body instead of remaining scattered. He teaches that a sword's real power appears only when internal and external forces are merged into one harmonious flow, the principle behind his style. To make the lesson concrete, he begins a brutal demonstration rather than leaving the idea abstract. A practice target is set up as the focus of that demonstration. The target is suddenly struck with overwhelming force. The impact obliterates it, showing how completely concentrated power differs from ordinary strength. The master tells the boy this is the path he must now follow if he wants to become worthy of the sword. A few days later, the training has advanced into direct instruction. Their wooden swords meet as the boy is put through repeated live drills. The exchange quickly becomes one-sided, with the master breaking through every attack. While deflecting him effortlessly, the master warns that the flow of mana through the body must never be interrupted. He adds that physical technique alone is not enough. Instinctive mana control must become just as natural as movement. He presses further, explaining that mana must reinforce the whole body while still leaving enough power to be directed elsewhere. The key, he says, is to place that power exactly where it is needed at the exact moment it is needed. When the boy tries a forceful aerial strike, the master stops it without effort. As he sends the boy flying back, he says only perfect harmony between these elements reveals the true essence of the sword. The boy crashes across the arena, battered but still trying to keep up. Refusing to give in, he regains his footing and prepares another attack. Even so, strain and uncertainty show that he still has not fully grasped the method. The master watches calmly, already aware of that gap. He raises the stakes by drawing a real blade infused with green energy, and orders the boy to defend himself using what he has learned. The lesson shifts from sparring to a genuine test, forcing the boy to face the technique under real danger. The master instructs him to read the enemy's speed and trajectory first, then answer with precisely measured force. He attacks with a heavy descending strike wrapped in concentrated power. In that instant, the boy recalls that the core of the master's teaching is unity with nature, like water following a seamless flow. He realizes that this flow closes the gaps in one's form and prevents energy from being wasted. Steadying himself, he refuses to panic and keeps his focus fixed on the attack in front of him. At last he gathers blue mana into his own blade, trying to reproduce that principle instead of merely resisting by force. He surges forward to meet the strike head-on. Their blades lock, and the boy strains to maintain the flow he has just begun to understand. For the first time, the master sees the boy's power align properly against his own. The clash erupts in a burst of energy, proving the boy has successfully applied the lesson. That result catches the master off guard. He notices the boy's blade has endured the exchange instead of collapsing under his power. The master ends the session there, and tells him to engrave today's sensation into his body. He declares that this understanding alone is enough to make him a first-class swordsman. The exhausted boy can only laugh weakly in disbelief. Spent from the ordeal, he drops to the ground trembling while the master approaches. He lies there gasping, barely able to process how severe the training has been. Even from the ground, he sincerely thanks his master for the lesson. The ruined courtyard and repair crews make clear how destructive the training has become. One onlooker quietly wonders what kind of training could have caused damage on this scale. Others worry whether the young master can survive much more of it. Later, the scene settles into silence inside the castle. The boy rests alone against a wall, worn out but still faintly pleased to have made it through. He reflects that he somehow survived the day's session. Feeling his shaking hand, he thinks it is strange that such harsh training may actually have been designed to break the bad habits he carried from his previous life. He concludes that the cruelty of the method had a purpose beyond simple punishment. Accepting that, he decides the pain is worth enduring if it is what it takes to correct those flaws. Looking at his damaged wooden sword, he realizes that because of this training, he was able to grasp the concept far faster than expected. While enduring training in the hall, Lucian reflects that the old master's guidance impresses him more the longer he experiences it. He realizes the master keeps creating crises precisely matched to his current limits, and draws out the right response with exact instruction. That level of guidance should have been impossible unless the master could read his body's condition almost completely. Lucian understands that by surrendering himself to those teachings, he has been able to feel his own growth directly. He compares this to his past life, when he only chased hidden techniques and never truly grasped how to let his body and flow answer naturally. Looking at his wooden sword, he realizes the most important factor had been inside him all along. As he tightens his grip, he bitterly thinks that if he had learned this before, his path would have been very different. His thoughts shift to a deadly memory of facing a powerful swordsman amid swirling pressure. In that recollection, the enemy stands calmly before him, radiating the confidence of someone far beyond ordinary challengers. Lucian wonders how much nearer his swordsmanship might have come to that man if he had understood these lessons earlier. The opponent's cold stare reminds him of the overwhelming gap that once existed between them. The memory turns to the moment Lucian accepted the challenge to kill, or be killed, with a dangerous grin. He remembers launching himself into a violent clash without hesitation. Their blades met at close range, and the encounter became a contest of murderous intent as much as skill. Back in the present, Lucian lifts his practiced sword and regrets that the day's training is ending just as it became interesting. He complains inwardly that stopping now feels wasteful. Already hungry for more, he starts wondering whether there is anyone nearby worth testing himself against. That thought is interrupted when he notices people approaching. He recognizes one of them and immediately focuses on the newcomer. The old master opens his eyes as the visitor offers a polished greeting and addresses him respectfully. The fourth young master, Joshua, presents himself with practiced charm, flanked by attendants. The master welcomes Joshua but makes clear he is in the middle of training Lucian and asks the reason for this sudden visit. When the master suggests returning later, Joshua smoothly insists that will not be necessary. One of Joshua's attendants prompts him to explain himself more directly. Joshua answers with a smile that his purpose should already be obvious. He claims that since his older brother has begun sword training in earnest, he wants to help by serving as a practice partner. With false warmth, Joshua turns the proposal toward Lucian as though seeking his approval. Lucian's hand tightens on the wooden sword as he immediately sees through the act. Instead of annoyance, he feels a flash of excitement, deciding that the opponent he wanted has arrived on his own. The room settles into a tense standoff, as everyone understands the request carries more than simple goodwill. The master questions Joshua's real meaning, repeating the claim that he merely wants to help Lucian train. Joshua reframes it as a harmless test of Lucian's practical use of mana. He openly volunteers to be Lucian's opponent. He dresses the challenge in family-minded language, pretending this is a rare chance for brothers to interact. Then he adds a courteous appeal to the master, presenting the request as respectful despite his intrusion. Lucian rises, signaling that he intends to answer the provocation himself. He thinks with dry contempt that the children of this house are experts at coding hostility in polite words. Parsing Joshua's phrasing, Lucian notes how shamelessly the younger brother barged in while calling it help and interaction. He also recognizes the deeper insult. Joshua deliberately chose to challenge an older brother who has barely begun formal training. Lucian concludes that Joshua's real aim is to suppress him publicly and reinforce his own standing. Joshua's confidence makes the scheme plain, because under the excuse of helping family, no one can easily object. The master realizes that if the family patriarch endorses the duel, it will carry even more political weight. Lucian presses him to allow it, reasoning that even a small display of strength could help restrain Sir Eisen's faction and the succession pressure around him. The master hesitates, worried that refusing now could place Sir Eisen in an awkward position. Lucian steps forward, making his decision before the adults can stall further. He formally asks that Joshua's proposal be accepted. Facing Joshua, Lucian answers the younger man's false devotion with an equally polished smile. He coolly notes that Joshua's behavior only proves how childish he is if he thought transparent coercion would succeed. Joshua's smile hardens as he promises to teach his older brother a lesson himself. Lucian fires back that Joshua should worry less about lecturing others and more about not putting Sir Eisen in a worse position again. The elder realizes both boys understand each other's true intentions and are determined to settle this directly. Believing the earlier bloodshed has at least led to this clarity, he agrees to permit the duel. He warns them it will be the last such match and promises to stop it the moment it becomes dangerous. The two young masters accept his terms and formally commit themselves to the bout. Lucian leans into the role of elder brother, inviting Joshua to make this a proper duel between them. Joshua answers with eager confidence, clearly ready to prove himself. Under the elder's supervision, the brothers take their places in the courtyard and face each other. The elder frames the duel as a test of what they have learned, not a fight meant to injure. He reminds Lucian that, as the third young master, he must approach this with the humility of a student. He also reminds Joshua that, as the fourth young master who chose the sword first, he bears the responsibility of a senior. With both of them carrying the family name, the elder demands they duel in a way that does not disgrace it. He gives the signal for them to declare their intent by drawing their swords. Both brothers unsheathe their blades and the test truly begins. Joshua is thrown off by how naturally Lucian is acting like an older brother. That irritation quickly turns into resentment as Joshua recalls how Lucian always lorded that tiny age gap over him. He decides to shut Lucian up by winning the duel. Joshua's competitiveness sharpens into a personal need to prove who truly stands above the other, regardless of birth order. Lucian notices the ferocity in Joshua's expression and is struck by how extreme it is. He pushes that thought aside and focuses on the fight itself. Feeling a real sword in his hand again after 2 months, Lucian steadies himself. He reflects that his former self would have relied on every dirty trick available to win. Instead, he resolves to meet Joshua properly, as a third young master should. Even so, he worries that if he unconsciously slips into the sword style from his past life, it will be noticed. With the elder watching closely, Lucian knows any such mistake would be hard to hide. He reminds himself that Joshua may be sharp and suspicious, but he is still inexperienced in the wider world. At the same time, Joshua notices Lucian's lapse in focus and takes it as an opening. He taunts Lucian for holding real steel, pretending concern while trying to unsettle him. Joshua keeps pressing, claiming accidents happen with real swords only when opponents are evenly matched. Lucian answers with dry agreement, implying Joshua is nowhere near that level. That single reply makes Lucian abandon any thought of being gentle or reasonable. He warns Joshua that if he does not want to get hurt, he should be prepared for a harsh lesson. Lucian fully embraces the role of the elder brother who intends to discipline a defiant junior. The words little brother hit Joshua's pride exactly where it hurts. Provoked beyond restraint, Joshua launches forward first. He commits to a fast opening charge, trying to overwhelm Lucian immediately. Joshua vows to make Lucian regret those words. Lucian braces himself, knowing he must hold back enough not to seriously injure him. Even so, he recognizes Joshua's swordsmanship as the product of the Sword Saint's training and not something to dismiss. Lucian also notes a major limitation. After his earlier duel with the Sword Saint, most of his mana is already spent. Still, he judges Joshua's biggest weakness to be his inexperience, especially how easily he was baited. Lucian plants his footing and begins channeling what mana he has left with precision. He applies the Sword Saint's teachings on concentrating power and circulating mana through the body. Rather than meeting Joshua head-on, Lucian moves to create a decisive angle. He bursts forward with a mana-assisted dash, cutting across the field in a sudden blue streak. Seeing the opening, Joshua prepares to seize that brief moment and turn it to his advantage. The elder instantly realizes the exchange is becoming more dangerous than expected. The onlookers are also caught off guard by how intense the clash has become. Lucian orders Joshua to clench down and block properly before impact. He follows with a brutal warning that a weak defense will leave Joshua injured even by his own body's recoil. As the collision erupts with explosive force, someone cries out Joshua's name. A younger brother in green is forced to one knee as he struggles to hold back his blonde older brother's blade. The older brother looms over him with clear superiority, making it obvious he controls the exchange. He taunts him with a lesson about manhood, framing strength as the ability to endure and stay standing. The younger brother snaps back into motion, refusing to remain humiliated beneath him. His anger boils over before he can contain it. He explodes into a furious counterattack, trying to drown out the taunt with force. The clash sends power rippling across the arena, but the older brother remains planted against the surge. Breathing hard, the younger brother convinces himself the earlier success he had was only a lucky hit. He swears he will not allow another opening and throws himself forward even more recklessly. His blade carves a wide arc as he presses the attack, determined to overwhelm his brother. He closes the distance aggressively, trying to turn momentum into a decisive finish. The older brother meets him head-on and blocks cleanly, denying that attempt as well. Instead of calming down, the younger brother grows more feral and intent on winning through sheer aggression. The older brother watches him with cold focus, reading him rather than being rattled. A rapid exchange follows, with the younger brother pouring out strike after strike while the older brother deflects and maneuvers. For a moment the younger brother senses something shifting and realizes the fight is not unfolding the way he expected. The older brother tightens his resolve and prepares to answer that pressure with his own timing. Their blades collide in a violent burst, either side yielding in the center of the clash. From outside the duel, 2 older attendants watch the battle through the storm of force. The butler grows alarmed that the spar is becoming dangerous and asks whether it should be stopped. He explains that Joshua has always been sensitive about Lucian because they are close in age and constantly compared, feeding Joshua's resentment. He adds that whenever Lucian is involved, Joshua stops listening to reason. Sir Eisen dismisses the concern and says the feared accident will not happen. In his view, Joshua may be attacking wildly, but he is too foolish to understand his own limits and the true weight of the contest. Eisen warns that the real danger would come if their positions were reversed, leaving the butler confused by what he means. Eisen's expression hardens as he judges the fight more deeply. He notes that the gap in skill is real, but that fact alone does not decide what follows. He sees Lucian as someone born with extraordinary natural potential that has not yet fully matured. By contrast, Joshua has only ordinary talent, but relentless training has pushed him into a completed and polished form. That is why Joshua could dominate the early exchange, and why Lucian's first breakthrough came partly through luck. But Aizen also sees Joshua ruining his own advantage by losing control of his temper. At the same time, Lucian has been waiting calmly for exactly that lapse. Aizen judges that keeping such composure before a real blade means Lucian has already conquered fear. That fearlessness suggests he is not merely gifted but someone who can act decisively under mortal pressure. To Aizen, Lucian carries the boldness of a person who has already crossed the boundary between life and death. He concludes that this darker, harder possibility is the truth of Lucian's character. Back in the duel, the force of their exchange tears into the ground as the pressure peaks. Joshua keeps swinging in a frenzy, trying to batter through Lucian's defense with raw intensity. Yet even as he attacks, he cannot understand where the caution and restraint he showed earlier have gone. Lucian realizes Joshua is no longer fighting to win cleanly but is enjoying the chance to crush the brother he envies. Lucian feels every block rattle through his body, confirming how dangerous Joshua still is despite his loss of discipline. He admits to himself that he had intended to finish the duel in a single decisive blow. That plan depended on Joshua fully falling for provocation and leaving himself open at once. Instead, Joshua proved stronger than expected and Lucian lacked the mana needed to suppress him in one strike. Now Lucian realizes his reserves are so low he cannot even reinforce his own body much longer. With no safer option left, he decides to gamble everything on the next exchange. He launches into that final commitment, meeting Joshua's charge with a sudden change in rhythm and weight. Joshua immediately notices Lucian's sword has become unexpectedly heavy and starts to question what Lucian is doing. He dismisses the possibility of hidden strength, reasoning that Lucian is too drained for that. Convinced this is only Lucian's last desperate struggle, Joshua commits himself to crushing it. Joshua tries to end the duel in one decisive blow, convinced he can overpower his opponent at once. He throws his full strength into the attack with reckless confidence. Lucian appears cornered for an instant, lowering his head as if exhausted and vulnerable. But Lucian is calm, because Joshua's aggression is exactly what he wanted to provoke. Joshua's strike crashes down with tremendous force, blasting apart the ground instead of hitting its target. The miss shocks him, because Lucian did more than evade the attack. Joshua realizes something is wrong. Lucian had been smiling, as if he had predicted this outcome from the start. That smile makes it clear Joshua may have walked straight into a trap of Lucian's design. Lucian addresses him by name and points out that Joshua swung blindly, never noticing that the older brother's weakness was an act. Joshua is forced to understand that Lucian deliberately used his worn-out appearance to lure him in. Lucian mocks him for falling for something so simple and claims this is why Joshua remains the younger, inferior brother. The insult cuts deeper than the feint, and Joshua's anger flares. He refuses to accept the humiliation and insists Lucian can lecture him only after actually winning. Joshua tries to recover by driving his weapon forward at close range. He commits to the counterattack, hoping to seize back control before Lucian can press the advantage. Lucian intercepts the attempt effortlessly, stopping Joshua's weapon with his boot. In the same motion, Lucian pins Joshua down and leaves him kneeling in a losing position. Joshua strains against the pressure, but Lucian makes clear he will do as he pleases regardless of Joshua's resistance. Looking down on him, Lucian turns the moment into a lesson and asks what Joshua thinks will happen next. Joshua's defiance breaks into fear, and he appeals to Lucian as his brother. Lucian raises his sword overhead, making the threat unmistakable. He coldly notes that Joshua remembers their bond only when he is in danger. The courtyard falls under the weight of that threat as the duel reaches its most dangerous point. Word of the confrontation between the brothers spreads rapidly through the household. Servants and attendants begin repeating the story, claiming Lucian overwhelmed Joshua. Some doubt the rumor at first, but the fact that the Sword Saint was present gives it credibility. The gossip grows with every retelling, adding that Joshua returned crushed and even in tears. Because the details are close enough to the truth, the rumor moves quickly and convincingly through the estate. As it spreads, the tale is exaggerated just enough to damage Joshua further while elevating Lucian. Others seek confirmation from Hugo, wanting the full account of what really happened that day. At the same time, Lucian quietly feeds the story himself, presenting Joshua's defeat as fact and even treating the seized sword like a trophy. Hugo realizes the supposedly secret matter has already spread far beyond control. Lucian continues the performance with cheerful innocence, making the humiliation sound like common knowledge. In truth, the entire rumor campaign is being orchestrated by one person. While the estate buzzes with gossip, that unseen hand calmly continues its work. Lucian stands apart in his room, composed and satisfied as the consequences unfold exactly as intended. He reflects that the atmosphere is perfect for rumors to multiply on their own. Pleased, he decides this outcome is enough for now and leaves Joshua with only a measured amount of damage. Joshua's desperate appeal to brotherhood still hangs over the memory of the duel. So does the image of Lucian's sword poised to decide everything. Lucian's contempt in that moment made clear that Joshua's plea earned no sympathy. The duel setting remained silent and imposing, emphasizing how completely Joshua had lost control. At last Joshua panics and admits he was wrong, begging Lucian for forgiveness. Lucian answers that surrender with a faint, unreadable smile. Instead of killing him, Lucian brings his blade down in a controlled strike beside Joshua. The blow shatters Joshua's sword, destroying his weapon and with it the last of his resistance. Lucian warns that if Joshua ever pulls a stunt like this again, the outcome will be far uglier. He orders Joshua to stay out of his affairs and learn his place. Then he leans in close and makes sure Joshua understands the warning as a personal threat, not a passing rebuke. Back in his room, Lucian instructs that the troublesome young master be kept away for a while, already managing the aftermath as neatly as he managed the duel. Lucian studies a secret message and weighs whether to move against House Marquis Lagran. The letter presents a covert opportunity tied to that house, forcing him to decide how far he will go. Across from him, his father reacts with immediate tension, signaling that the matter is serious. He identifies the document as the secret message Lucian received from Hugo and demands clarity. Lucian confirms it without hesitation, showing he has already considered the implications. He explains that in 1 week, in Bestra, the targets will meet with someone from the Lucian side, placing the affair in contested territory. His father dismisses the setup as absurd, seeing it as an obvious trap or provocation. Lucian argues that even if the territory has weakened, it still lies close enough to Kelheim that the enemy likely assumes his father cannot intervene directly. His father recognizes the logic and reduces the situation to a blind spot the enemy intends to exploit. He then presses Lucian to reveal why he has brought this report to him instead of handling it alone. Lucian admits that despite being entrusted with the matter, he came because he lacks something essential. What he wants, he says plainly, is power. He frames the situation like a hunt, insisting that knowing where prey is trapped means little without the means to strike. Lucian makes clear that information alone is useless unless he can secure the tools to act on it. His father understands the request but pointedly notes that Lucian came because those tools belong to him. He warns that asking for help may be rational, but claiming the resulting success as Lucian's own achievement would be hollow. He challenges Lucian to say whether he truly believes others would recognize borrowed strength as his merit. Lucian absorbs the accusation in silence, refusing to retreat from the confrontation. His father lays down his creed: a hunter earns a name only by catching prey with his own strength, and he had hoped Lucian would not seek an easier result. He reminds Lucian that he was given both authority and opportunity to resolve the matter himself, yet chose safety over challenge. The rebuke sharpens into a direct test of character as his father asks whether this cautious answer is truly all Lucian can offer. Forced to answer plainly, Lucian stands his ground under his father's demand. He replies that if the hunt can be completed by the safer route, he will take it. Lucian openly declares that he has no pride in choosing danger for its own sake. His father studies him closely, realizing Lucian is not speaking out of fear but conviction. Lucian argues that the royal road of risking everything is a path for those who already possess power. He rejects the idea that trembling before a beast and calling it courage is true bravery, calling that mindset reckless rather than noble. In his view, even a successful reckless act lacks judgment and ultimately destroys trust. He insists the point of the hunt was never the spectacle of danger but the protection of what mattered. So if the threat can be removed with certainty, he sees no value in treating that as an inferior victory. He adds that practicality does not mean he intends to become meek or harmless. To prove it, Lucian reaches toward the flowers beside them as he continues his argument. He warns that if credit is always reserved for the one who acts most visibly, then succession will be decided before true ability can even be tested. His point lands hard. The heir to inherit the bow would already be chosen long before others had a fair chance to draw it. His father falls silent, taking in the full weight of that challenge. At last he concedes that Lucian's answer is sufficient. He admits it has been a long time since anyone, especially his own son, argued so directly to his face. Lucian accepts the acknowledgement, and states that a man must have conviction in the path he chooses. His father agrees in principle, noting that anyone shaken by a single word can accomplish nothing. Lucian realizes the harsh exchange was a deliberate test, and his father confirms he wanted to see whether authority alone could sway him. The lesson behind the test is that a leader who cannot find his own answer will wander endlessly. His father pushes the point further: no one will trust or follow a man who cannot even defend his own beliefs. Lucian understands that this severity was not cruelty but preparation for the burden of leading the house. Though inwardly exasperated by his father's methods, he recognizes that the conversation has turned in his favor. He asks directly for support in the operation, now that he has proven his resolve. His father agrees to provide the necessary tools, but only through a discreet deployment because a large movement would draw attention. He specifies that only a small elite group will be sent so the house can act without exposing itself. Lucian immediately understands and suggests using some of the family's most capable knights. His father makes the final decision and grants him the Black Lions for the mission. With that choice, Lucian receives not just aid but one of the house's strongest hidden weapons, turning the coming hunt into a far deadlier operation. A week after arriving in the ruined Vestria region, the pair finds a town so devastated it barely seems more than wreckage. The young master confirms the rumors were understated, sensing almost no life left anywhere nearby. Hugo explains that despite lying close to Kelmith, the city was drained long ago, lost its former role as a trade hub, and became a refuge for drifters. He reveals that this desolation is exactly why he chose the place as their base of operations. As they walk, Hugo presses his master about how he somehow knew every detail of the plan when even trusted seniors were kept ignorant. The young master only answers with quiet confidence, making clear he has reasons Hugo is not yet meant to know. He promises an explanation later and redirects Hugo to the real issue, the prey they are waiting to catch. To make sure nothing has gone wrong, he asks whether the trap was prepared exactly as ordered. Hugo reports that the factory has been staged to match the false intelligence they fed their target, with crates arranged as convincing cover. He adds that the requested item is ready as well, though the operation still depends on outside reinforcements to finish the job. That reliance troubles Hugo, who feels ashamed that he cannot resolve the matter through his own strength. He quickly insists he understands the stakes and knows they cannot afford even a single mistake. Still, Hugo admits his frustration at his own limits and wishes he were strong enough to handle everything alone. The young master reassures him that Hugo still has the potential to become someone remarkable. He softens the moment with a hand on Hugo's shoulder, grounding his loyal retainer before his frustration can deepen. He tells Hugo that he understands those feelings, but reminds him that this is only the beginning of their path. His words frame their struggle as the start of a much longer journey rather than a test to be won immediately. He warns Hugo not to let impatience cloud his judgment and pull them away from the course they have chosen. Then he lightens the mood by teasing Hugo for being only 30 and therefore still having plenty of time to grow. Hugo dryly corrects him that he is only 23, making the attempted encouragement suddenly awkward. The young master is caught completely off guard by the correction. For a beat, both of them are left in embarrassed silence as the failed joke hangs between them. He recovers by admitting the mistake only makes him feel worse, while Hugo lets the matter drop. A sudden disturbance overhead breaks the lull and signals that something is finally changing. With the appointed time nearly upon them, the young master grows uneasy that their expected guests still have not appeared. That uncertainty ends the instant an unseen presence addresses him directly as the third young master. Hugo reacts at once, drawing his weapon toward the source before it can strike. But his counter is intercepted immediately, his blade stopped before it can even begin to move. A black-clad man appears in front of him and halts the attack with effortless force. The newcomer dismisses Hugo's response as far too slow. Hugo realizes the man's physical strength exceeds normal human limits, and that his grip has completely neutralized his weapon. For the first time, Hugo finds himself physically overpowered and rendered helpless by a single opponent. The young master orders Hugo to stand down at once. He clarifies that this man is not their enemy, stopping the clash before it can escalate. Even so, he demands to know why the newcomer approached with such obvious killing intent. The answer identifies the intruder as a member of the Black Guard. The tension eases as Hugo lowers his stance, though the arrival has already proven how overwhelming the man is. Hugo then realizes the reinforcements mentioned earlier were not ordinary allies at all, but the legendary Black Guard. The name carries the weight of a secretive elite force feared for inhuman capability and absolute loyalty. The young master confirms Hugo's guess and reveals that these hunters were summoned specifically to support this mission. More members emerge from concealment, showing that the first man was only part of the unit. Their leader steps forward, calm and disciplined, making their presence feel even more ominous. He formally greets the third young master, acknowledging him with full respect. He explains that the earlier move was merely a test of Hugo's reflexes and assures them the Black Guard bears no hostility. The young master reflects that even in another life he had doubted the Black Guard truly existed, so hidden was their reputation. Now faced with them directly, he concludes that the terrifying rumors about their silent, ghost-like methods were entirely true. He realizes with alarm that he had failed to sense them approaching and still cannot properly read them even while they stand nearby. Surrounded by these unreadable operatives, he recognizes each member of the Black Guard as a monster in human form. Instead of fear, that realization leaves him quietly pleased. He judges the situation incredible, already seeing that this development gives him a far greater advantage than he expected. Amid a town left in ruins, a surviving building becomes the base for a carefully planned operation. Inside, a superior confirms that the Logran family has taken the bait and arrived exactly as intended. The blonde young master is reminded that his only true objective is to capture the mastermind behind the affair alive. He is also granted full authority to kill everyone else once they cross the line, with no mercy shown. A seasoned knight formally leaves the remaining decisions in the young master's hands. The knight realizes their Grand Duke's deployment here was never just about stopping the third young master from driving off Hans, but about a larger hidden aim. He acknowledges that the blonde youth has handled the unexpected situation with remarkable composure and judgment. The young master heads out, intent on assessing every possible variable before the trap is sprung. The knight concludes that this mission may mark the beginning of a new era for the family under this young master. With that understanding, the group declares itself ready to move. As evening falls, the target location awaits the arrival of the nobles they lured in. A luxurious carriage rolls in, carrying the Logran family into the snare. The carriage is open to receive its important passenger. Inside, a young noble complains that the trip has been unbearably dull. He makes clear he came only because his father ordered it, not because he wanted anything to do with this place. He steps down from the carriage, already treating the visit as an unpleasant obligation. Wiping his face in disgust, He resolves to finish whatever this is quickly and leave. Identified as Philip Logran, the family's second son, he openly despises the place and everyone associated with it. The warehouse doors open as if to welcome him deeper inside. A servant rushes out with exaggerated apologies, pretending to be flustered by the arrival of such distinguished guests. One of Philip's guards immediately stops the servant at sword point and demands identification. The hooded servant humbly claims to be their underboss Hugo's orders to guide them. Behind the submissive act, the servant hides a mocking confidence and presents himself as beneath notice. Philip dismisses him as filth unworthy of conversation and orders his men onward, while the servant gratefully plays along. Privately, the disguised youth recognizes Philip's arrogance as proof that he has caught a more valuable target than expected. Philip's speech and easy contempt convince him that this noble was raised to command and feels no danger yet. He identifies Philip as one of the Marquis' sons, confirming the significance of the catch. He quickly counts the guards and judges them manageable, likely no more than a dozen apprentice knights at best. Still, he marks the knight at Philip's side as the one real threat in the room. As he keeps up the servant act, he also notes how absurd it is that maids were brought into a place like this. He covers his scrutiny by pretending to panic and hurry ahead like a fool dazzled by nobility. Even while moving, one maid catches his attention and unsettles him with a sense of familiarity. Seeing the maids more clearly, he is shaken by the possibility that one of them resembles someone he knows too well. He tries to dismiss the resemblance as coincidence, and forces himself back to the task. He slips away from immediate notice, repositioning himself inside the warehouse. Meanwhile, Philip complains that the building is even fouler inside and that the smell itself offends him. He sneers that commoner Hugo must have embezzled his family's funds to make the exterior look respectable enough to deceive others. A man approaches from within, answering Philip's insult by implying that what matters is what lies beneath appearances. The newcomer reveals himself as Hugo and greets Philip directly, confirming he is the man in charge. With both sides assembled, Hugo taunts Philip for finally showing himself, and jokes that perhaps the Lograns wanted a larger share after all. He adds that Philip's personal visit, despite all prior reports, proves the noble's curiosity has overcome caution. Hugo hints at a dangerous item whose very existence can corrupt a person to the core. The object is revealed to be a set of glowing crystal fragments. Delighted by Philip's interest, Hugo promises to show the item at once. Watching this exchange, the disguised blonde youth notes that Hugo lies smoothly enough to justify having trusted him with the setup. Philip, still acting superior, warns that if the results disappoint him, Hugo will pay for it. He then orders the supposed servant to fetch the item from Hugo, assuming the hooded youth is merely another obedient underling. The disguised youth immediately relays the request, asking Hugo to hand over the prepared item. Hugo passes the crystal over without resistance, trusting the exchange to proceed normally. But the instant their eyes meet over the handoff, both men sense that the balance of control is about to shift. A hooded ally reveals that the flash magic stone is already in hand. Without hesitation, the ally rushes forward to carry out the delivery personally. They hurl the stone upward, intent on triggering it over everyone in the room. The young master realizes too late that something reckless and dangerous is happening. As the device falls, he panics over the fact that they are using a highly valuable object. The thrown blade strikes the stone and activates it on impact. A blinding burst erupts from the crystal, and the young master orders his guards to shield him. The flash floods the entire estate, overwhelming everyone nearby. Caught in the glare, the attackers protect their own eyes while the room descends into confusion. The guards are left exposed and helpless as their vision is stolen. Even outside, the light pours across the estate and spreads the disruption further. Blinded men cry out in pain and confusion, unable to understand what is happening. The young master, also incapacitated, furiously calls for his guards and threatens punishment when no one answers. As the silence continues, his anger gives way to fear. At last one guard answers, letting him know someone is still alive nearby. The young master immediately demands protection instead of trying to understand the situation. A lone figure emerges through the fading light, approaching him. The wounded guard uses his last strength to warn the young master to flee. Dying, the captain reveals the truth. They were betrayed from within. The young master stares in disbelief as the captain collapses before him. He struggles to process the accusation and the sudden collapse of his security. As his vision clears, the scale of the massacre becomes visible around him. The infiltrators continue eliminating survivors, cutting down anyone still standing. Even the household staff are struck down in the purge. The young master can only scream as the slaughter unfolds around him. The shattered device is identified as a rare flash magic stone, prized because a single impact can instantly blind enemies. That explanation makes the result undeniable. The attackers used that brief opening to seize total control. In that moment, the Marquis' guards were wiped out before they could respond. A black-cloaked swordsman stands over the bloodshed, confirming the operation's ruthless efficiency. Their leader calmly reports that every threat has been neutralized and says he will escort the captured pair to Lechium. Hearing that destination, the blonde captive begins connecting the plot behind the attack. He recalls a warning that if the beauty of the estate became a burden, he should bear it himself, and he starts to understand who engineered this. Meanwhile, the young master tries to reassert authority, ordering the intruders to keep their distance and demanding they remember his status. He loudly identifies himself as the fourth son of House Logran, hoping his name will still protect him. A silver-haired operative dismisses the threat and informs him that Grand Duke Valdek will decide his fate, ordering him to submit quietly. That name shatters his confidence, and panic replaces his bluster. He realizes the disguised commoner he targeted was actually connected to House Valdek. With that revelation, he understands why he has been captured so completely and desperately calls for guards who are no longer there. The blonde captive confirms the truth to himself. The fight is over and no threats remain. Then he is jolted by a new realization when something impossible catches his attention. A maid is granted permission to take up a sword, as if she is expected to handle what remains herself. The sight of the weapon at her feet deepens the sense of impossible familiarity. She draws and moves with practiced precision, revealing skill far beyond that of an ordinary servant. Her grip on the sword confirms complete confidence and control. The blonde captive recognizes the maid as someone tied to the sword demon Illis, making her identity impossible to dismiss. From above, the room is now a finished execution ground, with the young master cornered before the maid while the others watch. The young master recognizes her as Felicia and turns to her in desperate hope. Begging for rescue, he offers anything if she will just get him out alive. Felicia answers with cold contempt, making clear she has not forgotten the insult done to her low-born mother. As the others remain still, the young master realizes too late that the woman he expected to protect him has every reason to abandon him. The purple-haired fighter warns the others to stay silent if they want to survive. A blade is stopped at close range, showing the confrontation has already turned lethal. The disguised maid reveals open contempt and attacks, done with hiding or enduring humiliation. From a distance, the white-haired swordsman dismisses the deception as pathetic and sees through the attempt to preserve dignity. The purple-haired fighter receives his acknowledgement as someone with real resolve. Even so, the white-haired man offers what he calls mercy, urging this child and woman not to throw away their life against him. His cold stare makes clear that this mercy comes from superiority, not kindness. The fighter answers by raising a glowing sword, choosing battle without hesitation. The white-haired swordsman accepts that choice and prepares to end the matter. He launches forward with explosive force, turning the floor itself into the start of his assault. The two rush straight into each other, blades meeting in a direct clash. Instead of faltering, the purple-haired fighter meets the charge with calm confidence. In the instant before impact, sharp perception lets the fighter read the incoming strike. That awareness narrows the world to the enemy's blade and the opening around it. Using that opening, the fighter slips past the attack and counters at close range. The counter is delivered with unsettling composure, as if this danger was expected. The exchange continues at high speed, with the white-haired swordsman forced to adjust to an opponent he had underestimated. He drives upward with another thrust, but the fighter twists through the attack rather than retreating from it. For the first time, the white-haired man realizes he is facing something abnormal. That realization hardens into shock as he understands the attack pattern is beyond ordinary swordplay. Blood is drawn, proving the fighter's evasion and timing were enough to wound him. The fighter moves in a way that depends on instant recognition rather than conventional form, staying fluid and unhindered. A blonde observer identifies the style as unconventional movement that ignores normal restrictions. Other onlookers in the hall watch the duel with growing attention as the balance shifts. The fighter's face confirms the suspicion forming among those who know the past. Memory and recognition align, connecting this swordsman to an earlier identity. The observers realize the maid is actually Felix, the famed sword demon, whose elegance never fit the mercenary world. A recollection surfaces of that former self standing apart even among fellow fighters. Felix had always stood out for a slight frame and striking beauty that made the disguise believable in hindsight. The truth becomes clear: Felicia, an illegitimate child, left the family and survived by living as the man called Felix. Felicia judges that a moment's delay would have cost her head, acknowledging how narrow her survival has been. The blood on the floor marks the price of facing a superior master directly. The white-haired swordsman admits he misread her and that her hidden fangs were far sharper than he assumed. He casts aside his pride and decides to treat her as a true enemy at last. With that decision, he unleashes a far more violent power, flooding the hall with murderous force. Felicia immediately understands the gap between them. He is a master several levels above her, and luck will not save her. Even so, she keeps thinking clearly instead of surrendering to fear. She notes an even stronger swordsman waits upstairs, making this battle only the first impossible wall. An observer adds that beyond those swordsmen, an even greater being surpasses them all. Faced with that chain of death, Felicia concludes there is almost no chance of surviving. So if this strike is to be her last, she resolves to attack without regret. The watchers admire her resolve, noting that she is confronting Nixon's bloodlust head-on without wavering. One of them senses the decisive moment approaching and falls silent. A drop of blood hits the floor as the hall seems to pause before the final exchange. Nixon charges across the room while Felicia steadies herself to meet him rather than flee. Both vanish into blinding speed, their movements reducing to streaks of force. Their blades collide in a violent burst of blue and crimson light. The clash continues in crossing arcs, each strike aimed to settle the duel immediately. Someone watching can barely comprehend what they are seeing as the outcome turns unreadable. The final instant lands with stunned realization, as if the result has exceeded every expectation. Felicia and the white-haired attacker drive their blades into a violent clash, pushing the fight to a dangerous peak. A third voice cuts through the chaos and orders both of them to stop immediately. The command jolts both fighters, forcing their attention away from each other. Their momentum breaks in a final explosive collision before they disengage. A blonde young noble steps between them and takes control of the room. He makes it clear that he will allow no more fighting. He declares that the bloodshed ends here, overriding both sides. The white-haired man protests that Felicia is too dangerous to spare and reminds him that he had been given authority over the mission. The blonde noble, Lucian Valdek, coldly reminds Black Lion that his authority came from House Valdek and can be revoked. He acknowledges the concern but warns that continuing this way will only get someone killed. Lucian identifies himself as the third son of House Valdek and addresses Felicia directly with a proposal. He offers to settle everything through a duel, promising her safe departure if he loses. If she loses, he demands that she surrender peacefully and lay down her sword. Lucian shows quiet confidence, already treating the duel as a calculated move rather than a gamble. Felicia is caught off guard that a young master would challenge her personally. Before she can answer, the sheltered noble she protected urges her to accept at once. He selfishly insists that her only concern should be keeping him safe. He blames the fallen men around them for his hardship and tries to guilt her into proving her worth. Pressing harder, he demands that she prove she is useful and superior to the mother he looks down on. Lucian cuts him off sharply, refusing to let him degrade the people who bled for him. With killing intent behind his words, Lucian warns him not to insult those protecting him or interfere with Felicia again. He makes the threat explicit: one more outburst, and he will silence him by force. Lucian then publicly assumes full responsibility for whatever happens in the duel. He further demands that everyone honor his promise even if he is defeated. After a tense pause, Felicia formally accepts, staking her own name on the duel. Lucian tells her to draw her sword for herself, framing the fight as her own choice rather than an order. The room clears into a proper dueling space as the two face each other with blades ready. One observer questions whether Raymond truly intends to let this proceed. Raymond answers that even while holding back, Felicia not only blocked his subordinate's sword but wounded him in return. From her stance and weapon handling, he judges that she lacks formal training despite her composure. That only makes her more alarming, because raw talent and sharp perception let her overwhelm trained opponents. Felicia settles into a guarded grip, revealing instinctive discipline born from experience rather than schooling. Raymond concludes that Lucian, as he is now, cannot defeat her in a straight contest of skill. The white-haired observer agrees that Lucian's intelligence is impressive, but intellect alone will not win a sword fight. Raymond admits he shares that assessment. Even so, he chooses to keep watching, hinting that Lucian may be pursuing something beyond a simple victory. He points to the moment Lucian borrowed a sword for the duel as the key to understanding his intent. Crossing blades with Felicia had already told Lucian exactly how dangerous and gifted she was. The observers realize that Lucian fully understands the disadvantage he is stepping into, so they decide to watch and see what outcome he is trying to create. A brief stillness settles over the hall before the duel begins in earnest. Felicia reflects that Lucian Valdek is unlike any noble she has known. He had already hidden himself as a servant to inspect Logan's forces firsthand. Now he has personally entered a duel that seems unnecessary on the surface, making his motives even harder to read. Though she cannot grasp his true aim, she is certain of one thing: he is no match for her. That certainty steadies her resolve and strips away her hesitation. She respectfully thanks him for the chance, then promises that if she subdues him, she will acknowledge his authority and leave only if he dies. Lucian accepts the terms and adds his own: if he subdues her, she will come with him to Helgium. Seeing that her resolve is fixed, he signals that the duel can finally begin. Felicia answers by launching forward first, sword aimed with full commitment. A blonde swordsman calmly takes the initiative, facing his opponent with complete confidence. Felicia resolves to end the duel cleanly, intending to disable him in a single precise strike rather than maim him. She narrows her focus and commits fully to that plan. Drawing on a burst of speed, she launches herself into a decisive attack. She closes the distance from above, expecting her superior movement to finish the fight at once. But the blonde fighter meets her attack without panic, his blade already in place. Felicia is jolted by the first sign that her assumptions about him were wrong. When he blocks her strike outright, she realizes his body should not have been able to react in time. The clash turns violent as he immediately drives the exchange back against her. Felicia is forced down under the pressure of his counter, losing the clean advantage she thought she had. As she regains herself, she cannot reconcile what happened with everything she judged about his limits. Then a sudden realization hits her before she can recover her footing. He is already inside her guard, pressing the attack at close range before she can reset. Their blades grind together in a fierce struggle that leaves her no room to escape. He tells her she should already understand why she is being overwhelmed. He explains that her earlier battle with the Black Lions left her drained, and that even her attempt to conserve strength cannot hide it. In her current state, he says, the difference between them is simply too great. More importantly, he reveals that he knows her style intimately, her habits, flaws, and the exact flow of her swordsmanship. He recalls that although their past encounter was brief, their blades had crossed intensely enough to leave a lasting imprint. That exchange taught each of them how the other fought. For him, that memory became instinct, and he says his body still remembers Felicia alone. As the duel continues, the force of their clash sends a weapon flying free. The watching knights are stunned, realizing the fight has turned in a way they did not expect. Even the other observers can only stare as the outcome suddenly hangs on a single moment. The dislodged blade spins through the air above the two fighters. Among the onlookers, panic rises as they grasp how completely the momentum has shifted. He remembers that in the past Felicia had generously instructed him in swordsmanship despite knowing they might one day stand as enemies. That old lesson now returns with cruel irony in the middle of their duel. The fallen weapon drops toward the floor as the fight reaches its conclusion. He acknowledges that her guidance back then helped him survive long enough to reach this moment. Now he holds his sword at her throat, making clear that the duel is over. Felicia, breathless and shaken, can only stare at the point before her, forced to accept defeat. He declares that with this victory, he has finally repaid the debt he owed her from the past. That night, the story shifts to a grand estate under the moonlight. A nobleman waits alone on a balcony, contemplating the result of the test. He asks for an honest judgment of Lucian and whether the boy is worthy of House Valdec's future. The question carries the weight of succession and long-term power. The veteran knight answers that Lucian possesses an unshakable core. The nobleman is surprised by such praise and wonders if his own expectations may have been too low. The knight corrects himself, insisting his earlier caution came from duty, because succession cannot be judged by sentiment alone. The nobleman accepts that and says that if the report is accurate, Lucian must have been truly impressive. He takes up the written report, giving the matter more personal attention. As he reads, his interest sharpens into quiet resolve. For Lucian's sake, he decides he can indulge the boy's wishes for now. He softens the conversation by inviting the knight to share a drink, as old allies once did. He even offers a vintage chosen specifically to suit the knight's taste. The knight accepts with a knowing smile, warning that the prince may regret opening the door to the full story. He explains that one night will not be enough to recount everything that happened on this mission. The narrative then turns back to the journey itself, beginning in a quiet forest. Lucian and his party ride toward Kelheim after completing their mission in Estra, setting the stage for the long account to come. Hugo rides on in calm satisfaction, already treating recent events as a successful turn in his plans. Right after his business with Felicia ended, he took charge of her collapsed body himself as the aftermath of the poison set in. To help her recover while keeping control of the situation, he sent Felicia and her maids ahead to a nearby city. Meanwhile, the noble heir who had flaunted his status finally broke down, clinging to the belief that his father would save him. Faced with real consequences, the young man could do nothing but kneel in fear before Hugo. Hugo punished him by forcing him to dig his vassal's grave with his own hands. He made the boy confront death directly, hoping the labor would teach him the weight of a life that had been carelessly lost. As he recalls it, Hugo remains composed, convinced the lesson should have been unmistakable. But instead of reflecting, the boy only hurled threats and swore revenge for Hugo's betrayal. He even demanded to be treated as a formal prisoner of war, still relying on his family's rank to shield him. His outrage escalated into a warning that Hugo was making enemies of powerful houses and the imperial family itself. Hugo realized the fool had learned nothing from the night before, so he offered one final piece of advice. If the boy wanted to stay alive, he needed to start controlling his mouth. Hugo reminded him that this was Kilian, the heart of House Valdec, far beyond the reach of his father's authority. That truth was underscored by the city itself, the stronghold of Valdec spread below. As the gates opened, Hugo's return was met not with secrecy but with deliberate public display. He entered Kilian on horseback, carrying himself like the master of the moment. Even his companion was caught off guard by how openly Hugo was stepping into the city. Outside, a huge crowd had already gathered, turning his arrival into a public triumph. The people called out for Lord Lucian and demanded his attention with open excitement. Their cheers framed him as the returning lion of House Valdec, a symbol of restored strength. His ally, stunned by the scale of it, realized Hugo had asked for a chance to expose House Logren's crimes, but had gained far more than that. Hugo understood at once that his father had chosen to back him completely, and without shame. Rather than resist it, he decided to accept the welcome as proof of his first real achievement. The man beside him silently recognized the same thing. Hugo had finally earned a public merit no one could dismiss. The procession rolled through the streets as the city celebrated him. From above, even the tower watched over the parade, showing that the house itself was endorsing this moment. Elsewhere, Hugo's father dryly reflected that he must be getting old if he was staging a victory parade simply because his son asked. His advisor answered that the honor was justified, because Hugo had accomplished something significant. He argued that Hugo's letter had not been mere self-promotion. It had been a calculated move to show Valdec's firm response to its people while sending a warning to both the imperial family and House Logran. Even so, Hugo's father remained focused on the larger danger, sensing that the empire's recent movements were becoming deeply troubling. In his mind, even powers that once seemed eternal were beginning to fail. The same was true of institutions that had looked unbreakable, as cracks were starting to spread through the old order. For Hugo, the lesson was clear: to avoid being swept away by that coming upheaval, he would have to sharpen his edge even further. Later, back in his room, the quiet luxury of noble life settled around him again. He let himself collapse onto the bed, relieved to feel human comfort after everything he had endured. With a separate report not due until evening, he allowed himself a brief pause. But rest quickly gave way to calculation, because he knew this mission had yielded far more than he had expected. Securing Felicia ahead of schedule had already accelerated one part of his plan, and the public reception had transformed his standing the moment he returned. The parade would erase lingering suspicion around him and replace it with admiration. At the same time, his actions against House Logran had created a useful bond with the Black Lions. Taken together, these scattered gains were becoming a single path toward the throne that had once seemed impossibly far away. The thought leaves Hugo quietly pleased with how quickly the pieces are aligning. He even reflects that if his old enemies could see him now, calmly sorting through his rise, they would be horrified. That image amuses him, as if he can already hear their disbelief. Satisfied that his thoughts are in order, he sits up and turns from reflection to preparation. With a confident smile, Hugo readies himself for the next move in his climb to power. While confined in a stone room, the purple-haired captive is brought food and endures her situation in silence. Elsewhere, Lucian reflects on how to use the child he sees to draw out the Grand Duke and advance his larger plan. The story shifts to a noble estate where the next stage of that scheme is being discussed over a formal meal. Lucian's father confirms that Lucian's first mission succeeded because the captured child was verified as the Marquis' son. He praises Lucian for obtaining the strongest possible proof against House Logran. Lucian accepts the praise lightly, framing the success as a result of the support his father gave him. He continues to flatter his father and presents the operation as a clean, precise strike carried out with the family's backing. But Lucian's attention turns to the fallout, and he asks what will become of Philip Logran. His father notes that the Marquis will not quietly accept losing his own flesh and blood. Even so, he refuses to predict the outcome yet, keeping his judgment deliberately open. He explains that Bernhard Logran is ruthless enough to weigh his son's life against the standing of his house. In his view, a single surviving heir may be all the Marquis truly needs to preserve the family line. That cold assessment unsettles Lucian and briefly cuts through his composure. The tension lingers as his father calmly swirls his wine, fully in control of the conversation. He tells Lucian not to worry about what comes next and instead invites him to name a reward for completing the mission. Lucian hesitates, aware that the request he has in mind goes beyond a simple celebration. He asks permission to speak honestly and prepares to press for something more meaningful. Lucian first tries to frame the request around rewarding Hugo for his major role in the operation. His father immediately rejects that line of argument before Lucian can build on it. He reveals he already guessed Lucian intended to ask for Hugo to be granted knighthood. Although he admits Hugo was useful, he insists that openly siding with House Logran made him too compromised to be honored that way. Lucian argues that this is only speculation and that Hugo's actual cooperation produced valuable results. His father cuts him off by name, making clear the debate is over. He declares that a knight must have unquestionable accomplishments, and that Hugo does not meet that standard. Lucian realizes the request is impossible and swallows his disappointment. Trying to soften the refusal, his father offers money or even a new identity for Hugo instead. But he remains firm that Hugo cannot become a knight, at least not now. Lucian backs down outwardly and blames his own excitement, while privately shelving the promise he wanted to fulfill. His father tells him to ask for something smaller, assuming the matter has been settled. Lucian seizes that opening and says he has one modest request after all. With a sly smile, he asks that Felicia be allowed to meet the Sword Saint. The unexpected request catches his father completely off guard. The scene then moves to the royal grounds, where the consequences of the nobles' schemes reach the prison camp. At a guarded facility for captured nobles, the captive woman is being held under strict watch. Inside, she sits alone in a private room that is far gentler than an ordinary cell. She realizes this is a special prison for nobles and is disturbed that someone as lowly as a maid has been placed there. The decent meals and medical care make her even more suspicious of what her captors truly want from her. After thinking it through, she decides this treatment may still be better than what she escaped. Her thoughts turn inward as she measures her current misery against the past. She remembers the hell she fled and takes grim comfort in having at least survived long enough to leave it behind. Even so, what she longs for most before dying is to hold the sword one more time. That wish draws up the memory of a blade falling into her reach. In that memory, she grips the weapon with desperate determination. She recalls herself as a maid, stunned and trembling as she pointed the sword forward. Facing her in that moment was the blonde man she still cannot forget. What she truly wants is not freedom or comfort, but one more chance to cross blades with him. She immediately dismisses the thought as impossible wishful thinking. At that moment, someone enters and cites the physician's report on her condition. The visitor states that beyond her mana circulation problems, she is suffering from severe malnutrition and exhaustion, then asks whether she feels any better. It is Lucian, and with casual confidence he cuts to the real question. Is she well enough to wield a sword again? Felicia is startled when Lucian suddenly talks about her taking up a sword, unable to understand what he means. Lucian presses her, mocking the idea that she intends to remain trapped in this room and this life forever. As he casually helps himself to the food, he makes clear he did not come merely to provoke her. He reveals that he went to considerable trouble to find her because he has a purpose for her. Dropping the pretense, Lucian asks whether she has any intention of wasting her talent for the sword in hiding. He bluntly refuses to let her stay a mediocre swordsman and declares that he means to change her future. Lucian offers to recommend her as a disciple to the sword saint, Sir Eisenbrittner. Felicia can only take the proposal as ridicule, convinced he is mocking her. To her, the idea is absurd enough already, and being offered the sword saint as master feels even more impossible. Her despair resurfaces as she remembers that she is a lowborn, illegitimate daughter who has always been denied her place. Watching her reaction, Lucian realizes he pushed too fast and understands why she cannot accept his words easily. He reflects that despite carrying noble blood, she was cast out for being both illegitimate and a woman, barred from even touching the sword she longed to learn. He remembers that the result of that cruelty was the rise of Felix, the feared sword demon who fled House Logran. So Lucian steps back and tells her he will not force trust on her, leaving the decision in her own hands. He frames his offer as freedom of choice rather than an order she must obey. As he prepares to leave, Lucian asks her to remember one thing above all else. He tells her never to give up on the sword. Lucian explains that she looks most like herself when she is holding one, giving her a truth no one else ever affirmed. That words cuts deep, because even her own family took the sword away from her and denied that self. Felicia clenches her dress, shaken by how precisely he has seen the part of her she buried. She stops him and asks whether he truly has the right to say such things to her. What she really asks is whether she is allowed to live only for the sword, free from every other burden placed on her. Lucian accepts that desire without hesitation. He swears on the name of Lucian Valdek that he will honor that wish. His promise brings back an older memory of Felix being asked what kind of future he wanted for himself. Back then, Felix was told that someone with his ability could easily aim for rank, command, or noble status. But Felix admitted he had barely ever allowed himself to think in terms of dreams. What he truly wanted was simple: to become stronger and live by the sword alone. The memory gives way to the present at a formal training hall prepared for a major appointment. Lucian arrives there with Felicia and Hugo, bringing them before the aristocratic world. Lucian notices someone unexpected and pauses. He recognizes the man waiting there as his father. When Lucian asks why he came, the Archduke answers that he would not miss an event involving the arrangement with the sword saint. His measured look makes it clear he is judging more than the ceremony itself. Lucian and the others formally greet him, acknowledging his authority. The Archduke turns to Hugo and notes that he has heard of Hugo's strong performance in the recent crisis. He also reminds Hugo that his achievements are still burdened by the weight of his past failures. Even so, he reveals that Lucian personally requested a knighthood for Hugo, despite Hugo believing he had no right to ask for such a reward. Hugo is stunned to learn that Lucian truly intended to keep that promise to him. The Archduke says he refused the request for now because Hugo is not yet ready to bear that honor. Instead, he orders Hugo to continue proving himself and accumulate more merit until that title can be granted without question. He leaves Hugo with the promise that he expects to see that day come. Hugo answers with fierce gratitude and vows to meet those expectations. But the Archduke is not finished, and the atmosphere shifts toward a harsher test. He calls Felicia forward by name, forcing her into the center of his attention. He reminds her that as someone born and raised within the family's sphere, she should understand exactly what Lucian is risking by backing her before the succession is even settled. If she cannot prove her worth, he warns, Lucian will be mocked as a fool blinded by sentiment. He demands that she answer plainly whether she believes she is worth that cost. Before Felicia can force out a reply, Lucian steps in and declares that he will answer for her. Lucian tells his father without wavering that she is worth even more than enough, and that should settle the matter. A blonde noble resolves to prove that his controversial choice is right, even if everyone around him still doubts him and Felicia herself has not yet found certainty. He decides that the time for doubt ends now. Felicia steels herself, aware that everyone is about to judge whether someone dismissed as an unrefined outsider can truly rise beyond status and gender. When he calls her forward and urges her to act with confidence, she is jolted into the moment. Her suspicion is confirmed when she sees the Archduke and other elders waiting to witness the result of his son's choice. The Archduke has come in person to inspect the vassal his son selected. He is here to see whether this child can gain enough strength to stand on her own. With open confidence, the blonde noble invites them to judge the matter directly. The Archduke orders Felicia to face the sword saint and be tested. The blonde noble accepts the ruling with formal gratitude. Privately, he thanks his father, remembering the promise that brought them to this point. The courtyard is cleared into a formal arena for the examination. The sword saint arrives before them, answering the summons. He recognizes both the Archduke's son and the prince, realizing this is no ordinary visit. The prince explains that the family is holding an important trial, and the sword saint admits his curiosity drew him here. The blonde noble asks him not to soften his judgment for the family's sake, because a harsh and honest verdict is exactly what he wants. He insists that only a true test can give weight to the promise once made between them. The Sword Saint understands the seriousness behind that request and falls silent in thought. Accepting their resolve, he agrees to proceed. Felicia faces him with visible nerves, sensing the gravity of what is happening. The Sword Saint declares that he will conduct the test with full seriousness. A tense stillness settles over the arena as the examination begins. He takes his place opposite Felicia, making the confrontation official. Standing before him, Felicia realizes she is truly facing the Sword Saint and feels the very air around them shift under his presence. She offers him formal respect, trying to introduce herself properly. Before she can even finish, he cuts her off and refuses to care about her name. Instead, he drives Mana into a wooden sword and makes clear that only her skill matters here. He plants the weapon into the ground with overwhelming force. He tells her to let the sword speak first, and orders her to draw it. From above, the observers mark the true start of the test. Watching closely, the blonde noble notes that the Sword Saint has compressed mana into the sword and buried it deep, making the challenge far harder than it appears. He realizes brute strength alone will not be enough, though Felicia's mana manipulation might still give her a chance. Knowing this may be her only opportunity, Felicia grips the sword and resolves to proceed carefully. She focuses mana into her hands, copying the method she once saw Philip use. The sword suddenly gives way. To her own surprise, she succeeds cleanly, and is thrilled that she drew it without trouble. Believing she has passed the task, she eagerly asks what she should do next. The Sword Saint's silence shows that her success is not what he was looking for. He ends the test immediately, saying he has already seen enough. When Felicia protests that she only did exactly what he instructed, he tells her she still does not understand the problem. He begins to explain by pointing directly to her hands. He reveals that she ignored the pain in her internal pathways and neglected the condition of her own body while forcing mana through it. From the balcony, the blonde noble recognizes this as the common arrogance of people who rely only on natural talent. The Sword Saint acknowledges that her talent is real, especially since she once fought the Black Lions while in a woman's body. But he warns that talent does not change temperament, and asks whether that answer is enough for her. He tells her to reflect on the words of the master who taught her, because before anything else she must learn how to listen. Felicia lowers her head and admits the painful truth that she never had a master at all. She confesses that she does not even understand basic concepts like circulation or mana management, and has only been imitating what she observed. Dropping all pride, she openly calls herself ignorant and begs him to teach her. The Sword Saint is shaken to learn that she reached this level entirely through observation, without any guidance. Felicia insists her feat was real, explaining that she only imitated the way her brother moved mana through his body when he fought. She clarifies that she noticed his sword's weight and speed changed whenever blue energy surged through him, and she tried to reproduce that effect. The white-haired swordsman dismisses her explanation as impossible, convinced she is claiming to sense internal mana in a way even experts cannot. He rejects the idea that someone could draw out mana by will alone and demands to know who this unknown girl really is. Watching with confidence, Lucian reveals that this is exactly the prodigy he expected to uncover. He presents her as someone with extraordinary promise, leaving the old master visibly shaken. In Lucian's eyes, Felicia is not merely talented but a once-in-a-generation swordsman. The trial shifts from debate to proof as Felicia launches herself forward to challenge the veteran directly. The old master remains planted in place, refusing to meet her urgency with any visible effort. His composure makes clear that he still sees her as far beneath him. Felicia commits fully to the charge, forcing herself to close the gap despite the pressure. Her first strike cuts through the air with speed but fails to break his control of the exchange. She follows immediately with another attack, trying to overwhelm him before he can settle the bout. He stops her advance with ease and coldly judges that her movements are too obvious, her blade too dull, and even her determination too weak. His calm gaze shows he is not threatened in the slightest. He presses her pride further, asking whether this desperate effort is all she can offer. Felicia answers with another strike, but he turns it aside almost casually. The failed exchange sends her skidding back while he remains untouched at a distance. As she steadies herself, Felicia realizes he has pushed every one of her attacks to their limit and still handled them with effortless precision. She finally understands that she is facing the summit of swordsmanship itself. The gap between them feels so vast that she cannot even measure it. Even so, she refuses to surrender and searches for another way to break through. Betting everything on an unorthodox idea, she drives up a massive slab of stone to create a new angle of attack. The arena erupts around that improvised obstacle as she turns the battlefield itself into part of her offense. Using the stone as cover and foothold, she dives in with her sword aimed for a precise breakthrough. She narrows her focus to a single point, trying to force an opening where none exists. Her blade finds the stone's edge with exact timing, using contact to redirect and sharpen the strike. The impact sends energy spiraling through the slab as her technique transforms the obstacle into momentum. Even then, the old master does not move, letting her ingenuity unfold while he studies it. He recognizes the value in her refusal to stop at failure, and in the raw originality that experience has not yet worn down. Felicia's attack intensifies as the stone and her swordsmanship combine into a concentrated assault. Rather than ending the test, the old master silently urges her to go further and show everything she has. He demands that she empty herself completely into this strike. More than technique, he calls on the anger and frustration she has kept buried to become part of her blade. At that moment, a killing line of red force descends into the clash, introducing a far more dangerous power. Felicia is suddenly caught inside that violent intrusion, her attack split apart as the pressure closes around her. Driven to the edge, she bears her full ferocity and fights back with everything in her. That fury erupts outward like a monstrous beast, revealing the terrifying intensity hidden inside her. For an instant, she is shaken by the sheer violence of what has been drawn out of her. A dark, blood-red presence looms over the moment, as if her rage has taken on a will of its own. Instead of retreating, she throws herself through the pain and keeps the attack moving. Her restraint finally breaks, and she screams as she releases the force she had been holding back. With her eyes blazing, Felicia commits to one final all-or-nothing strike. The old master receives that charge head-on, still centered and unshaken. A faint smile crosses his face as he acknowledges the answer she has given him. Their powers collide in a blinding eruption that swallows the arena. From above, Lucian and an old and noble observer watch the aftermath in silence. As the light clears over the courtyard, both men continue studying what Felicia has shown them. The elder turns to Lucian and asks what truly makes a swordsman dependable. He answers that true reliability belongs to someone who has carved the cost of relentless training into their very soul. The story opens by framing swordsmanship as a brutal craft built through endless repetition, battlefield experience, and the certainty that even one mistake means death. That harsh discipline is presented as the true foundation of a swordsman, no matter how cruel the path may be. A blonde noble reflects that he has only ever kept exceptional people close to him. An older man explains that while most must climb through effort, a rare few surpass that mountain in a single leap. He compares such people to a blazing sun, beings whose brilliance breaks ordinary limits. In his eyes, overwhelming talent inspires awe because it advances like a force that nothing can stop. He identifies that kind of genius in the purple-haired girl now standing before a swordsman. The girl attacks with fierce resolve, and her effort is recognized as proof that Lucian made the right choice in trusting her. The nobles conclude that if Lucian had not given her a chance, her gift would have disappeared before anyone understood its worth. They lament that the world loses countless talents simply because no one ever gives them an opportunity. A blade is offered forward, turning that belief into a test of recognition and acceptance. An elderly sword saint studies the moment closely, weighing not just skill but the person before him. What convinces him most is the girl's unwavering gaze. He realizes she was born for the sword and will remain bound to it regardless of what hardships await her. More importantly, he sees that she understands something deeper than technique. In her, he senses a path that reaches beyond ordinary reason and common limits. That path is imagined as an endless sword road stretching into infinity, with the girl standing at its threshold. The vision gives way to the clear day of the courtyard, where judgment becomes reality. The sword saint asks her to state her name again, acknowledging that she has already proven herself through the blade. He tells her that no one has the right to doubt that name anymore and urges her to speak it with pride. The words catch her off guard, as if she has never been granted that dignity before. She answers formally, declaring herself Felicia before the sword saint. Felicia reveals that she has no surname from her mother, and that the prestigious Logram family on her father's side refused to recognize her, leaving her with only that single name. Hearing this, the old master understands the weight of what she has endured and acknowledges her perseverance. He gives her a new name, calling her Felicia Brittner. He declares that from this day onward she will bear the Brittner name. Then he goes further, announcing that he is taking her in as his adopted daughter and will personally teach her both swordsmanship and noble conduct. He makes clear that this offer is not mercy but a severe commitment, and that the life ahead will be relentlessly difficult. He asks whether she is truly prepared to accept that burden. Felicia drops to one knee before him, while he admits he once judged her too quickly and harshly. He asks that when his old prejudices resurface, she answer him not with resentment, but by proving herself through the sword. Moved to tears, Felicia promises that she too will use the blade to prove the sincerity of her heart. The old master accepts her answer, saying that though their lives have been different, they share the same devotion to the sword, and he invites her to walk that path beside him from now on. With that vow, Felicia Brittner is born into a new identity and future. But while her new beginning takes shape, rumors begin spreading first in the places closest to power. In secret, a cloaked figure sends an urgent letter to the Delight family elders, warning that the house's future is in danger. A subordinate receives the order but immediately questions what this sudden move means. The answer is that the sword saint has taken a disciple, and that his former neutrality in the succession struggle can no longer be trusted. They fear that if a child backed by the sword saint supports one faction, the balance of power in Valdek will eventually collapse. The conspirators decide that if House Delight can no longer rise through its current heir, they should abandon that failing course. Their conclusion is ruthless. They should leave the sinking ship before it goes under. So their support shifts toward Lucian Valdek, the one who recently earned the sword saint's recognition through his disciple. Elsewhere, the political consequences of that shift begin reaching the highest levels of the estate. A butler reports to his lord that letters are pouring in not only from the family elders but also from the maternal relatives of the young masters. He warns that although he has taken precautions, the other factions will not remain passive. He advises acting before this new tension grows into an uncontrollable conflict. The blonde noble listens in silence, already considering the motives behind the unrest. He judges that these relatives are the sort who would do anything to place their own child at the head of the house. He condemns that greed as the very thing that destroys their children instead of elevating them. With cold authority, he orders the butler to summon all of his children for dinner, intending to confront any complaints directly and give them a chance to speak. A scheming noble reflects that power belongs to the man strong enough to force his way through obstacles. Elsewhere, a young blonde man is marked as the one expected to make the Waldeck name answer in blood. Another blonde observer, amused and confident, decides the coming struggle will reveal who truly has a predator's nature. Night settles over the grand estate where that family confrontation is about to unfold. Inside the mansion, Lucian is escorted through the halls toward a formal gathering. The servants notice his arrival and tense up at once. Their unease spreads as they realize exactly who has come. The household lines the corridor and formally welcomes Lord Lucian. Lucian breezes through their stiff respect, joking that everyone should stop overworking themselves on his account. Privately, he notes how dramatically the servants' attitude has changed, especially in the family's main house rather than his own annex. He takes their deference as proof that his standing in the family has risen. Remembering how little he expected, Lucian admits he once thought merely becoming Felicia's direct disciple would already be a major success. Now he realizes events have turned out even better for him than he imagined. With Felicia, the Sword Saint, backing him, he starts to imagine how dangerous she may eventually become. That thought hardens into resolve as he reaches the closed doors to the family dining room. Lucian straightens himself and decides it is time to begin his own move. The doors open, announcing his entrance. He steps into a lavish dining room where his brothers are already waiting. One brother, Geordie, looks over with clear displeasure, exactly as Lucian hoped. Lucian is pleased to see that his presence is making them miserable. The youngest brother sits tense and wary, already sensing trouble. Lucian is shown to his place at the table as the family meal begins. He settles in comfortably, ready to dominate the conversation. He opens with false warmth, remarking how rare it is for all the brothers to gather together. Then he pointedly invites Geordie to agree, turning the pleasantry into a challenge. Geordie answers by warning Lucian not to get arrogant over a recent streak of good fortune. He makes it clear that luck changes quickly and that Lucian should watch himself. Lucian receives the warning without the slightest sign of concern. Instead, he mockingly thanks Geordie for caring about him and pretends to be touched by the concern. He keeps up the act, claiming even Geordie's harshness is only for his benefit. From there, Lucian starts listing Geordie's supposed kindnesses, twisting old incidents into evidence of brotherly concern. He brings up how Geordie exposed a corrupt lord and repaid a maid named Jenny after her embezzlement was uncovered. Lucian theatrically praises him as too generous to recognize his own goodness. Then, with deliberate innocence, he asks whether Jenny is doing well now. Geordie answers with a cruel edge, saying she survived only because he stopped short of letting her die. The exchange strips away all pretense, and Geordie openly curses Lucian. The youngest brother realizes Lucian is provoking Geordie on purpose, and that speaking up may only make things worse. Even the attendants can tell Lucian is inflating his own importance just to stir the room. Still, the youngest brother can no longer stay silent and rises to accuse Lucian of crossing the line. He tries to defend basic decency, but his protest only exposes how outmatched he is in this family's vicious dynamic. Lucian immediately turns that weakness against him, treating kindness itself as a mistake. He mocks the boy for not learning his lesson and implies that a harsher beating would have taught him better. When the youngest brother keeps pushing, Lucian snaps and demands that he understand the danger of the situation. He reminds him that being the youngest does not make him safe and threatens to show him how brutal the world really is. The threat lands, and the younger brother's defiance collapses into fear. At that peak of tension, a new presence arrives as someone observes that everyone's blood is running hot. All three brothers instinctively react, the confrontation freezing in place. Their father enters the dining room, immediately reclaiming authority over the scene. The brothers formally greet him at once. Their father coolly notes that even at a rare family dinner they are already shouting, and he suggests that perhaps such fire is necessary. During a family gathering, the youngest son is abruptly told to stop daydreaming and pay attention. That night, the mood turns serious as the family's private discussion begins under ominous circumstances. At the dinner table, the household head gathers his sons to address a matter of state rather than family routine. He reminds them of the Imperial Liberation Front, a rebel force that opposes imperial rule and seeks to break away from the empire. The rebels are described as a dangerous separatist movement whose actions threaten the empire's control. He explains that traces of the group were found months ago in the borderlands of Bornholm, and he sent his eldest son Tristan to suppress the problem early. Although rebel activity has remained limited so far, he warns that a new report has raised the stakes beyond a simple containment effort. The announcement unsettles the table, especially those who realize the issue may be far worse than expected. Lucian, the blonde son, immediately focuses, sensing that the discussion is about to shift from rebellion to something more dangerous. Their father reveals the true concern. Signs of a great monster migration have begun appearing in Bornholm. Lucian is shaken, understanding that this threat could eclipse the rebellion entirely. The danger is explained as a phenomenon in which powerful monsters move in groups and devastate everything in their path. In the worst recorded case, such a migration destroyed an entire castle along with 10 nearby villages. Even so, the father notes that Bornholm's migration cycle should not be due for years, making the signs uncertain but too serious to ignore, especially with Tristan already occupied by the rebels. Lucian realizes this is why their father is considering sending another son to the battlefield. The father pauses, weighing the burden he is about to place on one of his children. He confirms Lucian's suspicion and declares that one of them must clear the dark uncertainty hanging over Bornholm. What he asks for is not merely reinforcement for Tristan, but someone capable of resolving the crisis itself. The second son immediately distrusts the proposal, seeing that any help sent to Tristan would still leave Tristan in command. He judges that whoever goes would risk becoming a subordinate whose achievements only strengthen the eldest brother's standing. So he argues that no son needs to go personally and suggests sending knightly orders instead. He presents that option as the most efficient way to support Tristan without sacrificing another brother's position. Their father then turns to the youngest son and demands his opinion as well. Nervous but eager to be useful, the youngest offers to step forward, yet ultimately backs his second brother's recommendation. Lucian cuts in at once, warning that such a response would likely create a different political disaster. He explains that if troops are mobilized openly, the lords around Bornholm may assume House Waldeck is using the rebellion as a pretext for its own ambitions. The youngest recoils at the implication, shocked that their house could be suspected of planning an invasion. He protests that such suspicion would be absurd and insists they should not tiptoe around baseless gossip. Lucian concedes the point in principle, but pushes the argument beyond local opinion. He warns that even a moment of suspicion from the emperor himself would be dangerous. Their father adds that such doubt could also let the Marquis faction exploit the situation against them at court. He openly sides with Lucian, confirming that the political risk is real. The threat is framed as larger than Bornholm alone, since one reckless military move could damage the imperial family's trust in House Waldeck and hand rival nobles an opening. Pressed to offer a better answer, the second son asks what course remains. The youngest reasons that an official army deployment is impossible, but some force still has to be prepared for emergencies. Lucian follows that thought and narrows the problem to finding a solution that can contain the threat without alarming the region. Asked to finish the idea, he concludes that only one kind of answer fits. Their father defines the requirements. The force must have real combat experience and be willing to act under strict conditions. It must also already belong to the region, so its presence will not provoke needless disputes. He decides they should use Bornholm's mercenary companies. Lucian adds that to control such unruly groups, someone carrying the authority of House Waldeck must oversee them directly. He immediately volunteers himself for that role, making clear that he intends to take command of the mission. A few weeks later, Lucian is already at sea, having been sent to carry out the plan in person. On the ship to Bornholm, he travels with an attendant, while looking ahead to the difficult work waiting for him. He keeps a coin in hand, a practical reminder of the kind of people he is about to deal with. Lucian reflects that mercenaries are always troublesome to manage. He knows money is the only reliable reason to make them move, yet even payment cannot truly bind their loyalty. In his view, they are the sort who will reverse themselves the moment circumstances change, abandoning yesterday's contract without shame. Having once been a mercenary himself, he judges their mindset clearly and knows survival matters more to them than pride or promises. Still, he concludes that mercenaries are not the real mystery. The more important question is why his father chose to send him specifically on this mission. A subordinate identifies the person at the center of the matter as the first young master, Tristan Valdeck. He blames the crisis on Tristan's rigid and uncompromising nature. He recalls that even in the past, Tristan controlled every detail of those under him, down to uniforms and break times. Anyone who stepped out of line was punished immediately, making service under Tristan suffocatingly strict. Because of that temperament, the speaker doubts Tristan would ever negotiate with mercenaries or let the Empire's weakness become leverage. At the same time, he knows the mercenary companies would never ignore such a profitable opening either. To the blonde young master, the whole situation looks like a feast prepared for him alone. He relishes the chance to test his restored abilities and turns his hostility toward the mercenaries into anticipation. A rough-looking escort is unsettled by how dangerous and eager the young master suddenly seems. Their journey continues by sea toward the port where the next stage of the mission awaits. They arrive at a busy harbor city and move into position without incident. The quiet dockside atmosphere suggests a brief calm before trouble breaks out. As they proceed inland from the harbor, the party remains alert. The young master politely thanks Sir Raymond for arranging comfortable travel. Raymond reveals he personally volunteered for this mission and has chosen to accompany him. He explains that the responsibility is too important for the young master to travel without an escort worthy of it. Raymond adds that the operatives who worked with him in Bestra have already arrived ahead of them to assess the situation. Those advanced members are now waiting to regroup with the young master at a designated rendezvous point. The young master accepts the plan and asks Raymond to lead the way to him. Before they can continue, the calm is broken by the sudden rush of approaching attackers. An alarm goes up that the assailants belong to the Imperial Liberation Front, and soldiers are ordered not to let them escape. As the rebels flee through the gate, one of them insists on staying behind to delay pursuit so the others can get away. Mounted Valdec soldiers close in fast, making it clear the rebels are badly outmatched. One masked rebel realizes too late that something far more dangerous is already in front of him. While Raymond and the escort are still beside him, the young master moves before anyone else can react. A rebel spots the noble-looking boy and decides to kill his escorts, and sees him as a hostage to buy time. He draws his blade, determined not to waste the opportunity. The young master appears in his path at once, and coldly challenges what exactly the rebel thinks he is about to do. The attacker is stunned by the speed and pressure bearing down on him. The young master treats the ambush like entertainment, and invites the rebel to continue if he dares. A strange, overwhelming force spreads out around him, swallowing the area in a surreal haze. Within that distorted field, his presence alone dominates the battlefield. In the next instant, the rebel captain is slammed to the ground before he can even use his weapon. The remaining rebels recoil in shock, unable to understand what just happened to their leader. They realize the boy is no ordinary noble after seeing their captain dropped in a single blow before he could react. What terrifies them more is that he did it with a sheathed sword, making his power feel monstrous. The young master stands over them with complete calm, fully in control of the encounter. Inside, he revels in finally having a body that obeys his will and lets him move exactly as he wants. He feels his restored heart surging with power, as if his strength is erupting from within. By channeling mana through his body, he confirms that his physical performance now exceeds even his own expectations. The surviving rebels draw their swords, but their resolve is already shaken. He mocks them for still not understanding the gap between them. Then he releases another crushing wave of force and makes clear there will be no further warnings. He orders every one of them to their knees. Under that pressure, resistance breaks and weapons fall uselessly to the ground. One rebel kneels and admits they cannot oppose him even for a second, deciding survival matters more than pride. The group surrenders and begs for mercy, trying to save themselves by invoking innocent children. That plea makes the young master pause instead of finishing them immediately. He sees in their eyes not innocence but the resentment and rage left behind by war. Faced with that bitterness, he reflects that war always leaves a foul aftertaste long after the fighting ends. A blond young officer approaches with his hand on his sword, making it clear he is prepared to enforce order. He offers the captured rebels a formal trial if they cooperate, presenting himself as lawful rather than arbitrary. He warns them not to force the situation into violence by doing anything reckless. Mounted Imperial soldiers arrive behind him, reinforcing the threat and making resistance look hopeless. One armored commander dismounts, signaling that someone with higher authority is taking over. The commander declares that every citizen deserves due process, framing the empire as just in principle. He adds that this right should apply regardless of status, and that as one of the empire's pillars he is sworn to uphold it. But he immediately excludes these prisoners from that protection, judging that they forfeited it when they turned against the empire. Introducing himself as Tristan Valdec, heir of House Valdec, he coldly reduces their fate to a death sentence. One masked captive is stunned by how casually Tristan claims the right to decide their lives. That outrage turns into open defiance as the prisoner rejects Tristan's authority. He lunges at Tristan with a hidden blade, trying to strike before the sentence can be carried out. As he attacks, he accuses the empire of hypocrisy, arguing that it was built by exploiting and crushing people like them first. Tristan does not flinch, meeting the assault with complete composure. He moves first and faster, ending the challenge in a single decisive counter. The rebel is cut down so thoroughly that the outcome is immediate and absolute. The dying attacker coughs blood as the brutality of Tristan's response leaves no room for rescue. The remaining rebels are horrified, realizing their vice-captain has been killed instantly. They collapse under the shock and pressure, their resistance broken by the example Tristan has made. Tristan tells Lucian to remember this, treating the execution as a lesson in how authority must be maintained. Lucian repeats that this is the standard they are expected to uphold, though the severity clearly unsettles him. Tristan stands by the act without regret, convinced that firmness is necessary. He broadens the point into the principle governing Bornholm Fortress and the Empire's rule there. The scene shifts over the fortress, suggesting a wider territory living under that hard doctrine. Dark birds gather over the walls, underscoring the tense and uneasy state of the city. Later, Lucian reflects on Tristan Valdec and is struck by how much harsher he seems than the man he remembers from the war. Lucian is further troubled because he has no memory of any Bornholm campaign despite believing he should have served there. Studying the situation with Tristan, he starts to suspect there are important facts being kept from him. He notes that the atmosphere in the fortress is worse than expected. Lucian concludes that the combination of recent liberation, military strain, and civilian anxiety has made the crisis more severe than reports suggested. He presses the practical issue. The defenses are undermanned and the perimeter is barely being held. Tristan confirms that most Imperial forces are tied down against the rebels' main army, leaving only enough troops for minimal order. He explains that mercenaries were hired to cover the shortage, but they are exploiting the emergency to demand better terms. To Tristan, the mercenaries are effectively holding the Empire's safety hostage for profit. Lucian privately recognizes that this kind of pressure tactic is normal for self-interested elites, but doubts it will work on mercenaries. He warns that they likely see the chaos as a chance to get rich, especially if they know Tristan has no intention of truly bargaining. Tristan makes clear he will not compromise while he commands the fortress. He lowers his expectations of Lucian, implying his younger brother was sent here because he had nowhere else to go. Still, Tristan assigns him a limited role: keep the mercenaries from deserting before the city falls apart. Lucian accepts the slight in silence, but his expression shows he is no longer willing to remain passive. He finally pushes back, telling Tristan that his assumptions are wrong. Lucian insists he was not forced into this post and came of his own will. He reveals that he already has a plan to resolve the mercenary crisis. To prove it, he presents a sealed order showing their father granted him full authority over all matters involving the mercenaries. That authority makes negotiations and control of the mercenary forces Lucian's responsibility, not Tristan's. He pointedly tells Tristan to step aside and let him handle it. That night, Lucian heads out with an attendant toward a large, brightly lit hall where the mercenaries are gathered. He is determined to end the standoff completely rather than manage it halfway. The building hums with noise and activity, confirming the mercenaries are assembled inside. Within a crowded tavern-like hall, Lucian enters the mercenaries' world, ready to confront the problem directly. A red-haired mercenary captain whips his men into a frenzy, urging them to eat, drink, and squeeze the nobles dry for every coin they can get. The tavern answers with roaring loyalty to both their captain and the nobles they expect to profit from. As the celebration spreads through the hall, the mercenaries settle into the confidence of men who think war is about to make them rich. One of the captain's subordinates praises him for daring to stand against House Valdek when no one else in the Empire would. The mood stays carefree because, in their eyes, they are not the ones risking their lives on the front line. The captain explains that the Empire's elites are close to open war with the Liberation Alliance. With monsters causing trouble as well, he sees the chaos as the perfect market for mercenaries like them. His companion agrees that they only need to wait until the desperate nobles come begging for help. At that point, they intend to demand bags of gold. The captain makes it plain that once the nobles crawl back, he will decide exactly how brutally to overcharge them. He boasts that the other mercenary groups are already aligned with him, but his scheming is interrupted by someone arriving at the door. The green-haired man notices the disturbance first and turns his attention toward the entrance. A gloved figure prepares to enter with deliberate calm, immediately shifting the atmosphere. The mercenaries wonder who this newcomer is as they notice unfamiliar faces at the entrance. The visitor is identified as someone who, despite a refined appearance, has a sharp head for business. The blonde young noble admits he might have acted the same way if he were a mercenary captain. As he walks in, he frames the captain's greed as understandable leadership, up to the point before a contract is signed. Now that an agreement exists, however, he makes clear that opportunism has become a breach of terms. The captain answers with open contempt, telling the young noble to stop acting like a master and remember his place. The noble responds by naming him directly as Redblade Sven, making it clear he came prepared and knows exactly who he is dealing with. Sven's grin tightens as he realizes this is not a timid aristocrat he can casually bully. Around the room, armed men tense up, ready for violence if the exchange turns. The blonde noble and his guards stand over Sven without flinching, seizing control of the room through sheer composure. Sven pauses to think, recognizing that this confrontation may require a different approach. He abruptly turns the standoff into a public welcome, ordering everyone to greet their guest as if this were an honored visit. The mercenaries instantly play along, flattering the young lord and thanking him for the feast his money has supposedly bought them. The noble watches Sven's performance carefully, seeing through the sudden hospitality. Sven pours a drink and invites him to sit for a long conversation, pretending this is merely a misunderstanding to be smoothed over. He insists they have been eager for this meeting and tries to recast the dispute as something negotiable. The noble repeats the word misunderstanding with disbelief, signaling that he rejects Sven's framing entirely. He states that the only valid contract is the one between House Valdek and Sven's group, leaving no room for side bargaining. He adds that Sven has already taken half the advance, so there is even less excuse for this behavior. Sven mocks that payment as trivial, dismissing the advance as pocket change. He claims he took it as little more than charity for commoners and sneers that it was absurdly low for a dangerous mission against rebels. Leaning on his vice-captain for support, he sarcastically argues that the sum would barely cover a proper meal, let alone the risks involved. Even so, he pretends to be reasonable and says the Empire's crisis cannot simply be ignored. From that false concern, he proposes a solution that would supposedly benefit everyone, clearly preparing to extort more money. The young noble remains unreadable, giving Sven nothing to work with. Seeing no resistance, Sven decides to settle matters the easiest way he knows, by demanding more through money. A coin suddenly drops to the floor between them, interrupting his move. Sven and his subordinate freeze when they realize it is no ordinary coin. The piece is a commemorative coin of immense value, worth hundreds of gold coins by itself. More of the rare coins spill out before the mercenaries, and the noble pointedly asks whether Sven is truly satisfied with so little. With a faint smile, he suggests Sven should think bigger and name a price worthy of a lifetime. Sven instantly mistakes the gesture for weakness and greedily concludes that the young lord is an easy mark with wealth far beyond what he expected. He theatrically apologizes for his earlier rudeness, suddenly recasting himself as a humbled admirer of such generosity. He promises complete cooperation from now on, and even offers to mobilize nearby mercenary groups at the noble's command. But before anything else, he reaches down to claim the precious coins for himself. His hand stops when he sees the coins lying at the noble's feet, forcing him to hesitate before crossing that final line. Then the young lord, now cold and formal, invokes the authority of House Valdek and issues a request to everyone present. A young noble named House Valdek posts a brutal challenge. Whoever kills the mercenary Red Blade Sven will earn every platinum coin on the table. The crowd is stunned because invoking House Valdek means this is not a drunken boast but an official promise backed by real power. Sven immediately suspects a trick, sensing that the offer is too outrageous to trust. The blonde young master makes clear that he is not trying to buy peace the way Sven expected. Instead, he humiliates Sven by declaring that a mercenary without credibility is nothing more than a thug. To prove the point, he calmly begins drinking and announces that Sven has already lost the only thing that gave him value. He turns the execution into a game, giving the room only until he finishes his drink before the reward is cut in half. That deadline puts every armed bystander under pressure to decide whether greed is worth the risk. Sven tries to reassert control by mocking them as cowards and swearing to kill the first person who advances. But his defiance collapses into bargaining as he begs the young master to withdraw the request and offers to work for a fraction of the money instead. The young master's silence makes it obvious that Sven's panic has only confirmed his contempt. Sven drops even lower, pleading for forgiveness and promising total obedience if he is spared. The young master remains unmoved, letting Sven's desperation hang unanswered. While continuing to drink, he coldly notes that Sven once held a better position than this. His faint smile shows he has already judged Sven finished. Before Sven can recover, a green-haired man steps in and kills him in a single savage strike. The killer treats it as settling an old score, reminding Sven that he had only won their last fight by luck. As Sven dies, the man frames the blow as the end of a long career for a captain who had worked hard but reached his limit. The surrounding mercenaries freeze, realizing the threat is over and the reward is now real. Sven's blood spreads across the floor among the platinum coins that bought his death. The killer immediately claims the job is done and asks for the promised payment. The young master agrees without hesitation and dryly congratulates him on his retirement. With Sven dead, the hall falls into a brief pause before the next move is made. The green-haired man eagerly gathers his winnings, delighted by how quickly the opportunity paid off. He rushes out of the building to cash in on his survival and success. Others follow at once, showing that greed and momentum are now driving the whole crowd. Behind them, Sven's corpse is left in a widening pool of blood, already reduced to aftermath. The young master glances back at the body and remarks that the drink he meant to share in celebration will have to wait. He instead proposes a proper send-off for the newly retired vice-captain using the fortune they just made from killing him. The remaining men listen tensely, unsure whether the night's business is over or only changing shape. The young master shifts position, preparing to turn one execution into a larger hunt. He announces that he has no intention of ending the night there, keeping the room under his control. Pleased with how efficiently the first job was handled, he promises to pay well for whatever comes next. He even flips out another platinum coin, emphasizing that his generosity is excessive but deliberate. Then he reconsiders Sven's warning and starts thinking bigger. Looking at the corpse, he admits the former captain was right that challenging the Empire's most wanted criminals is dangerous. But he turns that danger into incentive, declaring that from this moment everyone will be desperate to find those targets. He sets the new bounty at 1 platinum coin for each head. To make the hunt even more tempting, he adds a bonus for bringing them in alive. The listeners exchange uneasy looks as the scale of the offer sinks in. Unease quickly gives way to fervor, and the crowd erupts in praise for the young master and House Valdek. As people start shouting plans to search the surrounding mountains, he effectively mobilizes the entire population into his manhunt. A platinum coin spins across the table like the signal that has set the whole machine in motion. Watching it, the young master smiles with predatory satisfaction at how easily money has turned fear into obedience. The scene shifts away from the tavern's frenzy into a quieter night. Elsewhere, a stern man sits alone by a window, waiting in tense silence. His expression shows controlled concern, as if he already expects trouble to reach them soon. At dawn, a subordinate addresses Sir Raymond and asks one favor before they leave for their hideout. He grips a bag tightly, signaling readiness and resolve despite the uncertainty ahead. Sir Raymond answers that the man should stay close and simply observe, no matter what anyone says or does. A man realizes the third young master has stopped trying to win people over honestly, and has chosen a darker way to influence those who ignore his elder brother. The blonde young master makes his intent plain. Instead of blood, he will use wealth sweet enough to corrupt them from within. That understanding settles heavily as the consequences of the scheme begin to come into focus. What first looked like simple bribery is recognized as a deliberate effort to turn greed itself into a weapon. Because these people abandoned trust so easily, the trap was built so they could be made to betray their own side at any time. Knowing that, the third young master maneuvered them into destroying the source of trouble with their own hands. He dangled a temptation so overwhelming that the mob rushed after it exactly as he intended. Watching the outcome, the observer admits the third young master is far more formidable than expected. He judges the method brutal and unsophisticated on the surface. Yet beneath that roughness, he sees a plan executed with frightening precision. The bait that drove the bloodshed lies scattered among pools of blood, proving how cheaply lives were bought. In the forest after the massacre, one survivor remains standing among the bodies, clutching the spoils of the slaughter. Though badly wounded and barely able to breathe, the survivor forces himself onward with desperate endurance. He tightens his grip on the money bag as if holding it means he has survived for something. Believing the danger has finally passed, he dares to hope the nightmare is over. He collapses to the ground beside the dead, exhausted but still alive. Relief turns into triumph as he convinces himself he has actually made it through. His fear gives way to manic pride, and he celebrates surviving what killed everyone else. He mocks the fallen captain and boasts that he was never foolish enough to die for nothing. Still clutching the bag, he sneers that anyone doomed to die so easily should have taken a coin and fled. His contempt sharpens as he blames the others for being blinded by greed without understanding their place. That arrogance ends instantly when a silent figure appears behind him and seizes control of the moment. Under the cold moon, the forest grows still as his brief victory turns into a death sentence. The newcomer agrees with his insult, but only while pinning him in place with a blade at his throat. The survivor drops his bravado and begs to be spared, offering half the money to a man he hopes has no personal reason to kill him. He pleads for nothing but his life, only to hear at once that mercy is not on offer. The killer reveals he has never had any taste for soft-hearted compromises. Realizing he chose the worst possible person to bargain with, the survivor bitterly accepts that his luck was never going to save him. The execution is swift, leaving the forest as littered with corpses as before. The last greedy survivor falls dead beside the bag he tried so hard to protect. The killer stands over the body without hesitation, calm and unreadable after finishing the cleanup. The dead man's final expression freezes in defeat, his greed having bought him nothing. The killer takes the money bag from the corpse, reclaiming the bait now that it has served its purpose. The moonlit silence closes over the scene, marking the end of the night's bloodletting. With the bag in hand, the man walks away through the forest, leaving the dead behind. He departs without looking back, as if this grim task was only one step in a larger design. Later, the recovered coins are laid out again, showing that the same wealth used to provoke betrayal has been brought back intact. Someone reaches for one of the coins, drawing attention to the instrument that made the whole scheme possible. The blonde young master stands nearby in quiet control, now receiving the results of his plan. He reflects that he owes Hugo a great deal, acknowledging the man who carried out the dirtiest part of the operation. By daylight at the fortress, word arrives and draws the guards' attention upward. A message is brought before the men below while others watch from the battlements, signaling an official decision from above. The authority behind the order looks down from the wall, making clear this is a formal transfer of power. The response from above is simple approval, confirming the arrangement will proceed. The family head tells the blonde young master that if his childish greed had truly damaged matters, he would have been punished severely, but that will not be necessary. Instead, command of the mercenaries is handed over to him from this point on, and he accepts the order with outward obedience toward his brother. Behind that respectful posture, he absorbs the moment in silence, aware that he has finally gained recognition. One night notes with surprise that the day has come when the young master is being openly acknowledged. He reasons that the family now considers the benefit of using the blonde candidate's strength greater than the cost of sharing credit with him. Even so, the political reality remains that however capable he may be as a candidate for patriarch, his position is still contested. The conflict has reached a point where a single loss could overturn everything for him at once. That is why the current mercenary crisis and the report behind it strike him as deeply inconsistent. On the castle wall, Lucian is summoned to account for the report he delivered the previous night. The questioning begins from a simple premise. Hunter and prey do not naturally trade places or coexist. In the wild, humans and demons survive through constant predation, and that cycle is not supposed to break. The reality of that world is brutal enough to prove the point, with monsters killing and feeding without hesitation. So Lucian is pressed on the claim that liberated bastards are hiding in Knoll and Kobold territory, even though those two species are supposedly living together. The blonde interrogator bluntly asks whether the report can really be trusted in full. The challenge lands heavily, forcing Lucian to measure his answer carefully. Lucian insists the report was verified and argues that the contradiction has a practical explanation. He explains that gnolls and kobolds rely heavily on smell, so magic tools or relics could have hidden the rebels and let them pass without major losses. He adds that unusual species mixing can happen during monster migrations, making the situation rare but not impossible. Lucian immediately sees the flaw in that defense, because unlike orcs and goblins, gnolls and kobolds do not form stable hierarchies together. Those two species belong to entirely different food chains and would normally kill each other on sight. To him, their relationship is less alliance than predator and helpless victim, making shared confinement impossible. That contradiction pushes him toward a more dangerous explanation. He asks whether mages may be involved in the rebellion. The suggestion darkens the exchange at once, because everyone understands what that would imply. Magic is treated as a forbidden force that violates natural order and forcibly bends reality itself. Only a tiny number can even perceive or wield it, yet a skilled mage can devastate a fortress alone. Its users are therefore feared as walking disasters rather than ordinary enemies. That fear comes from history, since 300 years earlier the mages rebelled and nearly destroyed the Empire before being barely put down. Since then, the Empire has branded all mages traitors and resolved to erase anything connected to them without mercy. Lucian is sharply warned not to throw around such speculation, because invoking mages could trigger a catastrophe beyond his control. With the Empire already unstable, he is reminded that even one reckless claim could ignite a wider disaster. His brother stresses that Lucian's authority extends only to managing mercenaries during emergencies, nothing more. He orders Lucian to focus on defending the castle and leave any larger consequences to House Valdec. The warning ends as a command for obedience, making clear that this is not a debate. Lucian holds his brother's gaze and understands the line he is being forced not to cross. Even so, his eyes show that he has not abandoned his suspicion. He backs down outwardly, apologizing and blaming his overreach on inexperience and eagerness during his first deployment. His brother accepts the retreat at face value and turns the conversation back to hunting down the mercenaries. But Lucian's expression hardens, revealing that he is still thinking past the official explanation. Elsewhere, night settles over a foggy forest where something hidden approaches through the dark. A pack of demonic beasts gathers in the trees, their glowing eyes marking the path of an unseen visitor. Instead of attacking, the monsters close in with unnatural restraint, as if they had been tamed. At the center stands a cloaked man, calm among predators that should have torn him apart. The beasts part around him, confirming that he commands rather than fears them. Though he admits the place still unnerves him, he continues deeper into the rendezvous. Using a coded phrase and a token, he requests an audience with the second squad leader, Sharon, on behalf of a comrade. The forest answers with silence and thickening mist before another figure finally emerges. Sharon appears and questions why he was summoned so late, even with their cause supposedly close to success. The messenger answers that he came precisely because that cause is starting to collapse. Sharon demands a clear explanation. The messenger blames Lucian, newly assigned to House Valdec, for crushing the mercenaries' sabotage in a single night and tightening security. Because of Lucian, reconnaissance has become difficult, intelligence is drying up, and even the fourth squad has reportedly been wiped out. He warns that Lucian is far too capable to dismiss as an ordinary child. On that basis, he urges Sharon to revise their plan and proceed far more carefully. He then raises an even more troubling concern. Someone is considering joining forces with the very man controlling those demonic beasts. And if that person can use magic to subdue even low-grade demons, the messenger concludes he is too dangerous to trust. A hooded conspirator admits he distrusts his allies as much as his comrade does, but insists that with House Valdec's enemies arriving, their own forces alone cannot achieve the objective. The hidden faction's sinister power and surveillance are invoked, suggesting they rely on unnatural means rather than trust. He argues that since their paths are now tied together, both sides have no choice but to exploit one another for the moment. When his comrade questions him, he presses that this dependence is exactly why their plan must not be altered. He reveals the real advantage of the situation. They can wipe out House Valdec's promising young heirs while advancing their larger scheme. Before they can settle it, the speaker senses an intruder and realizes the meeting was being watched after all. The unseen observer confirms the suspicion, confident that their instinct for danger never fails. The conspirators immediately understand that someone has penetrated their defenses and followed them deep into this hidden place. One of them angrily demands that the spy stop hiding and face them. A masked blonde youth calmly reveals himself and makes clear that he came here on purpose, not as prey but with his own score to settle. He steps into the open and declares that he has business with these men as well. With killing intent rising around him, he decides he cannot afford to hold back against opponents like these. He readies his blade and resolves to end the encounter quickly and cleanly. For a brief instant, the forest falls still before the clash begins. The youth launches first, closing the distance before the swordsman can fully control the exchange. The hooded fighter swings hard, but the attack fails to pin the intruder down. The blonde assassin slips past the strike with superior speed and turns the opening into a counterattack. He ducks low under the follow-up and cuts into the man's leg, breaking his footing. Without pausing, he rises through the guard and drives a second slash up the man's body. Blood bursts from the wound as the swordsman is cut badly in an instant. The injured man is stunned by how completely he has been outmatched. Even wounded, he tries to recover his stance and keep his weapon between himself and the attacker. He realizes too late that the youth is already moving again from his blind side. Desperate, he commits to one last heavy strike to crush the smaller fighter before he can finish him. The blonde youth remains unnervingly composed, reading the attack instead of flinching from it. His predatory focus sharpens, revealing a far more dangerous nature beneath his calm exterior. He shifts his grip and commits fully to the kill. In a burst of intersecting slashes, he carves through the man's offense and body at the same time. The swordsman's confidence collapses as he understands he is being cut down. The force of the finishing blow tears through the night, scattering blood and debris into the trees. The victim falls, his defeat abrupt and absolute. The youth completes the motion with cold precision, having ended the fight almost effortlessly. When the dust settles, he stands over the corpse, making it clear that the infiltrator has become the executioner. The remaining conspirator is shaken that their strongest squad leader is being overwhelmed so easily. He can barely accept what he is seeing and begins to wonder who this masked youth really is. The blonde fighter steadies his breath, inwardly acknowledging that coming alone would alarm everyone who knew. Still, he believes this risk was necessary, even as he stands in fresh blood. He reflects that real combat is exactly what he needed to sharpen himself for what lies ahead. With danger closing in on all sides, he refuses to keep pretending to be harmless nobility. The last hooded man hesitates, forced onto the defensive by the youth's overwhelming presence. Trying to regain control, the conspirator mocks him as a hound raised by House Valdek and asks whether one fighter can really stop their cause. The youth dismisses any hope of extracting information from him and openly ridicules the idea that their cause is noble. He warns that the conspirators understand nothing about the catastrophe they are helping unleash, one that could consume the entire land. When the man demands an explanation, the youth names the coming disaster plainly. Hell is about to break loose in Bornholm. He explains that once the Empire learns mages still exist, it will send its army and use extermination as a pretext, because imperial hatred of mages runs deeper than they realize. So even if the conspirators succeed, they will only be marching themselves toward ruin. He adds that the hidden collaborator manipulating them from the shadows will erase them as soon as they outlive their usefulness. That mastermind, he says, is a being feared even by mages, and the conspirators are nothing but prey to it. The hooded man rejects the warning as smooth deception, though he admits he has figured out that a mage is involved. But he insists they are not servants of the Empire, and claims they allied with a mage only to win liberation, not because they have submitted to inhuman masters. A masked blonde mage breaks the silence by dismissing reality itself as a flimsy construct and reducing magic to a crude tool. Facing a hooded opponent in a forest full of watching demonic eyes, he argues that demon beasts on this scale cannot be controlled by ordinary means and that magic tied to life has strict limits. The hooded man presses him to think through the implication, insisting that if a simple magical solution existed, the bloodshed would never have reached this point. He turns the accusation back on the mage and demands to know why so many people had to die first. His point sharpens into a revelation. All of this could have been prevented if they had found one particular mage sooner. He claims that man approached the blonde first, pretending their goals aligned and offering to share his power. According to him, the offer was bait meant to seduce someone desperate for strength. He reveals the truth more bluntly. The blonde was selected as a disposable pawn by a monstrous force that treats people like pieces on a board. The hooded man adds that this was not personal. The blonde was simply the latest convenient choice. The weight of that realization hits, and the confrontation shifts from hostility to collapse. Dropping to his knees, the hooded man grasps that they may have been manipulated from the very beginning. The blonde demands to know why an enemy would reveal all this, and the answer is that disaster in Bornholm is otherwise inevitable. He starts to lower the cloth hiding his face, signaling that he is done speaking as a stranger. The kneeling man is stunned by what he sees. The blonde explains that he is intervening because the current outcome is unacceptable to him. He offers a choice: keep serving as a tool and vanish in the coming ruin, or cooperate with him to stop the catastrophe about to strike Bornholm. The hooded man looks up, forced to seriously consider the offer. The scene ends with the two figures disappearing into the night, leaving the decision hanging over the forest. Later, inside a manor, the blonde stands alone at a window, already acting on what he learned. He grips a rolled document, prepared to present his conclusion. Turning to his allies, he announces that he has uncovered the truth behind the entire incident. He identifies the real enemy behind the Imperial Liberation Front and declares that they are going to catch him. The older men demand specifics, pressing him to explain what he means by a real enemy. He recalls the suspicious request that sent him after an artifact while the others were occupied with kobolds, the clue that first exposed the scheme. His companions realize he had effectively been ordered to infiltrate the Liberation Front's hiding place alone and lash out at how recklessly he was used. Their anger makes clear that they see his independent move as dangerously impulsive, even if it produced results. They insist he could have delegated the task or hired others instead of risking himself. While he brushes off the scolding, he answers that he needed direct confirmation with his own eyes and ears before accusing anyone. He lays out the chain of events, linking the unnatural monster migration, the rebellion in fortress-like Bornholm, and the hidden hand behind both. At last he states that he has reached the core truth. The culprit is Jude Disker, a dark mage who can wield bizarre magic by fusing two powers and who has been using the conflict to gather the despair needed for something far worse. The blonde concludes that even the Liberation Front are merely expendable pawns in Jude's larger design. Realizing the scale of the threat, the men agree that if they do not stop it now, Bornholm will become the site of a massacre, so they will move independently from this point on. The blonde accepts that this course may force him to oppose Tristan, his own brother, but he is resolved to proceed anyway. Elsewhere that night, a robed man stands alone in the mist as if waiting for fate to reveal itself. He senses a change in the air and watches the sky with growing unease. Noticing a star brightening instead of fading, he realizes Bornholm's destined collapse is no longer unfolding as expected. He admits that if not for his contract with Jude, he would have fled long ago, and he reaches for a hidden talisman as anxiety sets in. He regrets ever wagering on this plan, sensing that the situation has slipped beyond control. His fear turns practical as he wonders whether the whole arrangement has become too dangerous to survive. Panicking, he curses his involvement with the Liberation Alliance and sees no clean way out. He bitterly notes that the rebels do not even understand they made a pact with a black mage. To them, he thinks, all mages must seem interchangeable, which is why they failed to grasp the danger. But he knows black mages stand closest to pure evil, and that truth hangs over a remote house in the forest. From inside comes a desperate memory or echo of a family in crisis, with children begging for water and warmth as one brother slips toward unconsciousness. The pleas escalate into terror as someone outside the window is begged to spare the sick brother instead. Hands slam against the glass from outside, turning the fear into immediate physical threat. Blood smears across the window as the victim weakly calls for his older sister to run. Inside the room, someone bolts into motion in a frantic attempt to act before it is too late. A young woman, crying and horrified, turns toward the danger as the nightmare closes in. A monstrous vision opens the tale, signaling a nightmare born from blood and savagery. In the aftermath, a sinister man steps forward as if he already owns the darkness around him. A limp hand on the floor reveals that his work has left victims behind. He judges the harvested purity insufficient, lamenting that even after gathering every child in the mountain village, the result is still too small. The man pauses in cold satisfaction, already thinking beyond the massacre. Red power coils around him as he revels in the success of his grim experiment. He convinces himself that this atrocity is only a necessary step toward a greater goal. Though his body strains under the process, he insists the end is close. With fanatic certainty, he declares this the beginning of an upheaval that will shake the world itself. The scene shifts to the Holian border front, where a military camp waits under calm skies before the storm. At the heart of the camp, command gathers inside the main tent. An aide reports that the remaining Valdec knights from Bornholm Fortress have departed and will join the main force in 3 days. He adds that the third young master has been buying large numbers of artifacts used to track gnolls and kobolds. The aide further reveals that the prince is independently contacting mercenary captains and assembling a force far beyond what public order would require. The commander immediately concludes that the third son has uncovered the hidden truth. Rather than alarmed, he notes with a faint smile that the prince has finally reached this stage. He remains confident, believing such initiative is only natural for a Valdec and that the prince will not return empty-handed. He orders his men not to interfere, deciding that the prince's struggle will only make him more useful as a foundation for their cause. When asked whether he still doubts the operation, the aide admits he cannot yet understand the commander's true intentions. The commander explains that the rebellion made no sense by strength alone, but investigation revealed abnormal monster activity, reckless preparations for total war, and clear ties to mages. He confirms that the Liberation Alliance has joined hands with mages and plans to strike the fortress while it is undermanned. The aide cannot reconcile that danger with the commander's choice to launch an all-out attack on the rebel main force instead of prioritizing defense. He warns that abandoning the fortress will turn it into a living hell. The commander calls for his aid, forcing him to face the weight of that warning. He answers with chilling indifference, asking why that outcome should matter. The aide is stunned by the commander's lack of concern. Realizing he has overstepped, the aide hurriedly begs forgiveness. The commander rises, taking control of the room and the conversation. He says the aide's reasoning is sound and even logical. Then he reveals the premise behind his cruelty. Such concerns only matter if Bornholm is still worth protecting. He turns the discussion to Bornholm itself, as though judging its fate from above. Bornholm, he explains, is rich in resources, vital for maritime trade, and strategically valuable as a border region. Because of that importance, the Empire poured protection and resources into it, allowing the territory to prosper for years. That long prosperity built a proud and wealthy stronghold. But instead of loyalty, comfort bred greed, and the local lords formed a conspiracy to protect their own interests. To him, Bornholm's people have simply lived in peace for far too long. He argues that conspiracy is the seed of independence, and that these lords are no different from rebels gnawing at the empire from within. So he decides the territory must be purged. He calls the coming disaster the perfect chance to shackle both the people of the territory and the dispossessed lords. The aide protests that such a plan will inevitably create massive casualties. The commander accepts that bloodshed without hesitation, insisting it is required for the greater cause. He gives this deliberate slaughter a righteous name, and calls it purification. Elsewhere, a watcher stands above Bornholm at sunset, observing the land that others are preparing to sacrifice. Hidden agents move through the woods toward him in answer to a summons. Their approach remains silent and disciplined, suggesting a covert network already in motion. A group of masked operatives gathers before the man on the cliff. Their leader reports that the mission is complete, that the information was delivered to Raymond of the Black Lions, and that their own involvement was concealed. The man praises them, satisfied that the message has been planted where it will do the most damage. He reflects that the choices of the two young masters now stand in direct opposition. One of them has accepted bloodshed as a tool. The other has refused to accept that price. His subordinates remind him that they serve as the prince's eyes and ears and are not supposed to interfere in the struggle between the two sons. He listens, but his gaze shows he has already chosen where his sympathies lie. He admits that while he should remain neutral, He sees no harm in quietly cheering for one side. The story then rewinds to a few days before Lucian was dispatched to Bornholm. Inside the palace, a secret conversation begins under moonlit windows. Someone important has come to receive a confidential report. Edwin, chief of the GoldenEye intelligence organization, reports that Lucian has indeed been selected for the Bornholm assignment, just as predicted. He notes that the second and fourth sons had little to gain from such a dangerous post. But the third son, riding strong momentum, would naturally seize it to strengthen his claim in the succession struggle. Edwin worries that once the deeper truth emerges, Lucian may be crushed, since controlling mercenaries is only the surface problem. The prince answers that if Lucian cannot see beyond orders and think for himself, he will become nothing more than Tristan's puppet. And if that happens, he says, Lucian deserves to fall behind in the race for succession. He makes clear that he has never prepared only easy victories for his children. Edwin is shaken, realizing how harshly the prince is willing to test his own sons. Still, the prince leaves open one path to favor. If Lucian reads the situation and chooses a road different from Tristan's by his own will, then Edwin is ordered to clear obstacles from Lucian's path. A portrait of a regal woman watches over the room, hinting at an older bond behind the prince's decision. The prince's expression softens with memory rather than politics. He reveals that he is acting this way for the sake of that woman, as her old friend. Back in the present, the sunset over Bornholm feels like the calm before a reckoning. Edwin remains alone on the cliff, overseeing events from a distance. His agents accept the new orders without hesitation. Soon after, soldiers ride out from the fortress as the planned redeployment begins. The military strength of Bornholm drains away toward the front, leaving the territory exposed. Within the fortress, armed locals and mercenaries move through the gates, foreshadowing unrest inside the walls. Ordinary people cling to one another, already sensing danger they cannot stop. A mother holds her child close, embodying the innocent lives that will pay for the ambitions of nobles and princes. From above, hidden observers watch the fortress as if measuring the moment to act. Inside, Lucian is told that nearly all soldiers are heading to the front, confirming the worst-case scenario he feared. The news hardens his resolve and anger at once. He explains that he passed everything he learned about the Liberation Alliance and his new findings to Tristan and tried to stop the operation. But Tristan dismissed the warning as nothing more than a rebel diversion. Lucian realizes with growing dread what that dismissal truly means. Tristan's stubbornness convinces him that this was never ignorance at all. He concludes that Tristan already knows the full truth and actually wants Bornholm to fall. In Lucian's eyes, Tristan is sacrificing the territory for his own warped vision of order and balance. Even after everything Lucian has already endured, this betrayal still shocks him. He finally understands that to men like Tristan, countless deaths are reduced to numbers, and that realization ends his hesitation. Beside him, his scarred ally senses that Lucian has made up his mind. Lucian orders his people to move that very night according to plan. He frames the mission simply, telling them they are hunting beasts rather than men. The operation begins in the great forest under cover of darkness. A lonely tower rises through the mist, marking the hidden place they are targeting. 2 cloaked guards patrol the woods around the site, unaware they are being watched. They continue their rounds, trusting the forest and secrecy to protect them. Their vigilance is casual, more bored than alert. One guard complains that in a few more days he can finally leave this miserable post and stop babysitting the mage. The other grumbles about the endless screams from inside and the constant demands for costly materials, making clear that something horrific is being conducted there. A sudden sound interrupts their complaints. One guard, disgusted by the stench of blood clinging to the old mage, concludes the man must have slaughtered hundreds. His companion warns him to be careful, reminding him that the entire operation depends on the mages. He explains that while the main force occupies the allied army, the mages must use magic to breach the castle and seize the lord, which is their only leverage against the empire. For that reason, they must guard this place flawlessly. He adds that they both witnessed enough to know how dangerous those mages truly are, from monster control to devastating skyfall magic. Even so, he admits he hates them too, though he still submits to the same excuse of a greater cause. Before the guards can settle, a hidden attacker drops into position above them. One of the guards is suddenly snared and strangled, panic overtaking him before he can cry out properly. Terror floods his eyes as death closes in silently. Lucian is revealed as the assassin, descending by rope with ruthless precision. He lands without hesitation, already moving to finish the ambush. The second guard senses something is wrong a moment too late. When he turns to identify the noise, Lucian is already at his throat with a blade. Shock freezes the guard as he realizes he has been completely outplayed. A second strike follows instantly, cutting down any chance of resistance. The surviving guard can only stare in horror as the ambush collapses around him. Above them, crows wheel through a blood-red sky, as if the forest itself acknowledges the kill. Lucian's team emerges from the shadows to secure the area after the silent takedown. The guards' earlier complaint about noisy crows becomes grim irony as their patrol ends in silence. The red omen intensifies, signaling that the hunt has truly begun. A crow flares against the crimson sky like a witness to the coming purge. The bodies lie discarded on the forest floor as Lucian advances past them without looking back. He walks deeper into the red-lit darkness, committed to cutting out the source of the atrocity himself. Blood on his face and resolve in his eyes, Lucian steps fully into the role of executioner against the monsters hiding behind power.